Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Deku Had Radioactive Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. There's so much sound, too much sound, voices, thoughts, both of them overlapping and mingling. He can't tell them apart. Even though they all so different, it all sounds the same. His hands are clamped over his ears. His sunglasses slip down to the tip of his nose, doing nothing to block out the mass of bodies outside the building. He knows it's the media, but knowing doesn't change a thing. Where's Midoriya? Is that Ida? Or maybe it's Uraraka. I think he's under the table. No, that was Uraraka, wasn't it? Shinsu blinked twice, letting those words settle in before he bent down and looked under the table. Midoriya, are you all right? Izuku just snarled, baring his teeth against the phantom pains of scalpels on his skin. He didn't know who was there, he just wanted them gone. As if he could see his friend's meaning in the sound, Shinsu straightened back up immediately. I think I should go get Aizawa-sensei. Footsteps signaled someone leaving, and Izuku numbly noted it was Shinsu. The part of him not wholly overrun by panic was busy berating himself for snarling at his friend like some sort of wild animal. That panic overtook him again, and he growled when he saw someone lean down to look under the table, and when a hand reached towards him, he lashed out, slapping at the hand and ignoring the stream of words being said. He tried to punch me. Ida pulled his hand back quickly, surprise painted across his face. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed. No, he hadn't. It was only a slap. It's 'cause you're grabbing at him. Uraraka kneeled down, watching Midoriya with concern. She didn't reach towards him, making sure Midoriya could see that her hands were settled on her lap. Midoriya, Shinsu went to get Aizawa-sensei. Is that all right? She frowned, eyebrows drawing together in concern. Do you want us to leave once he gets here? Forcing the panic back by a centimeter, Izuku nodded once. My cousin used to get this sometimes. Overwhelming sensory overlap. It was more than that, but he couldn't explain it. Izuku nodded once more, the moment of calm broken again as he heard the approaching thoughts of Shinsu and Aizawa. I hope he's okay. So, the problem child had a panic attack. I should have expected something like this to happen. Shinsu huffed, out of breath and red-faced from running to the classroom and back in such a short time. I'm back. He's still under the table. He tried to punch me. Ada was still stuck on that, watching the table cautiously as he backed away. We should go. Uraraka worried her lip, looking everywhere except the table Izuku was crouched under. He wouldn't want us to see him like this. Aizawa waved the three teenagers away, subtly directing them to the exit. You three get to class, I'll handle this. Hesitantly, Uraraka agreed. Okay, come on, Midoriya, you can get through this. Aizawa waited for the three students to leave before he kneeled down, watching as Midoriya twitched and made nonsensical sounds under his breath. Kid, damn it. Aizawa snapped his fingers, getting no response. Hey, you in there. Don't be like this, kid. Aizawa sighed before reaching out a hand. Izuku's eyes rolled back, and he jolted to his feet, sending the table flying back as it slammed into his back as he stood. He wasn't here. He was there, with them, trapped in the hospital, locked in the operation theater. Where is he? Even though he's not sure where he is, it doesn't mean he'll go down without a fight. A snarl curling his lip and his fists raised. Izuku whipped around, searching the room before locking on the source of the thoughts. Keep your hand away from me before I rip it off. His words were slurred, but his stutter thankfully stayed away, seeming to know it would weaken his threat. Damn, kid. Aizawa slowly stood, raising an eyebrow at the murderous intent flowing off the kid like ocean waves. Shinsu had said it looked like a panic attack, but maybe it was more than that. Izuku slapped a hand over his mouth as his stomach lurched. Spinning on his heel, he scrambled towards the closest trash can, gripping the sides as he emptied his stomach contents. Kid, you all right? Aizawa took a half step forward, stopping himself before he could go any further. Yes, he was worried, but he knew better than to approach a possibly dangerous situation. The kid was in the middle of some sort of fit and had already lashed out violently more than once. He'd rather not get punched. Spitting a few times, unable to clear the taste of vomit and regurgitated medication from his mouth, Izuku's hands clenched on the rim of the trash can. His shoulders shook. The mass presence of the media was gone, and it left his head feeling all too empty. And with his head empty and mind blank, his darkness came rushing back. It's hot. Too hot. Izuku was running on autopilot, and he pulled off his blazer, tossing it to the side before all but yanking his uniform shirt open and off. He pushed up the sleeves of his undershirt, feeling his scarred skin cool by degrees. He had to get out of here. He turns to run, his escape blocked by the loops of Eraserhead's captured tool. He backed up, turning again to meet another blocked exit. Come on, kid, you're safe here. Let me. Coming back to himself, Izuku snapped, words tumbling out. Shut up, or I'm going to seal you in an oil drum and ship you to Australia. Izuku's eye twitched as he thought that through. Wait, can't send you to Australia. Thornridge has an outpost there. Canada. He jumped over the loop of capture tool, grabbing onto it as he did and yanking it towards him, hoping to pull its user off balance. I'll never go back, he hissed, as he continued to pull, slowly dragging Eraserhead towards him even as the hero leaned back and dug his heels in. But he didn't see Eraserhead. He didn't see his teacher, worried about his student. He just saw another obstacle. Damn it, kid. Aizawa had to admit he was impressed, even as he was pulled across the floor. This kid had strength enhancement, but most people didn't think of using it the way he did, enhancing dodges and leaps, using it to control the playing field. But right now, it was just annoying. Kid needs help, and he's running away from it. Another yank at his capture tool pulls him out of his thoughts. Aizawa sighed, releasing his grip on the tool and letting it fly from his hands, the kid falling on his ass in surprise. And what the hell was he talking about? Thornridge had been shut down years ago, hadn't it? And how did a kid even know about the defunct counterintelligence agency? Oh come on, Aizawa muttered when Midoriya launched himself back to his feet and picked up a chair, swinging it wildly. He was going to have to call in some backup, wasn't he? With a sigh, he pulled out his phone, pressing speed dial for who he hoped would make this end quickly. He barked into the phone, snatching up his capture tool in the same motion. Cafeteria. Some sort of panic attack gone wrong. Get here now. For 2 minutes, Aizawa had to alternate between defense and trapping, dodging chairs and tables in his effort to keep the kid inside. Really, Midoriya was determined, even though he had no clue what was going on. The hell is going on here? Huh. Midnight ducked just in time to dodge a chair that flew at her in an almost slow arc. Not an attack, but a warning. Come close, and the next one will hit, sort of warning. Kid's having some sort of breakdown. Need you to knock him out. At that, Izuku stood up straighter, adjusting his grip on his newly acquired chair, holding it like some sort of deranged lion tamer. I'll never go back, he shouted, sunglasses falling from his face as he threw the chair forward, using as a distraction while lunging to the side and to the window. I won't be controlled. He ran hard, arms crossed in front of his face, and his head ducked down. You'll never take me back to the hospital. Oh shit. Midnight watched with horrified eyes as the kid sprinted towards the window, determination rolling off him in waves. Izuku slammed into the shatterproof glass, cracking it. He backed up and rammed it with his shoulder, the crack spiderwebbing across the pane as he slammed it a third time. A wild look on his face. He dived through his new exit, not even noticing the loops of Eraserhead's capture tool snapping around him. Damn, this kid's heavy. Aizawa could feel bruises forming where his capture tool cut into his skin as he hauled the kid back up, leaning back so far he was nearly parallel to the floor. And the fact that the kid was thrashing like an animal in a trap wasn't really helping. Come on, he growled under his breath as he finally hauled the kid back in the window, wrapped up in the loops of the capture tool like a mummy. A struggling and angry mummy. Holding the fabric tight in his hands, Aizawa called out, now, Nimuri, dose him. A cloud of pink mist, already dissipating through the broken window, surrounded Midnight and the wrapped-up Midoriya. Snarls and hisses came from the kid for far longer than they should have before they slowly fade out into soft breathing. The kid still jerked and twitched in his sleep, hands and fists, still ready to fight. Fucking hell, Midnight stared down at the kid, taking in scars and half-closed black eyes that spoke of nausea. There was something not right about the kid. Unnatural. She looked away, her skin crawling. You want to tell me what that was about, Shouta? Aizawa shrugged, rubbing the deep striped bruises on his forearms. Your guess is as good as mine. Whoever Midoriya had thought they were, he had been scared and ready to fight to his last breath. Izuku slowly surfaced back to consciousness, surrounding surface thoughts breaking over his mind before he forced them to the background. He kept his eyes closed, but watched his surroundings through the lids. He was in Recovery Girl's office, and he was alone. What had happened earlier? Things were sort of a blur after the alarm had been triggered. Had he gotten hurt? He remembered falling out the window. No, he had jumped out the window. He had broken the window after trying to throw a chair at Midnight and Eraserhead. What the hell had he been thinking? But that was just it. He hadn't been thinking. He had just lashed out, blind fear robbing him of his sensibilities and causing him to treat everyone as an enemy. Finally opening his eyes, Izuku tried to sit up, but his left arm was wrenched back by his wrist. What the? He tugged his arm, taking note of the padded restraint chaining him to the bed. Really? He asked incredulously. Oh, come on. He reached over with his free hand, feeling around the perfectly smooth cuff. No latch, no keyhole, no indentations, nothing. It must have been made around his wrist. But the chain, on the other hand, that was too easy to tear apart like tissue paper. The links wrenched open and dropped onto the bed. The cuff, though, maybe he could just wear the cuff like a high-fashion piece of jewelry. Should be fine. Freed from his restraints, Izuku slung his legs over the side of the bed, setting his feet on the floor. He was still wearing his shoes and his uniform. He couldn't have been here that long. With a glance to the clock, he blinked rapidly. An hour and a half after lunch. He had been here for an hour and a half. Izuku jumped up, taking a few quick strides to the door and finding it locked. Damn it, he muttered, turning away to look for another exit. The window, keeping an eye out for anyone who might interrupt him. Izuku pushed the bed he had been chained to until it was under the tiny window. Climbing up to stand on the mattress, Izuku checked the window. Small, but he could get through it. Locked, but only by a latch. Too easy. It was laughable. Pulling himself up and through the frame, he twisted around to drop down on all fours, only to be caught by a pair of familiar arms before he hit the ground. Izuku twisted around. He really hadn't expected All Might to be outside of the window. I told them you'd go out the window. Toshinori shook his head. And if anyone were looking close enough, they would see him roll his eyes. For some reason, they didn't believe me. Dad, Izuku squeaked, his black eyes wide with surprise. I damn it. A sudden stroke of clarity hit him. The thoughts from the crowd that didn't belong. He grabbed the fabric of All Might's cape, where it was attached at the shoulder of his suit. I have something important to tell you. But first, Izuku's vision wavered and spun, and a familiar gray haze swept over his brain. I'm going to pass out. He slumped over on All Might's shoulder, going limp in his surrogate father's arms. Oh, Toshinori only stared in shock, not expecting that to happen. Wow, he really did it. He adjusted Izuku to carry him easier before rounding the corner of the building. Leaning against the wall, watching him expectantly, were Eraserhead and Midnight, the two heroes openly staring as how All Might carried the kid. Toshinori wasn't a mind reader, but he swore that he could hear the questions they had for him. Breaking the awkward silence, Aizawa cleared his throat. Not moving from where he leaned, he asked, Did I hear what I think I heard? His hair fell in his eyes, hiding the look of curiosity. You sure did, Midnight answered, crossing her arms over her chest. She raised an eyebrow, wondering if her hypothesis was correct. He called you Dad. When All Might stayed quiet, Aizawa scuffed his boots on the ground, pulling up a few blades of grass. So, he muttered, the single word somehow carrying through the tenseness. He gestured to the kid passed out in the number one hero's arms. Is he yours? Toshinori shook his head, finally finding his voice again. He unconsciously adjusted his grip on his no. Not his, the kid, as if he was afraid someone would take him away. And no, he's not. His eyebrows drew together, memories of all the time he and Izuku had spent together. Just like a father and son should, he thought before stomping those ideas back down. But is it wrong to wish he was? I don't know your life, Nimiri began, before she shook her head, the glasses of her hero costume sliding down her nose. But man, you and Midoriya got real problems in it, don't you? Aizawa nodded once, leaning back against the wall with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He sure does. God damn it. Izuku didn't even need to look around to know he was back in Recovery Girl's office. At least he wasn't cuffed to the bed this time. Oh, you're awake. The voice is pitched highly, with an inhuman aspect to it, as if it's not meant to be heard or spoken. You gave us all quite a scare, young man. Izuku opened his eyes, catching a ball of fur and bone in his peripheral vision, thankful that the flat black of his eyes couldn't betray where he was looking. Izuku focused his gaze, trying to sort out what he was looking at before he realized what it was. He saw hundreds of them scurrying in pipes and underground tunnels every day. How could he not know? A rat. A giant rat. The biggest rat of all time. His thoughts spiraled, all keeping in the vein of rat. Huge rat, oh my god, the biggest rat. A rat whose fur looked super soft and whose thoughts scrambled and shuffled and completed and broke apart and came together faster than anything he had ever heard before. It was terrifying. How purely inhuman they were. And underneath it all, the rhythm, the near song that all rats seemed to live within. He had never heard it with words before. Haunting. Using his elbows, Izuku sat up, staring for a moment before it clicked. Principal Nezu and All Might were sitting in Recovery Girl's office with him, drinking tea and watching him sleep. Well, not watching him sleep, waiting for him to wake up. But same thing, right? Thanks. His voice was rough, his throat dry and scratchy. There was a glass of water on the table beside the bed, and he reached for it slowly, ignoring the burn of being watched. Taking a drink, he felt the tension in the room mount, then swiftly dissipate before he finished off the glass. Setting the glass back aside and clearing his throat, Izuku pushed his hair from his face, keeping his gaze low as he looked around for his sunglasses. Finding them folded on the pile of his uniform, blazer, and shirt, he left them there, unable to reach them without standing. As sorry for being so. He gestured vaguely with both hands, trying to convey the concept of throwing tables and chairs at his teachers. Sorry for being out of it. I had a bad night, he finished weakly. Hanging his head. No need to feel sorry, Nezu began, only to be interrupted by All Might. Are you all right? Did you get enough sleep? Is the cat back? Nezu turned in his seat, a curious look on his pointed face. Cat? Izuku sighed, rubbing at the dark circles under his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm fine, just nightmares. Toshinori frowned. You've been having nightmares. Why wouldn't you tell me? Not my nightmares, Izuku clarified, unable to raise his gaze from where his hands rested on his knees. My mother's. A part of himself was ashamed of how poorly he had dealt with it, turning to medications he knew would barely work in a desperate attempt to get sleep. He knew Inko couldn't control her nightmares. No one could. He just wished he didn't take the starring role as the villain, the monster, the twisted and vile thing creeping in the dark, doing sick and depraved things. All Might went quiet before he asked, far too softly, Midoriya, what did she do? If she hurt you, I don't know what I'd do. Izuku shook his head, trying to calm his mentor and father figure's thoughts. Nothing, it's nothing like that. Inko would never actively try to harm him, she couldn't. She might not seek out his presence, but she didn't hate him. But he did wonder sometimes. She was good at keeping her thoughts to herself. Too good at it for it to be a coincidence. Maybe she. No, as much as he wanted to assume to worst, he just couldn't. Things were getting better. At least, he thought things were getting better. What did she say? Toshinori tried and failed to smother the protective feeling in his chest. The thought of Izuku having to go through more trauma, having to live with someone who didn't treat him the way they should. He hated it. Maybe he could convince the kid to live with him. Would that be possible? Not wanting to get into all of that right now, Izuku tried to wave away All Might's concern. It's not her fault. She can't control her nightmares. I just wish it wasn't me that gives them to her. He shook his head, closing his eyes and trying to find memories of better times. He couldn't. I wish she didn't just see a monster every time she looks at me. She still thinks that. Toshinori narrowed his eyes, making a mental note to check in on his kid more often. I thought things had gotten better. Yeah, so did I, Izuku sighed, rubbing at the scars on his knuckles. He had nearly doubled the amount of scars there during the entrance exam, and Inko hadn't even asked about it. He needed to face the facts. Looks like I was just kidding myself. Again, he had wanted so badly for things to be getting better, A rustle of fur on fabric brought Izuku back to reality. He could see that Nezu had been trying his damnedest not to make a sound, to not interrupt the moment. So they went on with Project Bloodlines, didn't they? But it wasn't finished. He's incomplete. I know, Izuku muttered, almost missing the sudden raising of the fur on the back of the principal's neck. I'm unfinished. Izuku clenched a fist, eyebrows furrowed as he looked at the bones and tendons that were beyond his comprehension. The last 3 procedures, the replacement bone marrow, the last layers of artificial muscle, the control chip, he had escaped before they were placed. I never got them, he finished flatly, knowing those 4 words couldn't contain the volumes of meaning he had lived. So he can hear me. Intriguing. Am I? Izuku shook his head. Intriguing wasn't the word he would use. Creepy, weirdo, anxious, awkward, twitchy, paranoid, unsettling. Those were words he would use. A moment passed where none of them spoke. And before the silence could stretch on, Izuku interrupted it. School is over, isn't it? Nezu nodded, watching Izuku with curious eyes. Yes. Great. I'll have to take the late train, Izuku grumbled, before he jerked back upright, his back ramrod straight, worry coursing through his veins. The media. He remembered what he had heard, that thought that cut through all the rest like a scalpel. It was a villain attack. Yes, I assumed so, Nezu said calmly, the twitching of his ears giving away his worry. They're targeting All Might, Izuku continued, not missing the worry and interest that spiked through the thoughts of All Might and Nezu, respectively. I think it's going to be an attack on the school. Oh, if Nezu had eyebrows, he would raise them. He stabilized his cup of tea with both paws, wishing he had set it aside before Midoriya had woken up. And why is that? Izuku blinked slowly, dry eyes staring past Nezu and All Might. Because that's what I would do, he said flatly. Toshinori wheezed in surprise, blood coating his hand as he tried to stop the sound. What? Scratching harder at the scars on his knuckles, Izuku explained. If my directive was to take out a high-profile target, especially a hero, I would make sure there are as many civilians and children around as possible. Not for hostages or collateral damage, but to ensure the target is distracted and unable to run. He frowned, putting more thought into it. A villain attack on UA and All Might would have to be huge, wouldn't it? Keep them from being able to go on the offense by having a comrade threaten a kid. He would also make sure that it was in an urban area to keep the fight controlled, prevent them from fighting at full strength for fear of damages. Okay, sure, that's fine. Put a lot of thought into how to murder me. Cool, great, I'll sleep so well tonight. No, what? Izuku's eyebrows furrowed in confusion for a moment. Why would I plan? I'm not planning to kill you. Why would you think that? He gestured vaguely with both hands, trying to aid his explanation. Because it sure sounds like you've thought of it. Toshinori sounded almost disappointed, disapproving, dismayed, all of the above. Izuku couldn't help but feel uncomfortable, but he pressed on with it. Oh, no, that's just common sense, right? At least, that's what the specialists who worked alongside the doctors would say. He was just rational, right? That's what they all told him. Maybe it wasn't common sense. Maybe it was the training, the military education and re-education. Maybe most people didn't spend as much time as he did thinking over countermeasures for their own friends and family's quirks. Was this why Enko was so scared of him? Because she knew how his mind worked now. Was that why they had given him this fucked up body and mind? They had wanted him to lead the others in the project, almost as if he could sense that Izuku was spiraling. Nezu cleared his throat with a startlingly squeaky noise. Well, you're right, that is just common sense. If you're like me. Nezu's brow furrowed, the fur covering most evidence of the expression. Did you get any sense of when this attack might happen? No, but whoever it was, they were, Izuku frowned, trying to find the right words. Batshit crazy. Were those the right words? Okay, great. A crazy guy wants to kill me. Fan-fucking-tastic. I mean, you'd have to be crazy to think you could take out All Might, right? Izuku shook his head, but a thought made him freeze in place. Unless they actually think they could do it. Did they know about All Might's injury? Did they know he was losing time? Izuku's black eyes went wide. One person would know. Why Yagi-san? Do you think this might be tied to? Izuku lowered his voice to barely above a whisper and leaned in close. All for one. Could it be? They never found the body. No, I killed him. He can't be out there still. Then this injury, that battle, was it all for nothing? Shit. Toshinori hung his head, guilt and shame burning in his chest. He had thought he had been a killer for so long, had to live with thinking that, even if All for One was a monster he had fought to kill and had thought he had. But it looked like All for One had won that fight as well. I had thought, had hoped, all the rumors were just that. But if All for One is still out there, we're in for a real mess. Just the thought of All for One was enough to rekindle that hatred he thought the battle had burned away. If he fought him again, Toshinori didn't care what happened, as long as that bastard died. I care what happens, Izuku said, not missing the flinch of surprise All Might felt when he said that. If you get killed trying to fight a madman, Izuku didn't know what he would do. I'll kill you myself. And you know how to do it, too. Hey, well, okay, fair. Izuku shook his head, slowly sliding forward and off the bed, the mounting emotional tension in the room leaving him needing the security of his sunglasses. His hands shook as he picked up the black plastic, covering his eyes before he stumbled back to sit on the bed. Security is going to need to be upped. But it can't be obvious, he said, changing the subject in the hopes it would stop the panicked thoughts of losing the closest thing he had to a father. A few extra teachers here and there. And as much as I hate machines, maybe some of the robots from the entrance exam wherever All Might is. Izuku grinned, the expression nothing but bared teeth and black sunglasses. Those things can be set to more dangerous levels, he asked, raising his eyebrows and hoping Nezu understood. Oh, he wants killbots. Nezu understood. Of course, power loaders should be delighted with such a request. Well, more horrified and crying, but yes, delighted. Izuku snorted. I know that it's a bunch of political nonsense that's going to keep you from being able to do more, but maybe he snapped his fingers searching for the word. GPS trackers. Oh, smart. Nezu would grin if he was able to. This kid had nothing to boost his intelligence, but here he was, planning like he had done this his whole life. And if the signal was lost at any point, converge on the location with full force. Exactly. Well, this is nerve-wracking and terrifying. And every negative emotion all at once. But I have to go. I'm supposed to be training Tagada today. Toshinori stood, making his way to the door, but he pulled Izuku into a hug that, for anyone else, would have been bone-crushing. Ruffling his hand through the kid's hair, Toshinori turned to leave. I'll see you tomorrow, all right. Izuku just nodded, not trusting himself with words right now. Once the door closed, Nezu scooted his chair closer, watching the child that reminds him so much of himself. Even through the thick black plastic of the sunglasses, he could feel the intensity of the kid's dry stare. But he still had a question, even though he knew Midoriya could just pluck it from his mind with no trace of doing so. Do you know what I am, Midoriya? Izuku takes a moment to answer, thinking over his words. He could just parrot back what Nezu knew, but that wasn't what he was asking, was it? A few decades ago, there was this drug that enhanced quirks. Before Trigger, before Jolt. They called it Jumpstart. But it had mutagenic effects, causing gigantism and other deformation. Most people didn't remember Jumpstart. But Izuku wasn't most people. It was before your freedom from the lab, wasn't it? Fascinating. You were the first, weren't you? Jumpstart had been a favored topic in the hospital, and Izuku could still remember the doctors and scientists talking about Subject Alpha, and now much the description made more sense for an animal than a human. He had never thought they might be talking about the principle of UA. Nezu blinked. You really know your stuff, don't you? So you know what I am, but what are you, Midoriya Izuku? I'm nobody, Izuku answered, standing off the bed and turning to the door. Picking up his uniform and backpack and putting on his shoes, Izuku nodded back to the watching principal. and I'd like to keep it that way for a little bit longer. As long as he could hide in the shadows. Certainly not forever, maybe not even for the rest of the year, but for as long as he could. The sun is heading down by the time Izuku unlocks the front door, but he's alone in the apartment. He needs to be alone right now. He's tired, not physically, but spiritually, crushed by emotional and mental exhaustion. Leaving his shoes at the door and his folded uniform and backpack on the couch, he sighs. All he wants to do is flop down on his bed, close his eyes and pretend the world doesn't exist. As he moves through the unnaturally cold living room and hallway, he stops before he can open his door, his fingers centimeters from the handle. In Ko's room, the door is open. She must not have closed it. Had she been in a hurry? Curiosity fueled by something Izuku doesn't understand pushes him forward, and he makes up his mind. She's always hiding things from him. Doesn't he deserve some answers? He pushes the door open, entering a room he hasn't been in for. He can't even remember. He hasn't been in here since the move. He had helped bring in boxes and hadn't set foot inside since then. The smell should be familiar, but it just feels cold, desolate and unfamiliar. He looks around, trying to figure out what drew him here. Turning around, something on the desk catches his attention. Paperwork is scrawled on the manila folder in his mother's handwriting, but something about it seems off, like it doesn't belong there. Stepping forward, he opened the folder and immediately stumbled backward. Staring back up at him is his own photograph, back when he was just a kid. He must have been only 7 in it. Even though mottled grays are all he can see, he can tell that his eyes still held color. He still had hopes and dreams back then. He was normal. Forcing himself to step back up, he turned the photograph over, only to feel like he should have stayed back when he read the next page. The header, then a mass of legalese. But what it boiled down to is simple. Project Bloodlines permissions. Parent signature, Midoriya Hasashi. The signature looked wrong somehow, as if it had been written too carefully, too slowly. Izuku's heart dropped when he saw the second signature and he understood what was wrong. Parent signature, Midoriya and Co. The two signatures were nearly identical, though one was more fluid than the other. One of them had to be a forgery, and since his father had left 2 years before the paperwork was signed, Inko had. She had signed him into the program without letting his dad know. She had put him through this, hoping he would get a quirk, even after she had let his dreams be crushed back when he was only 5. Did she care about him, or only about the possible quirk? Had she known what they planned for him? Did she care? Izuku's breathing was erratic, and he broke into a cold sweat. Had she ever cared? Taking the folder in hand, he turned to leave, but something else caught his eye. A box is hidden behind the desk, but the fact that it's hidden isn't what catches his attention. It's what's inside it. Letters, packages, hundreds of letters. From the way they're haphazardly thrown into the box, he can tell that Inko didn't want them. But why would she keep letters she didn't want? He set the folder back on the desk and kneeled down. And when he leans in closer, pulls back the flaps of the box, his heart all but stops in his chest. Every single letter is addressed to him. Not to his alias, not to his PO box in Hasu, but to him. His real name, his address. With shaking fingers, he picks up the one on top, dated only a few days ago, and he tears open the envelope. Izuku, I know you haven't responded to any of these, but I've got to try, right? I saw on the Hero School forums that you made it into UA. I'm so proud of you. I know, an old man like me still reads Hero forums. What a loser, yeah. Don't remind me, I wish I could be there to congratulate you in person, but your mother, she doesn't want me around. If you wonder why I keep writing, I never knew my own father, and I don't want you to have to live the way I did. With the doubt, the questions, I want you to know that I care, that I'm out here, and if you ever want to see me again, I'll be there waiting for you. You have someone who will always support you, not just Inko. I don't know how much she tells you about me, but I'm working at Hasu University now, teaching global quirk history. It's a great job, even if it is making my hair turn white. It's a little weird having all those kids calling me professor, but I'm getting used to it. Izuku dropped the letter, his chest hurting from some suppressed feeling. He dug down in the box, finding an older envelope, and he pulls out its letter. Hey Izuku, it's me, your dad, again. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I've said the same thing so many times, but I'm sorry. You're what, 8 now, and I haven't been there for any of it. I could have been, but it was all my own fault. I'm sorry. Another letter, even older, this one is water-stained, the paper wrinkled and bunched in places. He touched the paper lightly. It felt crisp with age and had darkened at the edges. From the date, it's only a few days after his father had left. He can almost feel the regret embedded in the paper fibers. Izuku, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never should have said that to you. I never should have thought it. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and that's okay. I know I'm a bad dad, and you don't have to write back. I'm so sorry. You're not a burden. You're my son, and I love you. You're not useless just because you're quirkless. You're amazing, you're brave, and you never even thought of giving up on being a hero. Izuku, I'm so sorry. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You're the reason I pushed myself to finish college, to find a better job. I just wanted to give you a better life, and I threw it all away. You're not a burden, Izuku. Please, never forget that. You can remember me as a bad dad, whatever you want, but always remember that you're amazing. You don't need a quirk to be a hero. Dad, Hisashi. Izuku dropped the letter into his lap, unable to move from where he was kneeling. All this time, his father had been apologizing, had been trying to keep in contact, and Inko had just never told him. Those letters are more effort than Inko had ever put into mending their relationship, and he had never known. He could have known his father. He could have spent all those years knowing that he was out there and that he cared. His chest hurts, a pain he's never felt before. It's icy, and it's as if it's carving out his heart. Despair. His shoulders heave with dry sobs, and he clamps a hand over his mouth as he blinks rapidly, the phantom pain of tears carving down his cheeks. It was the agony of what could have been. Izuku knows he shouldn't be on the streets this late, but he can't sleep, and the coffee in his hands isn't helping. After what he found, he needs something, he just doesn't know what. Answers. He needs answers to any question. Any question at all. He's desperate at this point. His world has been flipped off of its axis and revolves around a new sun. He just needs something to make sense again. The only mystery in this neighborhood is the cat. Ducking his head as the streetlights click on, he crosses the street, stopping outside the gate of the house across from the apartment complex. Keeping a wary eye on his surroundings, Izuku pushed open the gate and headed to the front door. The person inside was still awake. Their surface thoughts on an odd language randomly interrupted by Japanese. He caught a few words: Yakuza, conspiracy, town full of villains, and a troubling cat, between what was sounding more and more like Russian. This was irrational and frankly stupid, but he had to know the answer to the mystery of the cat. Something needed to be explained. With a glance behind him, Izuku knocked on the door, trying his best to not dent the metal. Okay, who has a metal door and is doing good things? Was this man a mobster? A Russian gangster? Z-Draft's fight? A dark shadow eclipsed all light from the house, a massive man with an impassive face looking down at Izuku. The man answering the door blinks, correcting himself. Oh, hello, Taichi Blyad. Izuku stared up at the man, marveling slightly at their sheer size before he cleared his throat. What's the deal with your cat? Toshka. Taking a moment to process Izuku's question, the man froze. Oh, behemoth. The man laughs, a knowing look in his eyes. I've been expecting you to come ask about him. The man stepped aside, letting the massive cat step past him and out the door. He's been watching you for a while, he said. And Izuku didn't know who he was talking to, and if he was talking about the cat or about him. The man closed the door once the cat was inside, and his thoughts moved away from the door, deeper into the house. They really didn't care what the two would do while he was gone. The cat, far too large and with familiar black eyes, climbed onto the high wall and stared down at him. A voice reverberated through Izuku's mind, shaking him to the core. Ah, the human spawnling. Izuku whipped his head around, searching for the source of the thoughts. Wah, was that you? The thoughts had obviously been directed to him, but he hadn't read them, they had passed through him. It can hear me. Intriguing. You can understand Japanese? Izuku asked, his mind racing. An animal with a quirk. Just what kind of quirk was it? Was it intelligence enhancing? But the cat's animalistic mind was almost impossible to search through, and Izuku just gave up, unable to make heads or tails of the nonsense. I can understand many things. Your human language is far too easy. The cat yawned widely, showing off too many razor-sharp teeth to be natural. What's your name? What is the point of a name? Once they called me Subject Zeta. That human calls me Behemoth, and I call myself nothing. I simply am. The cat narrowed its eyes, fixing Izuku with a quizzical expression. And what of you? They called me Subject 15. Izuku bit his lip. I call myself Izuku. Izuku. The cat gestured with a paw out to the city, then to the apartment complex behind them. And what do they call you? They call me Freak. His eyes slid shut when he thought about all the layers of lies. And she calls me Monster. But you are no monster. You and I, we know monsters. The cat seemed to sigh, and Izuku understood. Jumpstart. Project Bloodlines. Nedzu, the cat, himself. It still affected all of them. The cat's tail swished, and it settled back on its haunches. Humans call us things because they fear us. The cat narrowed its black eyes. You fear me? Yes, I did. Still do. The cat was terrifying. Its mind singular, different than a human, different than Nedzu, different than any other he had felt. Expansive and unnatural, like gazing into the abyss as it gazed into you. Fear is natural, healthy, but do not lose yourself to it. The cat stood, tapping Izuku's forehead with one massive paw. Your mother returns soon. We will speak again, Izuku. Izuku watched as the cat, something much less terrifying than he had once thought, silently dropped down from the wall and sauntered back to the front door of the house, leaning on it until it popped open. The door closed behind it, and Izuku could tell that the cat had simply kicked it closed with a back paw. An animal with a quirk had been living right under his nose, and he hadn't even noticed it. Part of him wanted to ask the cat if it wanted to meet Nezu, but the thought of a giant cat meeting a giant rat, probably not the best idea. He turned to leave, remembering what the cat had said. He could talk to the cat later. For now, his mother would be home soon, and they had a lot to talk about. Izuku was settled on the couch long before Inko opened the front door. There was only one thing on his mind now. The letters. The box had been carried into the living room, and he had read a few more of them before the overwhelming regret swept through him. He couldn't keep doing this. It was breaking him. Hasashi, his father, had been pouring his heart out on the page each and every time, and Izuku couldn't even remember the last time Inko had told him she loved him. Couldn't remember the last time she had thought it. When the door popped open, Izuku stared ahead of himself, unable to focus on a single point. "Inko, why don't you sit down? We need to talk." He gestured to the other end of the couch, hand trembling. Give me a minute." Inko passed him, heading into the kitchen with a bag full of groceries. Enough for a week. And that's it. She never bought more than that. Izuku didn't wait for Inko to sit before he asked, "When were you going to tell me that?" He tried to force himself to say Dad, but the word wouldn't come, reserved already for someone else. He started again. "Why didn't you tell me my father was writing?" "Oh." Inko exited the kitchen stiffly, sitting on the opposite end of the couch, hands clasped in her lap as she looked everywhere but at her son. "You found the letters." "I found everything," Izuku hissed, slamming his hand onto the folder on the table, splintering the wood underneath the lies. "How did you keep this from me?" "I thought if you knew, you would tell him," she said quietly, reaching for Izuku's hand, stroking her thumb over the layers of scars on his knuckles. "Tell him what?" "About your..." Inko looked away, pulling her hand back and biting her lip. "I was trying to protect you." "Who were you trying to protect, really?" Slowly, he turned to watch Inko from behind his dark lenses. "Me, or yourself?" he asked as if he didn't already know the answer to that question. She did all of this for herself. He used to think he understood his mother. But Inko was different. She still couldn't bring herself to care about the unnatural thing that wore her son's skin and used his voice like a toy. "I don't know who you are anymore," Inko began, wringing her hands. "Did you ever?" Izuku spat back, glaring from behind black lenses. His shoulders shook. Not with sobs, but with rage. His fingernails dug into the palm of his hand until thick gray blood began to ooze between his fingers. "You're being careless, Izuku." Inko sighed, her gaze flitting away from her son's hands and landing on his face. She looked away again. Her fingers twisted in the hem of her shirt, worrying the fabric as she continued. "You need to be more careful, okay? If you keep getting hurt like this, someone's going to find out and talk about your..." Inko lowered her voice, all but whispering now. "Your condition. Do you really care?" Izuku asked flatly, unable to hide the cringe at Inko's word choice. It wasn't a condition, there was nothing wrong with him. He just wished Inko could see that instead of just feeling sorry for him. She was the one who let this happen to him. She was the one who signed the paperwork and made him into a monster. Izuku's hands constricted into fists, his entire body shaking with barely withheld wrath. Inko looked at Izuku with a shocked expression undercut with guilt. Her fingers twisted her shirt faster as she looked away from Izuku once again. "Of course I care, you're my son." Izuku lowered his head, his hands clawing into the fabric of his pants. The words began spilling out of him. Things he had been thinking about ever since the two of them had started to try and repair their relationship. "For the last 2 years, you just didn't care. I know things are changing, but I don't need you to try and control every bit of my life." The words, "I don't need you to help me," went unsaid, but not unheard, and they hung there, like heavy smoke in the air, acrid and cloying. He kept his gaze on his knees, shoulders shaking as his throat felt as if he had swallowed a sharp, hot stone, and it was gouging its way down his throat. "What, Izuku? No." Inko gently took a hold of Izuku's hand once again. But this time Izuku shook her hand off of his own. "Please, just give me a chance to try and help. I don't want you to not trust me to be there for you. But do you really want to be there?" Izuku's hands were clenched into tight, shaking fists, and he stood, knees weak and threatening to let him drop to the floor. "You never cared before when I was coming home with a black eye nearly every week." He shook his head, his hair falling over his face as he did. He swallowed, the action painful as he tried to swallow his anguish and anger back down and failed. "You never cared when my nightmares kept me awake every night." He couldn't stop himself, his bottled resentment finally bubbling over now that the pressure was too much to contain. "You never cared when I was clawing at my own skin, trying to dig out the monster in me." Izuku slapped his hand over his heart, memories of blood dripping down his arm and fingertips, skin wedged under his fingernails. "You even got a second job, so you wouldn't have to spend time with me." His fingers twisted in the material of his shirt, and he swore he could feel the heat of his frustration boiling under his skin. "Why should you care now?" Izuku growled, his voice twisting as words he had longed to say flowed out like venom. "Is it because it's public? Is it because villains might have been involved? Tell me, damn it. Enko's hands flew up to cover her face, stray tears leaking over her fingers. She couldn't say anything. She couldn't say anything because she knew that Izuku was right. For 2 years, she had barely cared about her son, only leaving him enough money to keep a stock kitchen and first aid kit. She hadn't told him that she loved him for over 2 years. Maybe it was too late to even try. Maybe I don't love him anymore. Why didn't you care? Izuku repeated, voice quiet and brittle as a dead leaf in the winter. He just wanted an answer to a question he had wanted to ask for 2 years. Izuku, he's right. You've been a terrible mother. Your own son hates you, and he's right to do so. I don't hate you, he whispered, lying, immediately regretting every damn word he had let out of the locked box in the back of his mind. Even if they were all the truth, he regretted it. He shouldn't, but he couldn't stop himself. So long had he been told to just grin and bear it. Standing up for himself was a foreign idea, to the point that doing so genuinely hurt. Izuku took a panicked step back, his breath erratic, and his hand pulled at his curly hair. His heart hammered in his chest, and his cheeks burned with shame. I'm sore. Izuku fell silent, unable to force the meaningless apology from his lips. He was conditioned to care too much, turning and running down the hallway. He slammed his bedroom door behind him, rattling the doorframe and the walls around it. His back to the door, he slid down it to the floor, drawing his knees up to his chest and pressing his hands over his eyes until they stung with sharp, dry pain. He tried to block it out, but his mother's thoughts still rang in his mind, clear as a bell. I'm so sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. I wish I could love you the way you deserve. I wish I had loved you in the first place. He didn't sleep that night. How could he, after what he had said, screamed those words at his mother? He wished he hadn't meant it. The words had just come pouring out after being locked away for so long. But instead of keeping strong, he had tried to apologize, had tried to lie, then he had run away like a damn coward. And Enko, she had just gone to bed without a word, her thoughts full of bitter regret as she fell asleep while blaming herself for Izuku's outburst. But Izuku only blamed himself. He had let his emotions fester for far too long. Sure, Enko wasn't actually trying to fix things. Izuku couldn't help but feel like it was somehow his fault, as if he wasn't putting in enough effort from his end. Maybe he didn't really want to fix things. Maybe it wasn't something that could be fixed. He just wished this wasn't as good as it was going to get. Wished he didn't already know what he had to do next. He couldn't stay here. Izuku stared up through the ceiling, not even able to see the stars with his damned eyes. His covers were pulled up to his chin, but he still felt icy cold down to his bones. With a shiver, he sat up, looking through the wall and watching his mother sleep, breaths even, her dreaming mind free from the worries Izuku had loaded on her less than 8 hours ago. She let herself forget, or maybe she just didn't care enough to remember. He already knew which one it was. He closed his eyes, hoping he could block out the image that kept replaying over in his mind. His mother's face and her expression of devastated guilt. Izuku wasn't sure he would ever be able to scrub that memory from his mind, no matter how hard he tried. Couldn't forget how she didn't love him. Moving from the center of his bed where he sat, he slung his legs over the side, socked feet touching on hardwood flooring, the cold of the concrete and rebar beneath soaking through the wood and into his skin. Stepping forward, he stumbled, his toes catching on the ankle of his other foot, and he caught himself with the corner of his desk before he could crash onto the floor and wake Enko from her rest. He took the blanket from his bed and wrapped it around himself, hoping the thickness of the blanket would maybe keep him warm against his own icy armor. He would go to the garden, but it doesn't feel right to use it as an escape from this. Enko doesn't love him, and from the way she thought, she never had. In the kitchen, Izuku brought a pot of water to a boil, knowing coffee wouldn't give him what he needed right now. He didn't need to sleep. He just needed to focus, needed to make a plan. He obviously couldn't live here anymore, but where would he go? Maybe All Might would take him in. Mindlessly, he went through the motions of making tea, the action driven by muscle memory more than intent. He settled down on the couch, the springs creaking in protest to his weight. Izuku set the warm metal thermos on the cracked table in front of the couch, small drops of tea running down the surface and staining the cracks. Usually, he would be waking up right about now, but he hadn't even managed to fall asleep in the first place. Guilt has a way of eating at you. Leaning back into the couch's overly soft cushions, Izuku tried to clear his head. He had gotten used to falling asleep with fear. Fear was familiar to him. It was sharp against his nerves, a prickling, staticky sensation that was uncomfortably warm with spikes of searing heat. But guilt was different. It had a weight to it. It merely pressed down, cold and unrelenting, a smooth surface like glass as it reflected your sins. Based on how his stomach churned, filled with acid, it really does eat at you. Izuku gritted his teeth and sat back up straight, standing and taking his tea back to his room. He sat at his desk and picked up a pen and paper. Dear Dad, Father, Hisashi, it's been a long time, hasn't it? The classroom is dark when Shouta comes in. There's barely a glimmer of light from the windows, and he immediately stumbles over something tossed against the front of his desk. He glares through the darkness, blinking until he could see a rough shape, some sort of backpack. He takes a closer look. It's a duffel bag, stuffed full of God knows what. What the hell? Whose duffel bag is this? Who left a duffel bag here at 7 in the morning? It's mine. The voice was muffled slightly, but it still cut through the near silence of the room like a knife. The shouter jolted, his head snapping up to stare at a shadowed figure across the room, a huddled shape in the corner, their silhouette barely illuminated by the light of the window. Midoriya. Hold on. How did he? He shook himself mentally. He knew he hadn't said that aloud, had he? Kid, I know, I shouldn't be here so early, Izuku sighed, leaning against the window frame, the metal creaking slightly under his weight, and looking down at the campus. I just needed somewhere quiet to think. Aizawa said nothing. He understood that need for silence and isolation more than most did. He stepped quietly, his boots squeaking slightly as he walked around his desk, setting down his day's paperwork. A near silence falls over the room, the rustling of papers and fabric, and the sound of breathing the only things keeping it from real calm. Every few moments, Aizawa's thoughts would circle back to the kid in the back of the room and the way he had fought like a cornered animal just the day before. He scratched at the thick bruises that wrapped around his wrist and up his arms, a dark smudged gray after the previous day's healing. Didn't stop it from hurting, though. Almost as if he could read his thoughts, Midoriya spoke up, startling Shouta from his focus. I'm sorry. He was quiet, regret and exhaustion tinting his words. What? I'm sorry. For what happened yesterday. Izuku sighed quietly, thunking the side of his head against the window. Even though his eyes were hidden, he still looked away, some form of guilt not letting him do otherwise. I panicked. It won't happen again. Can you guarantee that? Izuku jolted, blinking rapidly. Hey, the noise cracked as it escaped from his throat, shock and confusion tinging his tone. Can you guarantee it? Aizawa repeated, watching Midoriya intently. No. Then don't apologize for what you can't control, Aizawa stated calmly, wishing someone had told him those same words when he was the kid's age. Thank you. Izuku couldn't say he understood the sentiment behind those words, but he was grateful that Eraser had at least tried to lift the blame from his shoulders, even if he felt it justified. He had attacked his teacher in a blind panic, and his teacher was just brushing it off as if it was no big deal. Don't thank me for having common sense. Don't really know why they call it that. It's not exactly common. Aizawa sighed, leaning forward with his hands on the podium and his head hung down. Just don't apologize. Whatever the hell you thought was really happening, it wasn't your fault. Sorry, TCH. Looks like getting out of this apology spiral would be harder than he thought. I'm sorry for the... Izuku waved his hand vaguely. The bruises and hairline fractures. How did you... Aizawa glanced down at his bandages, narrowing his eyes at what Midoriya had just said. Hairline fractures. Nobody knows about that except Recovery Girl. How did he find out? Recovery Girl didn't tell me. I saw the fractures as soon as you came in. Izuku hissed under his breath. Good going, Izuku. You overshared again and said too much. Just like the last time. Maybe he needed to work on his impulse control. He's gotten too trusting in the past 10 months. I want to be trusted, but I need to trust you. Trust me. It was time, Izuku decided. His breath held tight in his chest before he released it, and with it, a question. What do you know about Project Bloodlines? About what? What? Izuku blinked twice, carefully sifting through his teacher's thoughts. There was nothing. Usually, most people had at least heard of it, but there wasn't a single scrap of information in his head. He didn't have to convince him that Project Bloodlines was what it really was. He had to convince him it actually existed. Izuku ran a gloved hand through his hair. Okay. Izuku frowned, trying to think of other programs his teacher might have heard of. What do you think about Blackbriar? What? Thornridge? They were shut down, weren't they? Izuku bit his tongue to keep himself from cursing. This was just unbelievable. What about Bloody Peak? What's that? Izuku threw out the most ridiculous and underground secret society he could think of, something almost nobody would know about. Talon on High. Oh, I've heard of that one. Aizawa just shrugged, shuffling the papers on the podium. Thought they were just a do-nothing cult. Izuku blinked, confusion freezing his thoughts. How? You've heard of Talon on High but not Bloody Peak or the rest? Sure, why not? The only one more secretive than the rest is the only one he's heard of. Of course, that makes no sense at all. Well, Eraserhead is an underground hero. He and Izuku probably get their information from similar sources. Izuku's just happened to go deeper underground than heroes can reach. And after Project Bloodlines was scrapped, Talon on High lacks the resources to continue to keep their secrets. Based on the ads he's seen taken out in conspiracy, Talon members are being attacked by villains in steadily increasing numbers, almost as if they were being targeted. Izuku hates to think about it, but All for One is probably trying to choke out the last of the possible opposition Talon on High still has. He was getting distracted. Where was I? Izuku frowned, running a gloved hand through his hair again, frustration mounting by the second. Right, I'm guessing you can tell there's something weird with my quirk. Yeah, you could say that. Aizawa narrowed his eyes, thinking about how odd the quirk of Midoriya's had been. When I tried to erase it, it felt strange. It's like he doesn't have a quirk factor at all, he thought, eyebrows furrowed. That's because I don't, Izuku answered instinctively before mentally cursing. He had gotten used to being around people who knew his secret. He had gotten used to being able to talk like this, but he's too tired to control it at this point. All of this is artificial, it's a lie. The lie. Aizawa frowned, stepping away from the podium into the window, leaning against the frame where it joined with the wall at the front of the room. He crossed his arms over his chest, wondering what Midoriya meant. Yeah, a lie. Izuku tapped the glass with a gloved hand, careful to control his strength. He'd broken enough windows this week already. You're making it sound like you're not human. Aizawa narrowed his eyes, his hair falling over his face and hiding his concern. This sort of thinking, and from a child of all people. What kind of life makes you think like that? Like you're not real? Oh, no, I'm real, just not. Izuku cut himself off. That line of thinking wouldn't get him anywhere. Everyone who cared about him kept telling him he was normal. Detective Tsukachi kept telling him he was just a kid. Yagi-san kept telling him he was human. To stop thinking that just because he had been altered, he wasn't a lesser being. Izuku grumbled under his breath before he shook his head. This conversation doesn't seem to get any easier no matter how many times I have it. There you go again, answering questions I haven't asked yet. Aizawa crossed his arms over his chest, not liking what this conversation was turning into. What does your quirk have to do with secret societies? Nothing, Izuku frowned before correcting himself. Everything. Talon on High had benefited from Project Bloodlines. At least, they would have if it had been seen through to the end. They would have had their own little obedient army of superior soldiers. But he was getting off track again. That's the purpose of a secret, isn't it? Being hidden from society. This was going nowhere. Shouter recognized that sort of thinking, though. Clipped sentences. Sudden moments of what you believe is introspection but is really a mild delirium. When's the last time you slept? Does being the underground hero cut his student off, already knowing what was going to be said. It was a question he himself had asked more than once. No, being unconscious doesn't count. Oh, Izuku did some quick math before smiling sheepishly as he answered. About 4 hours since the onion. Maybe less than 4 hours if he was being honest with himself. That was 2 days ago. How the hell do you get less sleep than me and not show it? Lots of naps, Izuku replied. How are you doing that? Izuku opened his mouth to answer, only to be cut off. You're answering my questions before I can even ask them. Aizawa's eyes went wide as it struck him. It was impossible, but it was the last remaining possibility. You can hear them, can't you? Izuku was quiet, looking out the window almost wistfully as he muttered, yes. He sighed, closing his eyes and letting the constant waves of overlapping thoughts wash over him and break upon the shores of his mental defenses before they dissipated, replaced immediately by more of the same. I hear everyone and everything. You're a mind reader. Nobody likes mind readers, Izuku said instinctively. He opened his eyes again as he leaned a little heavier against the window. It's not as useful as it sounds, it's just loud. So, you don't sleep because of it? Izuku snorted to himself, derisively. I wasn't designed to sleep, it's not something I can do. Designed, Aizawa echoed, concern lacing itself through his tone. I'm supposed to be the pinnacle of the project's achievements, and I can't even have a damn conversation. Good to know that anxiety can overcome even the most significant technological advancements. Medical miracles mean nothing in the face of his overwhelming social awkwardness. Izuku bared his teeth in a frustrated grimace. It'd be easier to just show you. Show me, Aizawa questioned, eyebrows furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? What is this Project Bloodlines? It's what made me the way I am. Izuku answered before asking a question of his own. What do you think my quirk is? General enhancement. That's what it said in his file. So that was it, right? Right. It is. Sort of. Not really. Not at all. Izuku shook his head, trying to collect his thoughts. He didn't want this to be more confusing than it already was. General enhancement wouldn't let me see your injuries, would it? He asked, not expecting an answer. I suppose it wouldn't. Wouldn't let you read my mind, either. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. So what does that mean for your quirk? It's artificial. Izuku pushed up his sleeve, even in the low light. The scars on his arms were visible. Thin and thick lines carved up his forearm in perfect surgical precision. He pushed his sleeve back down before he pulled down the neck of his undershirt, showing identical thick and thin scars that twisted up into his hairline. Izuku pulled back his hand, smoothing his shirt collar back over his neck before twisting both his hands together nervously. Aizawa choked back a sound of shock. thankful that his hair covered his horrified expression before he realized it didn't. For someone else, maybe it would have. But if this kid could see his injuries, he could definitely see his face. An artificial quirk. Shouta tried to swallow around the dry lump in his throat, the pieces plunking into place. Surgical scars, knowledge of secret societies and supposed underground programs, and an artificial quirk. It was an ugly picture that those thoughts painted, twisted and dark, unsuitable for children and those with weak hearts. Graphic and cruel. Whatever Project Bloodlines was, Shouta was sure he needed to get to the truth of it. Whatever it was had done this to a child. And he had a sinking feeling Midoriya wasn't the only one who had been involved. Clearing his throat, Shouta struggled to find his voice for a moment before he forced out a question. What's the extent of your abilities? Well, I can make people vomit with eye contact. So there's that, Izuku said, his tone almost conversational, as if it wasn't a big deal. Okay, sure, that makes sense. That made no sense at all. How the hell does that happen? He forced himself to remain calm, even though he knew that Midoriya would hear his spiraling thoughts. At least, the wide grin on the kid's face made him think he was listening to them. What else? My bones are unbreakable, and my tendons and ligaments are the same. He continued speaking, ignoring the concern that laced through his teacher's thoughts at the fact that Izuku already knew they were unbreakable. Izuku made a mental note of that. Aizawa might seem like he doesn't care, but he really does, he just doesn't show it. My muscles, not so much. Superior strength and durability. He continued, listing off what he knew. His abilities were easily defined. At the very least, no room for questions or evolution. Mind reading and it's not really X-ray vision, it's more like ultrasound and X-ray combined. Even Izuku knew how confusing his explanation was, so he tried to clarify. I can see bones, organs, through walls, but deep water, certain metals or foam gives me difficulty. But if I'm looking for a person, the mind reading usually covers that blind spot, unless he was the one underwater. What else? Aizawa grew more horrified with each word Midoriya said in that matter-of-fact tone, but he needed to know exactly what this kid was capable, how much damage he could do to himself, how much potential he had been hiding. I'm supposed to be, Izuku shuddered, hating the word that was bandied about with such ease back in the hospital. Supposed to be refueled with radiation-infused foods. If he was on a proper diet, he supposedly could go a week without sleep and feel almost no side effects. Well, he wouldn't feel the side effects until he actually slept. Then he would sleep for 18 hours and wake up with a headache and stiff everything. You're radioactive? Aizawa asked curiously, raising an eyebrow. He leaned forward against the podium, hoping this was the last of it. Mildly, Izuku insisted, my clothes block a lot of it. His skin did the majority of the blocking if he would elaborate. I know how radiation works. Shouta sighed, rubbing his temples in an attempt to stave off his guaranteed headache. Is our vision fully radiation-based? No, most of it's actually the ultrasonics. Izuku paused, frowning as he considered what he had just said. That's probably why eye contact makes people throw up. Go on, Shouta said weakly, not even wanting to touch that comment. He refused to unpack that one. Various organs were replaced with synthetics. Kidneys, liver, adrenal glands, one super messed up pituitary gland. I don't think I'm gonna grow any more. Various bone marrow. I think there's more. I've heard enough. Shouta paused, trying to process everything he had heard. Is any of it able to be turned off? Please say yes. Please say you don't have to live with hearing and seeing everything. Izuku just shook his head, his green curls falling over his eyes. I'm so sorry. That's no way to live life. Aizawa cleared his throat, wishing he hadn't just thought that. He had a feeling Midoriya didn't want to be pitied. Who knows about this? All Might. A detective. Do you know Detective Tsukachi? A quick glance into his teacher's mind confirmed his suspicions. The doctor who made me. For the last, Izuku gritted his teeth, glaring behind his dark lenses. My mother, he growled. Listed his mother last. Bad relationship. You could say that. After the shock and horror of how much and how well Inko had lied to him wore off, his feelings towards her were tainted with betrayal. How could she sign him up for Bloodlines? How could she do that to him? Had she ever cared about him, or just about the quirk he could have had? She was his mother. She was supposed to protect him from the horrors of the world, not shove him into them. Izuku's thoughts spiraled, only being pulled out of them when he clenched his fist too hard on his knee, the flesh bruising under his grip as his artificial cartilage ground against itself. I'm no good at this sort of thing. Aizawa sighed, sliding to sit on the floor, still staring out the window as he spoke. I know I'm not any sort of parental figure like whatever All Might is to you, but I can listen pretty well. All Might, he's like my dad. Izuku snorted. Hell, I wish he was my dad. His life would probably be a lot simpler that way. Less dramatic and traumatic. Oh, All Might would be an interesting parent. Izuku just raised an eyebrow before continuing. I already have a father, and from what I can tell, he's a caring person, but I don't know him at all. I never got a chance. Inko had taken that choice from him. And All Might was there when I needed someone to care about me. And what does her mother think of that? Aizawa asked curiously, wondering why it took the nation's #1 hero to make this kid feel like anybody cared about him. It doesn't matter what Inko thinks, Izuku said coldly, his hands balling into shaky fists. She lied to me. That's why I've got that bag over there. Where do you plan on going? Please don't say outside. I don't know yet. Probably the sewers. Or a tree. Maybe the abandoned subway station that was never repaired after the last villain attack. I just can't live there anymore. Aizawa took a deep breath, looking out the window before muttering. There are a few empty rooms in the teacher's dorms. I'll talk to Nedzu. He'll probably let you in. Don't know why I'm offering, but I'll do it. Izuku froze, blinking dryly in his disbelief. You really would do that, he said, not needing to question what he could tell was the truth. He smiled, the expression lopsided and small. Thanks, still not used to people trying to help me out, he said quietly, not missing the way his teacher's thoughts tinged with worry at his words. Mere silence fell back over the classroom. All that needed to be said had been said. Neither of them moved from where they sat on opposite sides of the room. The occasional rustle of fabric from Izuku, and the shuffle of papers from Aizawa cutting though the quiet before Aizawa cleared his throat, setting his paperwork on the floor. Usually, he loved the silence, but this silence was stiff, filled with an unidentified wrongness that hung in the air like the sword of Damocles, ready to cut them down unless it was broken. Finally, he settled on something to say. It was good. What? Izuku started, blinking back to awareness. He stared over at his teacher, watching him from behind black lenses. The onion. It was good. Better than what I usually buy in the stores. Aizawa didn't cook often, but he felt he had to once he had been given such an unusual gift. Oh, that's good. Izuku smiled, the expression genuine for the second time in just 1 hour. I'm glad. How do you plan to move your rooftop garden? Aizawa had to admit he was curious. How does one person move that much soil? I'm sure Nedzu would allow you to have it on campus, but how will you get it here? I don't know yet, Izuku shrugged. Probably ask All Might or something. The underground hero snickered, imagining All Might awkwardly helping move plants. It made for a far too ordinary and strangely serene scene. Izuku snorted, not saying a word at how close his teacher was to the truth. By the time the rest of the class began to trickle in for the day, it was as if their conversation had never happened. Neither of them acknowledging the other, keeping their secrets as they should. Izuku stays quiet through the first 4 classes, too tired even to say hello when his friends greet him. If he's being honest with himself, he's emotionally, mentally, and physically drained. With how exhausted he is, he might actually sleep a full 4 hours tonight once he's moved into the dorms. He knows he's going to have to ask what the classes were about later, because the only thing he's learned today is that Ada is class president, Yaoyorozu is vice president, and his friends are all worried about him. Friends, people care about him. It's still strange to think about. Shinsu, Tsuyu, Uraraka, Ida, more friends than he's ever had before. Even before he was just a quirkless Deku, he only had Bakugo. Then he had no one. And then when he was a weird quirk freak, he still had no one. But now even Bakugo was worried. His rival of all people was concerned about him. He's not sure how that's supposed to make him feel. Izuku doesn't like people worrying about him, but something about the way Bakugo has changed makes him almost glad that he's worried. It's weird, and he doesn't even realize he's grinning like a loon by the time the bell rings for lunch. Bakugo snapped his fingers next to Izuku's head, glaring down at him with no heat behind the expression. Oi, freak show, stop making that face, it's creeping me out. Go. Izuku nearly jolted out of his skin, his fingers denting the wood of his desk as he gripped it in shock. Why? Why would you do that? He yelped, his hands shaking as he tried to calm himself. Bakugo just rolled his eyes, trying to cover his concern. Jumpy much? The day he stops being jumpy is the day you know he's been replaced by a repto-synth, Shinsu drawled, stepping up to Izuku's desk, unintentionally helping Bakugo trap him. A what? Bakugo asked, already glaring, confident he didn't really want an answer. Shinsu just crossed his arms over his chest and calmly stated, hyper-realistic androids built by reptilians to mimic their own behavior that have gone rogue and are wearing human suits. His lip twitched in a half-grin. Really, he loved absolutely over-the-top and wild conspiracies. Fake space, hollow moon, flat Mars society, all the really out there theories. And making people think that he actually believes in them is just half the fun. Oh, so you're crazy. Bakugo leaned away from the unsettling grin that Shinsu wore, not wanting to get infected with his specific brand of insanity. He didn't need that right now. Shinsu just continued to grin and snapped his fingers. Bingo. On Izuku's other side, Uraraka and Ida began to approach his desk, effectively boxing him in where he stood. Midoriya. Uraraka vaulted the desk beside Izuku's, ignoring the undignified squawk Ida sent her way when she landed in a crouch in the aisle. Straightening up, she grabbed Izuku's sleeve, concern written across her features. We were worried. Walking between the desks, like a normal person, Ida asked much more calmly, how are you feeling? Izuku brushed off the worry from his friends. I'm fine. Behind the lenses of his sunglasses, his eyes darted to check the rest of the classroom. Empty aside from the 5 of them and Aizawa napping under his desk at the front of the room. No need to worry about me. Are you really okay? You look like you slept less than me. Everyone was wondering where you went after lunch. Hiroraka could almost feel the intensity of Midoriya's stare, and she quickly added, don't worry, we didn't tell them. Izuku let out a tense breath. He knew his friends wouldn't share his secrets. He trusted them, but he was still afraid of people knowing what had happened, of them knowing how broken and beaten down he really was. His friends began to talk at once, voices and thoughts overlapping. He couldn't tell who was saying what. Does he need help? Are you really all right? Did you sleep properly last night? You look a little tired. What can I do? I don't know what to do to help out. Wait, what did you do yesterday, creep? Is this about why you missed class? Are you feeling okay? Izuku stood silently until he realized the waves of sound had stopped. Oh, they were expecting an answer, weren't they? Yes, never been better, he said tonelessly. You don't have to pretend. I'm not pretending. Izuku slapped a hand on his desk, denting the wood in his frustration. He grit his teeth, hanging his head, his face unable to convey the storm of negativity in his chest. He didn't need people treating him like he was fragile. He wasn't going to break. He wasn't. Hoping to stop the feeling of doubt in his chest, Izuku tried to force himself to believe his words. Stop worrying about it. I'm not weak. I don't need to be treated as if I'm fragile. He didn't believe himself. We never said you were. A little voice, and he knew this one was his own, whispered in the back of his mind, telling him to push them all away. It's safer to be by himself. He's better off on his own. It can't be hurt if he's alone. He hung his head, not hearing how bitter and filled with grief his voice was. No, you just think I need help. I don't need help, he lied, trying to push them away from the truth in a last-ditch effort. I'm not struggling. I can handle it no matter how loud it gets. Loud, someone asked. Maybe it was Shinsu. Maybe it was Ida. Maybe it was no one. Bakugo grumbled under his breath, clearing his throat and glaring as he spoke back up. Is this about the mind-reading freak show? Izuku straightened up, staring incredulously before adjusting his black sunglasses. Wow, just shout it from the rooftops. Why don't ya? Izuku shook his head, exasperated by his rival's behavior and by his own. He was too tired for this. He could barely keep a hold of his senses, much less his emotions or words. Izuku sighed, giving up on his pointless fight. Yes, well, it's complicated. It's not entirely just the mind reading. Izuku sighed, not ready to tell his friends the truth. He was emotionally exhausted already from his earlier talk, and he just can't right now. So he did the next best thing and lied through his teeth, tiny bits of truth laced through it in a weak attempt to be more convincing. I didn't get enough sleep the night before, and the night before that, or ever, but I'm better now, he finished weakly, hoping he had sounded sincere. He hadn't. Lies. Uraraka shook her head, not believing him for a single second. Lie. Shinsu took a moment to finish processing what Bakugo had said. And you can read minds. I fucking knew it. No, you're not, fuckhead. Even in his thoughts, Bakugo snarled, an angry energy filling his mind. Are you really all right? How can you be so blasé about this? Ida pushed up his glasses, wanting to believe his friend, but not able to push his worries from his thoughts. Izuku brushed off the concerns of his friends, face flushing at the constant stream of worry that flowed at him in an unstoppable way. Yeesh, yes, I'm fine. You don't have to believe me, but I'm fine. His world had been irreparably shattered less than 12 hours ago, but he would be okay. He had to be. He looked so sad. Wow, look how concerned everyone is. Freak show. Bakugo looked away, squaring his shoulders in an attempt to appear nonchalant and unworried. Stop looking so sad, dumbass. Izuku rolled his eyes, tired of fending off their feelings. He might as well just accept it. Even if he wasn't sure how to handle it, people still cared about him. Stop thinking at me. Izuku chuckled, trying to hide the sound behind his hand. That wasn't a sentence he had ever thought he would say in his entire life. Geez, you're all ... so ... Izuku grinned crookedly, pausing for effect. Don't say it, Uraraka warned. She didn't have to be a mind reader to know what was coming. Shinsu shook his head. You better not have a pun. Don't you dare. Bakugo narrowed his eyes, glaring at what he knew was coming. Unsure of what was happening, Ida said nothing. So thoughtful, Izuku said through his crooked grin. Ha. Bakugo bared his teeth. Fuck you, you. Fucko. He threw up his hands and stomped away and out of the classroom, wanting nothing more to do with his pun-making rival. Ah, no. Shinsu clapped his hands over his ears, blocking out any potential incoming puns. And why the hell were Bakugo and Shinsu's thoughts so similar? Izuku sighed, following Bakugo out of the room before squaring his shoulders and making his way through the crowded halls to the lunchroom, the swarm of people parting before he reached them, his unsettling aura doing the work for him. His hands still over his ears, Shinsu fell into place beside his friend. So, you got any more puns? Izuku shook his head, snickering when Shinsu waited a moment before taking his hands away from his ears. He wasn't going to risk more mental punishment. Oh no, now he's doing it. The puns must be infectious, he thought in irritation, not missing the way Midoriya snorted in laughter. Oh, that's going to take some getting used to. It's been less than 5 minutes since the group of 4 had sat at an empty table when Izuku heard a voice call his name. Midoriya, energetic and upbeat, an absolute ray of positivity in a dark, dark world. Oh no, Izuku ducked, nearly slamming his face into the table in his rush to avoid the arms that tried to grab him. I should have expected this, he muttered as he sat back up, avoiding the questioning gazes of his friends. Wow, he dodged like the wind. Shinsu blinked, leaning against the table to watch what he was sure would be far more entertaining than anything else he had seen all day. Who is that and why is he trying to hug you? Uraraka asked, pointing over Izuku's shoulder, a curious look on her face. Sorry, Midoriya. He's been trying to track you down since he got to school. Hadu giggled at the display, not mentioning how the two almost acted like some sort of siblings. I heard you weren't feeling well. All Might was worried about you. He didn't stop worrying during training yesterday. Izuku leaned to the side, narrowly escaping another attempt at an arm slung over his shoulders. I'm fine, he muttered, glaring through his black lenses at his other friend's confused thoughts. Go away. No way, I was so worried. Stop that, Izuku grumbled, freezing when he saw a collection of fractures enter his vision as Mirio tried to capture him again. What did you do to your hand? Ignoring the question, Mirio took advantage of Izuku's lapse in dodging, slinging his arm around the first year's shoulders before his other arm was immobilized in a vice-like grip by said first year. Aha, gotcha. Izuku grabbed Mirio's wrist, pulling it forward and glaring at the bandages wrapped around his hand. What did you do? Nothing. Nothing, huh? Izuku didn't let go of the other's wrist as he moved to stand. I'm taking you to recovery, girl. Mirio planted his feet and tried to pull away from his friend's iron grip, pushing with his other hand to keep Izuku in place. It was like playing tug-of-war with a statue. Embarrassing and hilarious. No, she'll hit me with her cane. Again, Izuku echoed, narrowing his eyes intensely. How many times have you gone to her office? Mirio didn't answer. He just turned his face away and pretended he hadn't heard the question. So, nice weather, huh? Cold as hell but pretty swell. Hadu and Amajiki, however, were more than happy to answer for him. A lot. Hadu rocked forward on the balls of her feet, glaring at Mirio in a way that was both playful and severe. Almost every day. Every day this week, Amajiki corrected, doing nothing to move the hair away from his face. And school's only been in for a week. That's too many times, right? And he would be right. Visiting the nurse that many times in 1 week would be unnecessary and excessive for anyone else. Izuku rolled his eyes, letting go of Mirio's wrist. That's what I thought. He shook his head, scooching over on the bench and closer to Shinsu, glaring and daring his friends to say something as Mirio immediately took the offered seat on the end. Takaki and Hadu sat down as well, Hadu sitting herself beside Uraraka, staring intently at the younger girl's hands, questions bubbling up faster than she could speak them. And Tamaki just sat silently beside Shinsu, thankful for the quiet. That was, thankful until Shinsu leaned forward, fingers steepled and asking, far too seriously, is lava wet? Izuku just blinked once before shaking his head. No, but it's liquid. Uraraka frowned. No, wait, is it? No, it's fluid, not liquid. Ida tried to correct, but he wasn't quite loud enough as other voices cascaded over his own. It's neither, it's a rock, Mirio said, confident that he was right. And he was, but that's not the point. Uraraka amended her previous line of thought. So, it has liquid traits. Hadu shrugged. I dunno, maybe? That makes it a liquid, Uraraka continued, her brow scrunched in thought. Yeah, Ida chopped the air with a hand, struggling to be heard. It's fluid. But it's a rock. A non-Newtonian solid. No, fluid. It's a rock. Why won't you just admit it? But is it wet? It's a rock. Is it wet? As voices began to rise and tempers began to flare, Shinsu just grinned sadistically, hands flat on the table as he watched the chaos unfold. This was just what he had wanted. Chaos. Mayhem. Wonderful. No, it's a fluid, not a liquid, and only liquids can be wet. What is wrong with you people? Izuku muttered under the argument, picking at his food. You're all so stupid, so damn stupid, I would cry if I still could, he grumbled in a near whisper. But he had to admit, he was thankful for Shinsu causing such a distraction, managing to almost seamlessly blend the two groups together with just one question and draw attention away from himself at the same time. Tamaki glanced over to him when he said that, and Izuku just shrugged. I'm right, and you know it, he whispered, low enough that most wouldn't be able to hear over the increasing volume of the discussion. He was curious about something, but he knew it would be weird to just ask outright. Yes, you are, Tamaki answered back, his own voice a whisper. Izuku depending more on the matching thoughts to understand what was said. Izuku grinned lopsidedly. He was right. Hamachi could hear better than an average person. Was it the shape of his ears? Was heightened senses part of his quirk? Was it possible that he retained some of the effects of animal manifestation? How did? You're mumbling. It's kinda terrifying, Mirio said, turning to stare at Midoriya with a concerned smile. Hamachi leaned away, trying to hide behind Shinsu to no avail. Ah, no, stop talking about me, please. But I have so many questions, Izuku said, eyes wide behind his sunglasses. If they weren't so dry, they would gleam in excitement. Like, if you manifest a part, is it identical to the animal it came from, or is it just a general? Whatever, I don't know. As soon as Izuku could breathe, he shot out another question. Do you have to eat that specific part of an animal or just any part? Any part. Wild. What about animal hair? Can you use actual body parts if you only ingest hair? Don't eat hair, Mirio thought. It's not worth it. Izuku turned back with an eyebrow raised before he shook it off, reminding himself to ask about whatever the hell that was later. I don't know. Hamachi frowned nervously, not sure what was going to happen in the next moments. I don't want to eat hair. What about people with animal-type morphic traits? Could you become people? At this point, Izuku was all but trying to force Shinsu out of his way and onto the floor to continue his line of interrogation. The entire table quiet and watching in fascination. Shinsu took a slow breath, patting Izuku on the shoulder. Midoriya, this is a truly horrifying line of discussion, he stated far too calmly before leaning forward. His hands pressed together and an odd gleam in his eye. I want in on it. When two looks of absolutely horrible fascination were aimed his way, Hamachi cowered back, wishing he had chosen somewhere else to sit. Like the floor, or outside with wild animals. Someone help. But help did not come as the terrible twosome began to rattle off questions. Rapid fire, no silence or quiet surviving the barrage. Izuku leaned past Shinsu. Do your cells become that of the animal, or is it just cosmetic? I don't know. He had never thought about it before, and nobody had ever asked. Shinsu leaned back, giving Izuku room before he began his own line of interrogation. Can you become a plant? I can grow plants. Can you grow fruit? Shinsu asked this question with a look of queasy horror, uncertain if eating the potential fruit would be cannibalism or not. Yes, please, someone, help me. Mirio, help. I don't want to be here. If you eat venomous or poisonous animals, can you create venom or poison as well? Izuku asked. Follow-up question. If you can, is it possible to poison or envenomate yourself once you get rid of the parts? I'm not sure. Maybe. I haven't really tried. He didn't want to try it out. He wanted to go home. No one's ever asked. The next question stunned him into a moment of silence and disbelief. If you eat an axolotl, can I cut your arm off? Izuku smacked Shinsu's shoulder as gently as he could, still knocking his friend to the side a bit. No, but how else will I know if he could regenerate? Hamachi just muttered to himself, seriously debating taking his lunch and running away. No, could you breathe underwater if you eat fish? Or would you lose the ability to breathe on land? In the midst of the chaos, Mirio leaned forward across the table, quietly asking Hadu, what's happening? I think it's science, Hadu answered before turning back to Uraraka, questions still bubbling up as fast as she could think them. Can you remove partial gravity? Or all or nothing? As their questions faded to a reasonable volume, Shinsu laughed loud enough to drown them out. You could become Shark Man. Hey, Shark Man is real, don't you diss him. Izuku pointed at Shinsu with a faked stern look, the beginnings of a smile ruining the effect. Shark Man is as real as space. Wah. Izuku shook his head. Don't tell me you believe in fake space. There's a lot of real conspiracy theories out there, but this just goes too far. You can't believe in something that's not real. I will end you, Izuku said flatly, clenching a fist and shaking it once. Say goodbye to your spleen. Dang, all this over fake space. I will have Uraraka help send you to that so-called fake space. Uraraka jerked back to attention at the call of her name, not having been paying attention to the other conversation after it devolved into whatever was happening right now. What now? Oh shit, Shinsu chuckled, wiping at his face to try to hide his escalating laughter. Do it, launch me. The light clatter of a tray being set on the table cut through the laughter. I could hear you all arguing all the way across the room, so you sat down, staring at Izuku unblinkingly. I didn't see you on the train this morning, Midoriya, Uraraka, Ida, and Hadu all moved down the bench, making room for the newest addition to the group. Hamachi took this as an opportunity to make his escape, moving away from what he now understood was a madman, and pushed Mirio over, sitting as far from the insanity as he could. 8 people were almost too many for the table, but Izuku couldn't help but think about how right it felt to be surrounded by people he didn't have to be afraid of. Oh, yeah, he finally responded, realizing how long the silence was drawing on. I took the early train this morning. Suyu croaked out a small ribbit, a tiny smile on her face. Your fan club was worried about you. She didn't know how Midoriya did it, dealing with all the questions from nearly 15 excitable grade schoolers. She had only spent 1 day with them, and it was almost too much to handle, all the questions and energy. The sooner Midoriya was back on the train, the better for all of them. Fan club. Ada turned to look at his mysterious friend, adjusting his glasses as he leaned forward, awaiting the answer. Yeah, what's with that? Shinsu nudged Midoriya in the side, trying to prompt him to speak. Uraraka giggled, covering her smile with her hands. You a secret celebrity? I can see it. Mirio nodded, turning to look at what he was starting to think was actually All Might's secret child. He huffed out a pained noise when Midoriya jabbed him in the ribs with his elbow. I have a gaggle of grade schoolers that love harassing me, was all Izuku said, ignoring the surge of questioning thoughts. I think they just love you, Tsuyu corrected, watching as a reddish-gray blush spread across Izuku's face. No, they're just evil little children. Izuku looked away, turning his face so far he was almost looking over his own shoulder in embarrassment. Except for your sister. She's all right. No, she's just as evil as the rest of them, Tsuyu said with the hint of a smile in her flat tone. The rest of the lunch period and the rest of the day flew by. Izuku's mood lifted to something higher than he had felt all week. After school is out and the sun has begun its descent, Izuku and All Might were sitting across from each other in the living room of Toshinori's apartment, the coffee table and an unholy amount of coffee between them. The heating vent was uncovered, but the window was open, the lock jimmied from the outside. The grate that used to cover the vent was hung on the wall, the warped metal an odd piece of art, a testament of Izuku's place in Toshinori's life. After a few moments of silence, Izuku leaned back in his seat at the table, not looking up from where his hand was wrapped around the ceramic of the mug. He hadn't told All Might about anything he'd found in Inko's apartment. It's not as if he didn't want to, but how was he supposed to do that? How was he supposed to tell the man he thought of as his dad that he was trying to get back in touch with his father? So he stayed silent, keeping it all to himself. You're oddly quiet today, Toshinori stated, not missing the way Izuku hummed vaguely in response. Something on your mind? Izuku just shrugged before asking, you still have that truck, right? Yes. After spending months on the beach leaning against the side of it, it had been hard to part with. Not just the truck, but the memories soaked into the metal. Sunsets on the beach shared with his son and spent talking about everything and nothing. Why? I need help moving out of Inko's apartment, Izuku answered, his words dripping with toxic venom. He might not be able to talk about what he had found in the boxes, but that didn't stop the incredible fires of wrath that burned whenever he thought of it. You're moving out. What? Why? What did she say this time? Toshinori had so many questions, but the most pressing of them was, where are you going? Why didn't you ask me? I have room. He had a spare room. He had a living room. Hell, the building had an entire extra floor. There were empty offices. He had the room for his kid to stay with him. Izuku's face burned at the thought of actually staying here, with his real family. He wasn't ready for that. He couldn't even handle the idea of it, so he hid his face in his coffee, draining half the mug before he could focus enough to speak. I was tempted to just sleep in your vents, but there was plenty of room for himself and all his bedding. But while it would be convenient, comfortable even, he didn't want All Might to overhear the sound of his memories turning to nightmares while he slept. Well, just know that you're lucky. Okay, thank you for not doing that, Toshinori said as if he actually meant it. He didn't. He would prefer Izuku to sleep in the vents, as long as he knew his boy was safe. But where are you going? Taking another sip of coffee to mask his expression, Izuku quietly stated, his words tinged with anxiety as if speaking his plans would make them go up in smoke. I'm going to live in the teacher's dorms. Aizawa-sensei said there are a few free rooms, so he talked to Nedzu during lunch. He shrugged, wishing this wasn't so damn hard to talk about. Room will be ready in the morning. I just need my stuff moved after school. You did that real fast. Toshinori glanced into his coffee, looking away from the reflection of his worried expression. I'm impressed. Toshinori shook his head, wishing he didn't have to be impressed. If he had known, he would have taken Izuku in. He thought of the boy as his own son. He just wished he could be there for him when he really needed him. Izuku cleared his throat with a subtle cough, pretending he hadn't heard All Might's line of thought. I already have everything packed. I just need some help moving it. And with my garden. He shook his head, thinking over his action plan. But that'll have to wait until I can get a plot marked out and tilled. Don't want to shock any of my plants. And he didn't have enough burlap for transfer. And he'd have to set up a shade, at least for a few days. God, he loved garden work. Toshinori did not feel the same way about gardens or garden work. He thought of the creeping feeling he got the few times he had visited the supposed garden. He barely suppressed a shudder at the memory. Right, that radioactive hellscape you call Eden. It's not a hellscape. Izuku thought about the Geiger counter he had packed away in the boxes in the living room, the rapid clicks and squeaks it made whenever he passed it through Eden, or over his own skin. He bit back his next words of defense before giving in with a sigh of agreement. Well, it's a little bit of a hellscape. At least the radiation was so low it didn't build up in the plants. While the radiation he put out was in the millisieverts, about the amount of a full-body CT scan, the garden put out exponentially less, about as much as 2 bananas. So about 0.2 microsieverts. Maybe. Math isn't his strong suit. Neither is science. Being self-sufficient is his strong suit. Hiding in the shadows normalcy. And the shallow expectations of average are his strong suits. But as good as he is at hiding, he's getting tired of it. Ever since he got attacked by that sludge villain, hiding has been harder and harder for him to want to do. It's insane to be walking around like he does when so many people want him dead. But he likes it. Likes being around people that like to be around him. Likes going out and forgetting that he's a medical monstrosity, if just for a little while. You okay in there? Toshinori asked, concern written across his face. Don't get lost in that head of yours. ... Yeah, I'm fine. Izuku chewed his lip to keep himself from. He wasn't sure if he was trying to stay quiet or keep himself talking. Before downing the last of his coffee, standing and taking the cup to the sink. That's just how he is. Always fine. Izuku washed and rinsed out the cup, setting it aside in the dish drain, tuning out his own internal monologue. So, we've got a field trip tomorrow. Did you read my mind or one of your other teachers? Don't worry about it, Izuku said, waving off the question. He had actually gotten it from Nezu the day before, but he wasn't going to say that. It was unnecessary. And thinking about the way the principal's mind worked made him jittery. Every time you say that it makes me worry more, Toshinori muttered, knowing that Izuku preferred to keep some things secret. He was just so unused to people caring, he still had a hard time with sharing. But yes, and Nezu is going to have at least 7 of those robots from the exam there. Izuku nodded, crossing his arms over his chest as he thought over the possible protection from the battle drones. He hates machines, hates cameras. And all of the robots from the exam are basically just heavily armed mobile cameras. He can't say he likes the thought of that. But his comfort was a small price to pay for security. With a small sigh, Izuku closed his eyes, leaning against the kitchen counter. He still felt like he needed to tell All Might about the letters. But he couldn't. It makes him feel weak, the way he can't even bring himself to speak about what he found, but he can't force himself to. Instead, he chokes back the self-hatred that his thoughts sparked up, and makes his way towards the window. I'll see you tomorrow for rescue training, he said with a grin as he seated himself on the windowsill. Toshinori wasn't a mind reader, and he didn't need to be to see that there was something Izuku wasn't saying. But it was late, and he could tell he wouldn't get anything if he pushed the issue. So he just gave a nod before saying, I'll bring the truck around after school, and we'll get you moved in no time. Yeah. Izuku gave a small wave before he dropped backward out the window. He flipped back upright as he fell through the air, and he clasped one hand around the drainpipe to control his slide downwards towards the empty streets. As the heels of his ratty shoes scraped down the side of the building, he just had one thought that warmed his heart and excited his blood. Everything's going to change tomorrow. Hello, cat, Izuku grumbled, voice hoarse and rough with sleep. His first words of the day. The cat nodded in recognition, as much as a cat can nod, and flicked his ears back flat over his skull. Hello, Midoriya Izuku. The cat licked his paw, swiping it over his face, his tail flicking against the top of the wall. Izuku smiled, his day off to a good start. Goodbye, cat. Farewell, Midoriya Izuku. The cat closed his eyes, settling back on the wall and letting the first sunbeams begin to warm his thick orange fur. Izuku sighed, adjusting his grip on the 3 boxes in his arms before turning to leave. This morning he was trying his best to get a head start on moving into the dorm. His duffel bag is lashed to his backpack. Both of them stuffed so full the zippers are straining along with the bungee cords holding them together. Even with the weight of his load, each step further away from the apartment he had once called home feels lighter and lighter until it's like he's walking on air once he reaches the train station. There's a grin plastered on his face when he sits in the corner of his usual train car, a few of the gaggle of grade schoolers already taking notice of him and making their way in his direction. Mr. Yue. Hey, mister, where were you yesterday? We missed you, Mr. Midoriya. It's Tsuyu's sister. And Izuku racks his brain for a second before her name comes back to him. Satsuki all but jumped into the seat across from him, dragging her sister behind her by the hand. We didn't see you yesterday. She kicked her legs, pointing at the boxes Izuku had tucked beside himself. What's in there? Oh, some stuff, Izuku answered, poorly evading the question. Sure, it was just a collection of boring shirts and sweaters, but that was still his own business. I'm moving out of my apartment after school today. You're moving. Satsuki jumped from her seat, falling back immediately with the swaying of the train car. She pouted at Izuku from her seat, pleading with her large watery eyes. But then how will I see you? You can't leave us. Yeah, we need you. You're our hero. We'll stop you from leaving, one especially rambunctious kid shouted, their second set of eyes narrowing before they wiped their face in what Izuku suspected was an attempt to prevent tears. Small hands grabbed Izuku's sleeve, their owner looking up at him imploringly as they pulled on his sleeve. You'll remember us, right, Mr. Yue? Right? Satsuki asked, eyes wide. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, unable to stop seeing the display before him. He couldn't handle such a concentrated dose of cuteness this early in the morning. Oh, well, I can visit, if your sister says that's okay. Tsuyu tapped her chin with her finger, a thoughtful look on her face. Well, you are a friend. It would be nice to have someone over. She smiled, the expression barely there, doing nothing to betray the emotions running through her mind. And Satsuki's been telling my brother all about you. Really? Izuku adjusted his sunglasses, looking away as his face burned. I didn't think I was that interesting. I'll bring vegetables. Or fruit. Do kids like onions? The kid still holding onto his sleeve tugged it again. I like onions. You're so cool. Satsuki tugged on Tsuyu's sleeve, excitedly bouncing in her seat. Tsuyu, can he come over? Can he? Please, please, please. We'll ask Mom and Dad after school, okay? Yeah. She threw her hands into the air, her enthusiasm all but sweeping over the entire train car. When you come over, everyone else will be so jealous. So, Midoriya, Tsuyu shook her head, trying her hardest to not roll her eyes at her sister's antics. She had the feeling her little brother would have the same reaction when he found out that Midoriya might come over. Where are you moving to? If he has boxes and bags with him, it has to be close by. Oh, well, Izuku cleared his throat, lowering his voice and leaning forward. He didn't really want people to overhear him. I suppose you'll find out anyway. He scooted forward until he was on the edge of his seat. I'm going to be staying on campus. There are spare rooms in the teachers' dorms. Satsuki clapped excitedly, a gleam in her eyes. I knew that teacher lived in the schools. Don't know why all my teachers lied and said they didn't. Satsuki huffed before forgetting all about it and focusing back on Midori. She stared unblinking, only getting a raised eyebrow in response. Izuku broke his silence with a snort, the reality finally breaking on him that he would have his teachers as his neighbors. He was going UA. He was going to be living UA. Well, she's not wrong. Tsuyu shook her head, accepting that this was a losing battle. Satsuki, not all teachers live at school, but some do. Satsuki just crossed her arms over her chest in a huff, unwillingly accepting that the world of adults was strange and confusing. Izuku smiled, leaning back in his seat and closing his eyes, letting the thrumming of the train tracks lull him to a near-sleep state. Time passed, motion beyond his closed eyelids and the soft waves of thoughts that he was passing by too quickly to be fully known to him. Midoriya, a large yet gentle hand shook him by his shoulder, rousing him to wakefulness. MMMH. Izuku pushed up his sunglasses from where they had slipped down his nose before opening his eyes and focusing on Tsuyu's face. Our stop is next. Tsuyu sat back down, crossing her legs at the ankle. Satsuki just got off at hers. MK. Izuku sat up, running a hand through his hair and the tangles that had formed from his 30-minute nap. He stretched his arms above his head, his shoulders both crunching with the movement. Thanks for waking me. I haven't really been sleeping much. Guess I'm still trying to get used to all this. All what? Izuku snorted, shaking his head. Everything. UA. Moving out. Making friends. All of it. Tsuyu glanced out the window before settling into her seat. There was more than enough time for a conversation. Not a social person. You could say that. Izuku chuckled darkly, thinking of all the chances he had been given to make friends. Almost none after he had turned 4 years old. Once Bakugo had found out he was quirkless, no one would come near him. He had been a social pariah at 4 years old. I've never been really good at it, either, Tsuyu admitted. Really? Izuku frowned, not understanding how that could be. But you're so nice. At my last school, there weren't exactly a lot of us who had morphic quirks and… Tsuyu just nodded, not seeing a need to add to the conversation. They both understood what she meant. The ingrained mistrust of morphic quirks. No matter how many heroes there were that looked a little different, no matter how many people did great things, it couldn't undo 200 years of fear. The silence continued until the train jolted to a stop at the station, and Izuku stood, slinging his backpack on, taking his duffel bag and looping the strap over his shoulders, before offering his hand to Tsuyu. Thank you. Tsuyu barely kept herself from croaking surprise when she was nearly lifted into the air. Izuku was just so soft-spoken and quiet. It was easy to forget about the strength he had. She brushed herself down, adjusting her skirt before asking, "Need help with your boxes? They're pretty heavy." So yes, the two of them shared a laugh, and Izuku handed over one of his boxes, snorting when it nearly slipped from his friend's grasp. Here, he helped balance it, in her arms, 2 boxes in his own arms as he followed Tsuyu off the train. Izuku looked around, peeking through the crowd and seeing if someone else from his friend group would pop up and join him. His life just seemed to work that way. Things happened in ways they shouldn't. When he didn't hear anyone yell his name, he spoke again. Your sister is a weird child. Tsuyu croaked. The sound followed with a small laugh. She sure is. Just wait till you meet my brother. Izuku laughed as he followed his friend through the UA gate, looking forward to it. It's just after lunch, the entire lunch break having passed by in a blur of laughter and good-natured camaraderie from a table with a certain 8 people at it. Thankfully, the arguments had been toned down. and only one squabble had been started by Shinsu when he had asked how anyone could be sure that today was Friday. Maybe someone had lost count hundreds of years ago, and now we just trust phones to be right. Izuku had stuck with the point that all technology was spy equipment, and everyone else. They all ignored him and yelled at each other. All in all, it had been a nice lunch. But now, it was time to change, for what Izuku had learned before was the trial of rescue. This was one of the main reasons why he wanted to be a hero. Fighting, sure, he was good at it. Great at it, even. Training with All Might had just added onto his training from Project Bloodlines. But there was so much more to being a hero than grappling with a villain in a grimy alley. The class had split up to change into their uniforms, and Izuku was looking down into the open box on the bench before him. His helmet wasn't there, but there was a visor in its place with something under it. Izuku picked up the visor, his vision immediately zeroing in on the tiny tracker embedded into the plastic of the visor frame. He knew that if he looked around the locker room to his classmates' costumes, he would find identical trackers hidden somewhere on each one. The tracker made him nervous, but it was just temporary. It was for his own good, for his own safety. There was a slip of paper under the visor, and Izuku pushed his sunglasses up into his hair, squinting to try and read the scrawling handwriting. It was futile, written in either a thin ink or light pencil. With a heavy sigh, Izuku lifted the note above his head, waving it slightly. "Can anyone read this?" Shinsu reached up, snagging the paper from his friend's hand. "Let me see it." He straightened the paper, flattening the wrinkles from where it had been folded. "Wow, this handwriting is atrocious," he mumbled before clearing his throat and reading aloud. "All right, let's see. Blah blah blah, destroyed helmet, blah blah, still fabricating replacement, etc. Okay, I can't read a single word of that, but I know that's not what it says. Ugh, whatever, you get the gist of it." Izuku just rolled his eyes, zipping up the stab-proof shirt before shrugging on the Nomex vest and strapping it closed across his chest. He glanced at the sheet of paper again, before taking it out of Shinu's hands and handing it over to Ida. "Hold on." Ida picked his glasses back up from where he had set them in his locker. "Though, it says, your helmet is still being fabricated after its destruction. So in the meantime, we hope this visor fits your requirements, Hatsume." There are little hearts around the name. Do you know them? No. Izuku took the note back, tucking it into his pocket for later. "Thank you." Shinsu shook his head. "HMPH, I prefer my version." Izuku lifted up the visor, tapping a finger over the embedded tracker. As he looked over the plastic, he listened to Shinsu ramble on beside him. "At least the visor is reflective. No potential for eye contact. But the bright orange goes real bad with your whole urban camouflage look." With a nod, Izuku took his sunglasses from his hair and placed them in his locker, closing the door and locking them in safety. Well, at least it's just training. But if it was stealth training, this would be no good. He would have to do something about that. "I'll have to have a talk and make sure the next visor is a flat black." From the end of the lockers, a voice broke through his planning. "Your sense of practicality is impeccable, but the aesthetic needs more darkness. ... Ho." Izuku looked up slightly, catching sight of a mid-length cloak. Or was that a cape? Before he could answer, Shinsu butted in. "Oh please, he doesn't have an aesthetic. He looks like the personification of boring." "That was sort of the point," Izuku muttered, raising his voice a little when Shinsu and the other teen, the one with the head of a bird and the quirk he was starting to get extremely curious of, looked his way. "It's supposed to be practical. Function over form. And all of this is stab-proof, flame-retardant, and certain sections of the shirt and vest are bulletproof. Should I change my costume?" The other teen, Izuku really needed to learn his name, tugged at the collar of his cloak, somehow frowning with his beak. "Personally, I think everyone should change their costume." He shrugged, bending down to lace up his boots, or at least the materials. And he wasn't going to say this, but in Ida's case, he would change the entire thing. That thing was a disaster. Once Izuku finished lacking up his boots, Izuku continued to think about the absolute mess that was Ida's hero costume as he followed the rest of the boys out of the locker room and towards the bus. He snorted in amusement, watching as Ida and Yaoyorozu ran themselves in circles trying to get everyone lined up for ease of seating. He could tell them it wasn't that sort of bus, but this was much more entertaining. And watching just how distraught they both got when they saw what sort of bus it was. That was just great. "Midoriya, right here." Tsuyu waved to him, and Izuku waved back, sitting down next to his friend. "How are you?" "I'm good." Izuku shrugged. "Well, I could drink more coffee." There was a dramatic outcry, and Izuku rolled his eyes. "No, I thought I was your best friend, Midoriya." Shinsu put on an expression of betrayal, gesturing between Izuku and Tsuyu as if it was some horrible thing. "What is this?" "Fug, well." Izuku shook his head, his cheeks burning from the attention being drawn his way. He wrung his hands, the ridged rubber of the palms of his gloves catching and arresting the motion. With a grin, he decided to be dramatic right back. "Friendship ranking is like this," he said, raising a finger with each name he listed off. "First is Tsuyu, then you, then Mirio, but you two are pretty closely tied. Then Uraraka, Then Ada. Sorry, he finished lamely, glancing over to Ada in apology. Ada shrugged. None taken. We don't really know each other that well. He's got a list for his friends. Well, Kaminari snorted, nudging Aoyama in the side before pulling back and rubbing his elbow. And also, oh, that's brutal. Jiru nodded, not even minding that this was a very loud and strange conversation that almost everyone on the bus could hear. There's being practical, then there's overkill. Aoyama and Mina jerked in surprise, not even realizing Hagakura was sitting between them. Friendship ranking. Overkill, but respectable. She clapped her gloved hands, the sound slightly muffled by the fabric. Shinsu, however, objected to his place in the ranking. How the hell am I almost tied with Tagata? We're gym buddies, Izuku answered, thinking of the ridiculous times that the two had together when All Might wasn't around. And when he was around, it wasn't like he was good at stopping teenage antics, or stopping them from throwing each other across the room. Ugh, jocks. Shinsu rolled his eyes and crossed his arms over his chest in a fake huff. I'm not a jock. Grunge jock. Tsuyu, help, I'm being bullied. I don't know, you might be a jock. Tsuyu tried her hardest not to laugh before she added, maybe it's just because your strength is so much like All Might. Izuku looked away, rubbing his neck nervously. Yeah, I get that a lot. But All Might can't make people vomit with eye contact. Shinsu amended. Izuku couldn't stop the sound that escaped him before he adjusted his visor, making sure it was still strapped in place properly. No, he cannot. Uraraka called out from her seat halfway back on the bus. And All Might doesn't trip over his feet like some lame anime side character. Doesn't crush his friends, either. Hey, now, Izuku rolled his eyes, realizing no one could see what he was doing. Well, at least I'm just the side character. I won't get caught up in the whole saving the universe plotline. Well, he might get killed in the saving the universe plotline. But that was beside the point. Bakugo scoffed, grumbling louder than he meant to. And All Might isn't part of the damn freak show. That is also true. Izuku grinned, showing too many teeth as he looked over to his ex-bully. But don't worry, Bakugo, you're number one on my list of rivals. He's got a list. Hagakure clapped her hands. To the rest of the bus, the action was only able to be noticed by the motion of her gloves. But Izuku tracked the motion by the moving of the girl's bones, wondering why for a moment why her costume didn't have sleeves before realizing he could just ask, Hey, Hagakure, right? Yeah, oh no, am I gonna get put on the rival list? I don't want to get killed by Mr. Mystery. Why doesn't your costume have full sleeves? He gestured to his own bicep, pointing to where the girl's costume cut off. Is it a practical choice, or just a fashion one? Oh, the support people actually made it out of my hair. Hagakure blinked in confusion, the glee of getting to talk about her costume fading quickly. Wait a second. Izuku turned, looking over the bus that had been stunned into silence. What? He was genuinely confused, looking back and forth over the bus. He couldn't exactly read the situation if there were no thoughts to read. Suddenly, the bus roared back into life, noise and questions shouted his way. You can see her. Oh my god. What is happening? You can see me. You can see Hagakure's costume. Mina leaned forward, secreting acid from her palms from all the excitement. Yes, Izuku leaned back, away from Mina and her enthusiasm. And you can see Hagakure, too. Tsuyu cocked her head to the side, glancing back and forth between the invisible girl and the only person who could see her. Yes. Holy shit, holy fuck. Kaminari was standing in the aisle, pointing and shouting excitedly. Midoriya can see invisible people. Wait, Izuku paused, gesturing vaguely to Hagakure. He chewed his lip before asking, You're invisible? Shit. As much as he didn't like reading people's minds and digging up their quirks, it might be better off if he did. Who knows how many invisible people are out there that he just didn't realize were invisible. Hagakure giggled, placing her hand on her chest. Duh, wait, she's wearing a costume. Kirishima's eyebrows drew together in confusion. Why can't we see her costume? Duh, again. Did you think I was just running around naked? I don't know what to think. Kirishima threw his hands in the air, his face burning from embarrassment. Wait, Mina asked, if you can see her. What does she look like? I don't know, Izuku answered flatly. How was he supposed to explain that he had only vague ideas of what most of his classmates looked like? That he mostly identified people off of the sound of their thoughts, their skeletal structure and organs. He saw people the way they saw themselves in the mirror and based his understanding of their looks off of their own memories. How? Yaorazu and Uraraka looked at each other, a mild confusion on both girls' faces. Because I can see like layers, muscle, organs, bone, and skin. But all at once. Kaminari shook his head, his expression mildly ill. Don't forget yuck, Kirishima added, laughing while simultaneously cringing in horror. And gross, Shinasu muttered in disgust. Yeah, you and yuck, Kaminari conceded, closing his eyes and shuddering at the image. And gross, how macabre, Takoyami added from the back of the bus. thankful that his beak kept the revulsion off his face. There were some things that even the holder of darkness thought were too gruesome to dwell upon. I mean, if you can make people vomit with eye contact, you probably don't have normal vision, Shinsu said thoughtfully, but he was still disgusted by the concept. Settle down back there, Aizawa called out, only to be ignored by 20 rowdy teenagers. The conversation continued, and Izuku could say with honesty that he was having so much fun he didn't even notice when the bus pulled to a stop outside a building bigger than an Olympic stadium. Izuku followed the rest of the class off the bus, taking in the massive building. Probably built with help from Cementos, otherwise, the construction costs would be astronomical. And speaking of astronomical, Izuku mentally laughed at his own joke when he saw Space Hero 13 step through the enormous double doors, gesturing them all inside. He looked away from what was within their spacesuit. The near void of their body was not something he was interested in trying to comprehend. Amazing. Is this the USJ or something? And it really was amazing. The entire building was filled with various disaster areas, housing nearly an entire city block and a scaled-down mountain, an active hurricane and perpetual whirlpool. It was simply one giant impossibility all in one place. Needless to say, Izuku loved it. It was controlled chaos, planned unpredictability, flood wrecks, landslides, fires, etc. The class turned their attention back to 13, the hero standing in front of the class and gesturing back to the extraordinary view. This is a practical training field I designed to simulate all types of accidents and disasters, and I call it, they spun around, ending in a pose half the class was certain came from the Sailor Moon reboot. The ultimate space for jams. It really is the USJ. I love Space Hero 13, Uraraka Whisper shouted, hopping up and down excitedly. They do amazing rescue work. And they're so chivalrous and gentlemanly. Shinsu pointed to one of the shapes circling the perimeter of the USJ, narrowing his eyes at the familiar silhouette. Is that one of the droids from the entrance exam? I think it is, Uraraka answered. Everyone loves a good robot. See you croaked. Izuku grimaced, side-eyeing a roving gunbot. HMGH. Not me. Moving around the cluster of chatting teens, Aizawa leaned in, voice low and thoughts full volume. Hey, so, where's you-know-who? He was supposed to be here already. From what I heard, 13 kept their voice just as low, barely heard through the helmet. It looks like he spent his commute heroing until all his time was up. They raised 3 fingers, prompting Aizawa to roll his eyes until they nearly hurt. Well, Yamada is going to be here in about. He did some mental math, wishing he had a watch. About 10 minutes. He looked around the edges of the building, catching sight of a few patrolling bots. He didn't know why Nedzu had insisted on the machines, but he wasn't going to question it. And we have security, so we should be fine. Before we begin, a few things. Or 4, or 5, or more. 13 began ticking things off on their fingers before cutting themselves off. I'm sure all of you are already aware. My quirk is Black Hole, a quirk with extraordinary destructive capabilities. Anything that enters its event horizon will be atomized as soon as it reaches the singularity. I wonder if we can witness spaghettification firsthand. Izuku whispered to himself, scientific curiosity taking hold. That's a quirk that's useful for search and rescue operations. Yes, 13 answered. However, it's also a quirk that could be used to harm people. The same as all of the quirks here. As 13 continued their speech, Izuku looked down at his hand, seeing augmented muscle and artificial tendons flex over the metal coating his bones. They were right. All of their quirks were capable of being used for cruelty. All of them were dangerous. All of them could have taken that turn down the road to villainy. A loud round of applause pulled him from his thoughts, and he jerked back to alertness just in time to watch the void that was their teacher take a bow. Bravo, Ada yelled, clapping enthusiastically. Bravo. Aizawa rolled his eyes, thankful his hair hid his exasperation. All right, first things, let's. Izuku gritted his teeth, a sudden stabbing pain lancing through his head, overlapping thoughts that seemed to be nearby and impossibly far away at the same time. It reminded him of when he had first read a mind, overwhelming and overbearing. Okay, Midoriya, so it's time. I'm so ready for this. Let's mess those kids up. Stick it to the heroes. Kill some little bastards. I'm not sure I can do this. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Izuku opened his eyes, his entire body seeming to throb with agony. Something's wrong, he gasped out, unsure when he had dropped to his knees. His hands were clamped over his ears, doing nothing to drown out the thoughts that seemed to echo in his head. He stared out to the center of the pavilion, a strange void opening in front of the fountain, the cascade of thoughts only getting louder as it widened. Aizawa-sensei. Izuku couldn't focus on who was speaking. Is this part of the training? Out of the portal came a sound, a screech and wail of pain and horror that pierced through his every brain cell like a white-hot blade. There was something in there that was worse than dozens of villains. One single thing, lifting over the twisted howls and screams from the mass of consciousnesses forced into one form. There's a single voice forged from the frenzy. A mournful cry, more animalistic than human. That which should not be. Help me. In the center of the mass of villains, there's a focal point, some sort of commander. It's the same presence as before. Back from the break-in. All Might, your time is now. The thought was so overwhelming. Izuku almost missed the warning from his teacher, even as he pushed his classmates further back behind himself and towards the door. Stay back, Aizawa said, his voice far too clear and calm for the situation. Those are real villains. Everything fades to the background as Izuku freezes in place when he sees it. Twisted, corpses upon corpses, mangled and put back together. Something he could understand. Something from his world. Yeah, let's kill some kids. Help me. Damn, this place is huge. Yue. Got money to throw around. It hurts so much. Seriously. All this just to take down All Might and some kids. Someone, please. God, Shigaraki freaks me out. Make it stop. Thanks, portal dude. It hurts. It's afraid. It's in pain. It's not in control of its own body. As much as he doesn't like to, Izuku can see himself in this creature, can feel its desperation and how much it wants help. Whoever it used to be, they didn't want this. They don't want to be this way. Shinsu placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder, trying to steady his friend. Are you all right, Midoriya? On his other side, Tsuyu did the same, gripping his arm and helping him to stand. Midoriya, are you okay? Yeah. Staggering up to his feet, Izuku pushed his friends behind him, running on instinct and deeply ingrained orders. Okay. Protect his fellow soldiers. Destroy the enemy. Achieve this at any cost. He squared his shoulders back, baring his teeth as he listened for whoever was in charge of this army. Whoever was giving orders to that thing. Think of your training, Izuku thought to himself, pushing his friends further back towards the door. Take out the heavy hitter, then take down the general. He just needed to find the general. The one with that madness he had heard before. Around the group of villains, the security robots began to converge, the ones with guns starting to open fire, their virtually harmless rounds from the exam replaced with non-lethal beanbag rounds. At least a dozen of the encroaching villains went down before the rest of the group turned on the machines, using their quirks to try and beat through the reinforced armor plating. Away from the throng of violence, a sinister smooth voice rang out over the cluster of students, its source a void filled with insubstantial smoke and at its center, a physical form. Eraserhead. And number 13. According to the schedule we procured, All Might was supposed to be here. Where is he? Izuku jerked to alertness, recognizing that madness from before. He searched the crowd of villains, trying to find its source. Where is All Might? The villain that had the thoughts tinged with madness stepped through the portal, one hand scratching at their neck. Izuku blanched, staring at the hands that gripped the villain's limbs. We went through all this trouble, the villain rasped, rounded up so many extras, and he's not even here. Those hands were real. Those were human hands. Izuku thought he might be sick. What sort of person would do that sort of thing? The villain grinned, a crazed expression partially hidden under the hand he wore on his face. I wonder if he'll show up. If we kill some kids, the symbol of peace must die. Izuku began to subtly push his friends closer and closer to the door, knowing that this would only end in bloodshed. He just had to try his hardest to keep it from being those he cared about. What about the intruder alarms? Yaoyorozu took a step back to keep from being pushed back, not even having noticed when those in front of her had stepped back. At the front of the group, something, or someone, she realized, was pushing them away from the group of villains. Of course we have some setup, but Izuku tuned out number 13 seconds response, trying to keep himself calm. Somewhere to his left, Todoroki was going on about how they must have an objective, how villains wouldn't just break into the most heavily defended school in Japan without reason. Izuku turned to him, stating clearly, isn't it obvious? They want to kill All Might. Kill All Might. They're going to need more than this rabble to do that. What about that big guy? Eraserhead's voice cut over the mounting worries of his students, and he pulled his goggles down over his eyes, his capture tool snapping to life with the flick of a wrist. It doesn't matter why they're here. He turned away from his class, steeling himself for a fight. Number 13, I'm counting on you to start evacuation. Sensei, are you going to fight them on your own? Shinsu called out in disbelief as Eraserhead launched himself into the fray. Down from the throng of villains, a few voices could be heard. I thought it was just supposed to be 13 and All Might. Who the hell is that? And what's up with all these robots? Over the cacophony of the fight, Izuku's eyes locked onto a cluster of metal and plastic deep in the brain of the thing, wedged between the two hemispheres and coiling down into and around the brainstem. It was familiar. He remembered others in the program walking around with the same thing embedded in the base of their skull before everything was shut down. The control chip. How? The only people who could create them are dead. All the scientists and doctors killed and erased from existence. Shinsu's voice pulled him from his mounting panic. Is he going to be all right? Shinsu flinched as Eraserhead narrowly dodged a flying fist. There's so many of them. It'll be all right. He's a group combat expert. Izuku said quietly, trying to keep from being overheard by the villains. And we'll have backup soon. There are trackers in all of our uniforms. What? Shinsu asked, dragged out of his mounting anxiety with those words. What are you talking about? Keeping his voice low, Izuku tried to calm Shinsu and the rest of his friends. If the signal gets cut off, we'll be rescued. Hiroraka shook her head, grabbing onto Tsuyu's arm and dragging her with her while backing up away from the stairs, putting more distance between herself and the villains. As comforting as that is, we need to get out of here. As everyone panicked, a silky smooth voice flowed over the crowd. I'm afraid I can't allow that. The villain had appeared from out of nowhere, a smoky figure shrouded in black mist, a high metal collar around where their neck should be. Portals, or maybe teleportation, Izuku thought as he stared at the villain, peering through the mist to the body beneath. Their thoughts were orderly, startlingly so. But digging into their mind was more difficult than expected. It was as if it was fragmented, pieces locked away and separated from the rest. Izuku gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus and dig deeper. Can use quirk on themselves or others. Coordinate-based. Even as he dug and clawed his way through their mind, the villain bowed politely as if nothing was happening. Greetings, we are the League of Villains. Apologies for the intrusion, but we took it upon ourselves to enter UA, the base of heroes, to engage All Might in combat. The voice had no emotion in it, bland and dull as it spoke of an apparent desire to fight the nation's strongest hero. Perhaps he would even allow us to destroy him. The figure within the mist cocked its head to the side, looking around itself. But he doesn't seem to be here. Has something been changed? The voice tisked. No matter. This is my role. This mist that shrouded the villain's body began to spread, trying to wrap itself around the crowd of students. Before the portals could be completed, Bakugo and another student, Kirishima, launched themselves forward, Bakugo wielding explosions and Kirishima striking with a hardened fist. Bakugo shouted, barely able to be heard over the explosions of his quirk. Bet you didn't think we'd be able to take you on before you could take us out. The mist reformed around the villain's body. That was quite reckless. But I suppose it should be expected of the hero world's golden eggs. Number 13 tried to warn the two of them, shouting for them to retreat before the mist spread over the group once again. You will be scattered, and tortured, and slain. The mist-covered villain's thoughts were the last thing Izuku heard before he felt his feet fall out from under him, the portal's exit location painfully apparent to him when he glanced down. The flood zone, Izuku thought, pulling in a massive breath as he fell through the nothingness. I need to be ready for anything. Izuku hits the water hard enough to knock the wind out of him, but he sucks in another breath just as his head slips under the surface. He can't swim, but he couldn't risk drowning. I need to add an oxygen tank to my helmet, he thinks as his chest begins to ache from holding in his breath. For a moment, he struggles to swim upwards, but all his movements do is slow his sinking by a few increments. He's sinking fast, faster than most normal people would, his weight dragging him down, deeper into the freezing water. But it's still strangely serene. Quiet. It's cold and the water's already soaked through the fabric of his uniform, but it's calming in a way. The thoughts from the masses of villains around him feel muffled and faint, as if they're far away, barely on the edges of his consciousness. It's almost peaceful, falling through the water, the artificial currents tugging gently at his limbs. The stillness of it all. If the lack of oxygen wasn't wringing the edges of his vision black, he would want to stay down here, falling until he lost track of time, of where he was, of everything. His back slams into something as he continues to run out of air. At first, he thinks it's the bottom of the massive pool. That is, until whatever it was screeched underwater, clawing at him in pained fury. As the villain snapped at him with sharkish jaws, Izuku twisted around, his hand tangling in something as he struggled. Whatever it was felt flimsy, almost like a cord. Izuku wrapped his fingers around whatever it was, giving it a yank, a feeling of surprise and delight burning through him the same way his lungs ached and burned for a fresh breath when he realized it was the feed lines to an oxygen tank. In his struggle to not exhale, he didn't even notice when he kicked the sharkish villain in the throat, sending them drifting back through the water. Sending them back through the water without their oxygen tank, the feed line still tangled in Izuku's hand, the tank floating gently before him. Izuku pulled the tank closer, securing it to him before taking the feed lines and securing them to his face, finally allowing himself to exhale the stale air in his lungs in a flurry of bubbles. Looking over to the villain, Izuku cringed, seeing a pair of broken arms and a fractured skull. He hadn't even done that on purpose. Izuku kept sinking, even as he saw Tsuyu kick the villain in the side of the face, sending him spinning through the water. Tsuyu turned to Izuku, ready to swim over to try and pull him from the water. Izuku shook his head, pointing to the oxygen tank, then to the bottom of the pool, which was rapidly approaching. He was too heavy to lift, but he would be fine. Tsuyu kept herself afloat, kicking as she reached out towards Izuku again, getting another head shake in return. With a nod, Tsuyu kicked a few times to reach the surface, trying to find where the third of the group had landed in the water. Breathing easily now, Izuku finally hit bottom, the impact almost nothing as he landed feet first. Miraculously, none of the villains had spotted him yet, but that would probably change soon. The quiet in his mind helped him focus, and Izuku looked around the bottom of the pool, almost laughing in relief when he found what he had been searching for. A drain. A massive drain, but still a drain. He tried to run for it, making progress, but not as much as he would like for how much energy he was expending. With a glance to the gauge on the tank, he redoubled his efforts, kicking off with one foot, landing on the other, almost like leaping. He had only a quarter tank left, he had to go faster. He could see the bars over the drain, thick and heavy. They would be impossible to move. Kicking off one final time, Izuku tried to aim directly at the drain, knowing he would have to bend the bars or try to rip them from the concrete. He hit the drain feet first, bending down immediately and wrapping a hand around one of the bars as he braced his feet on either side of the drain. What the hell is that? Is that a kid over there? The thoughts were garbled, distorted from the water. Shit, he had to work faster. Izuku began to kick with as much strength as he dared, each impact rattling the bars and warping them. He looked up, seeing 3 villains break away from the horde, turning towards him. Izuku began kicking in earnest, slamming down one foot, then the other, not letting up for even a second. He could see the fatigue fractures begin to spiral through the bars, spreading in a spiderweb pattern with each and every kick. He was so close, and so were the villains. He just needed one more good kick. Izuku slammed down on the bars one more time, finally able to shove his arm through the hole he had created in the grate, smacking his hand over the emergency override. Even underwater, he could hear the alarm blaring above him. Emergency override in progress. Emergency override in progress. Please keep exit the flood zone. Emergency override. The alarm continued as the artificial whirlpool above was forcibly shut down, all the water becoming a real vortex as hundreds of thousands of liters were drained to one point. Izuku scrambled away from the destructive forces of the vortex, using all his strength to shove his left arm elbow deep into the concrete that made up the bottom of the pool. Behind his visor, Izuku watched in detached horror as villain after villain was pulled in the vortex, the bars breaking fully out of place as dozens of bodies slammed against them with the full fury of a whirlpool. Just as Izuku began to think that the worst of it might be over, there was the squeal of metal on concrete. Even though the water it reverberated through everything. Izuku turned his gaze from the macabre pile of bodies over the drain, eyes widening behind his visor as he saw the ship from the artificial shipwreck dragging along the bottom of the now half-empty pool, on a collision course for the unable to escape villains. It was moving quickly, but Izuku could only hope that the pool would drain completely before it could reach the pileup of villains. Izuku couldn't do anything to stop it. It was all he could do to hold on against the immense forces of the vortex, all he could do to hold on to his nearly empty oxygen tank, and all he could do to breathe. Even if there was no water, Izuku knew his limits. He would never be able to move an object that size on his own. As the water finally nearly fully drained, the boat was sliding on its side now, creaking and screeching as it continued on its path. Behind the boat and its ruptured hull, there was a slick of black liquid floating in glistening puddles across the remaining water. With the water finally gone, Izuku stood shakily, the boat finally sliding to a halt against the pile of groaning villains. The injuries, broken spines, shattered limbs, half-drowned lungs, brains without oxygen for the entire time the vortex had been active. He looked away, knowing there had to be casualties. He had done that, almost adding insult to injury. The blaring emergency alarm cut itself off. The flood zone has been drained. Thank you, and have a pleasant day. Midoriya. Tsuyu called his name, clambering over the railing of the sideways ship. Shinsu followed her, trying not to fall over as he ran shakily. Oh my god, Midoriya. Extracting his arm from the shattered cement, Izuku turned to his friends, the two of them running to him, slipping in wet patches, righting themselves, and continuing to run. Shinsu slammed into Izuku at full speed, nearly knocking them both to the ground. Holy shit, what was that? Was that why you didn't want me to pull you up? Tsuyu cocked her head to the side, blinking slowly as she tried to shove down her panic. She grabbed onto Izuku's arm. Steadying herself, she sought proof that her friend was still alive, upright, and breathing. She grabbed his arm with her other hand, searching for some sort of injury. As far as she could tell, her friend was fine. Looked horrified and a little traumatized, but he was alive. Izuku just nodded, limbs aching from exhaustion. But his heart was racing from the artificial adrenaline his organs were pumping through his veins. He let Tsuyu continue to pat him down, understanding the need to make sure he was alive and well. What do we do now? Shinsu asked, his chest heaving as he looked around, taking in the disaster that had been wrought. He turned to Izuku, raising an eyebrow at Tsuyu's fretting and manhandling. Do we run away? Izuku furrowed his eyebrows. Why are both of you looking at me like that? You kept a pretty level head even while sinking, Tsuyu added, not taking her eyes off of her friend. And you're good with plans. You kept us from dying, Shinsu added, pushing his hair out of his face. So what do we do now? Okay. Good points. Izuku took a few calming breaths, dropping the oxygen tank to the side as he tried to make sense of his racing thoughts. First things first, he said, pointing to the edge of the pool. We need to get out of here. There's an exhausting energy in the nurse's office across campus, and it only intensifies when Toshinori settles on the undersized chair, trying to catch his breath through the bloody coughs. He overdid it this morning, and he checks his phone. He overdid it and only has 10 minutes left. He can't believe he's been so irresponsible. Midoriya keeps telling him to be careful with his time, to not waste it on things other heroes can handle. It's just hard for him to ignore someone in need. When he sees someone in trouble, he always runs to help. Toshinori coughed into his hand, bloody and rasping. Maybe he just needed to quit while he was ahead, focus on training Tagata and start limiting his work. Oh, who was he kidding? If All For One was really behind the new villain threat, he would never be able to quit. He doesn't want the task to fall on his successor. He just knows that Tagata would think he was obligated to fight All For One and get killed in the process. And if it wasn't Tagata, then it would be Midoriya. The reckless little bastard would run headfirst into danger if he thought it was necessary. Both of them were reckless little bastards, in all honesty. It would be endearing if it didn't make him worry so much. Toshinori sighed, grabbing a tissue to clean the blood off of his hands and getting ready to leave when the door to the office opened. He looked down to the diminutive figure, prepared for Recovery Girl to hit him with her cane before he realized it was actually Principal Nezu. There you are. Oh, hello, Principal Nezu. Toshinori settled back in his chair, getting the feeling he should try and get the principal in a good mood. Your fur is looking very neat today. It's the keratin. Humans just can't achieve this level of luster, Nezu said, immediately seeing through the attempt to butter him up. But a compliment is a compliment, even if it's flattery. But I was here to see if you had something to say about this. Nezu pulled out a tablet with a flourish, bringing up the top articles. He hummed, reading off the headlines as he scrolled. All Might stops hit and run. All Might prevents 3 villains in 1 hour, Nezu continued scrolling. And it goes on and on. He stowed the tablet back in his inner vest pockets. Do you have anything to say about that? Shit. Toshinori coughed into his hand, keeping his gaze anywhere but the principal. I thought you might say that. Nezu chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mirth. You really haven't changed a bit, have you? Running into danger whenever you have the chance. Toshinori stayed quiet, getting the feeling that Nezu hadn't finished making his point yet. Nezu's expression darkened subtly, his ears lying back. The limit on your heroics just proves you can't keep this pace. It's unrealistic. And you don't want your successor to. There was a ringing from Nezu's pocket, and the principal pulled out his phone, black eyes widening when he read the alert. Oh dear, what is it? Toshinori leaned forward, not liking the concerned tone in the principal's voice. Nezu turned the screen towards Toshinori. All of the students' GPS trackers. The signals have been lost. Toshinori jolted to his feet, coughing blood when he forced himself to activate One for All. Then what are we waiting for? We need to go now. Nezu tucked his phone away, staring up at Toshinori. His voice stern, he put his foot down. You're not going anywhere. These villains are here for you. And you only have 10 minutes left. But nothing, Nezu shook his head. President Mike was already on his way and should be there soon. And there are over a dozen security bots at the USJ. I can't stay here while my son could be in danger. With a sigh, Nezu stepped aside. Damn it, Yagi-san. Just go. Go help your boy. He took his phone back out, sending a quick text to more heroes. The rest of us will catch up. Toshinori nodded, all but knocking down the door to the office in his haste to leave. His students were in trouble. His son was in trouble. He had to get there as soon as he could. Whatever awful things could happen, he couldn't risk it. The scene before the 3 of them is harrowing. The remaining security droids are doing their best, fighting against villains that have gained the upper hand. But the worst is in the center of the scene. Eraserhead is pinned under that thing. More broken bones than not. Injuries that if they aren't treated soon, could be fatal. He's lost too much blood. Izuku knew what he had to do. There was only one thing he could do. The creature's mind is begging for itself to stop, to make it end. Under the fists of the beast, Eraserhead has resigned himself to his likely death. As long as the kids are safe. It's okay, Izuku whispered to himself, trying to prepare himself for what he was about to do. It's not human, but it was. It was just like him. Human, but made to be something else. Pain, pain, pain. Please God, make it stop, make it stop, make it stop. It's not really human. Please help me, please, please, it hurts. It's not. HELPME. Izuku couldn't stop himself, and he rocketed forward, ignoring the cries from his classmates, easily dragging himself out of Tsuyu and Shinsu's grip, leaving it all behind him as he thundered forward, each step cracking the cement. He jumped over unconscious villains, leaping over a portal that snapped open in front of him, vaulting over the remaining security bots, and he stepped up, bracing one foot on the knee of the beast, climbing up to its shoulders and pulling off his gloves. It's going to be okay, he whispered, watching as Thing's eyes rolled back to watch him, body still obeying its master's orders. I'm here to help. I don't want to do this. Save me, save me, save him. As he steeled himself for what he had to do, Izuku cleared his mind, straightening his hand and slowly plunging it into the beast's exposed brain. It sunk deeper, a hot knife through soft and fatty flesh, and he reached for the small bit of metal and plastic wrapped around the brainstem. The tendrils are tangled in too deep in the gray matter, and Izuku has to yank and twist, pulling half of the brainstem up with his fist, shredding through freshly regenerated brain matter on the way out. The beast froze, one massive fist raised above the crumpled form of Eraserhead. NOMU. Kill him. The Namu didn't move, its eyes rolling back in its head to watch as Izuku tossed the control chip and brainstem aside. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Eraserhead. Izuku tries to make himself heard, knowing that his teacher is in pain and can barely move as it is. Can you erase his healing? Aizawa nodded as he tried to roll to his feet, one arm hanging limply at his side before he dropped back down in a heap, keeping his focus on the Namu. It's going to be okay, Izuku whispered as he shoved his hands back into the Namu's brain, the flesh tearing apart under his fingers, no longer healing. You're safe now, he lied, words coming too easy. It's all over. Then it was. His hand severed the connection to life with ease, and it all stopped. The Namu pitched forward, brain oozing from its open skull, spilling and painting across the pavement. As the mine went dark, Izuku collapsed to his knees, an empty ache in his chest. He felt the phantom pains of tears that would never fall as he screamed, a wordless wail. Anyone who would hear would assume it was fear or pain. But Eraserhead knew better. It was grief, agony of the soul. I'm so sorry, Izuku whispered, drawing a brain-coated hand over the Namu's beak. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He repeated the words until they lost their meaning, becoming nothing but liquid sorrow pouring from his lips. NOMU. Izuku was so blind in his grief, he missed the way Eraserhead saved his life, erasing Shigaraki's quirk before he could make contact. But he wasn't so blind he missed the way the open hand slammed into the back of his head, dislodging his visor. Time seemed to slow down as the visor dropped into his lap and rolled down until it came to a stop, the reflective plastic resting against the blood-coated beak of the Namu. A shudder ran over his skin, and Izuku rose from his knees, the hole in his chest filled with something fetid and rotted. Something inside of his chest snapped, and he turned, hands pulled into fists, and shaking as his blood boiled. You killed my Namu, Shigaraki snarled, one hand scratching bloody furrows into his neck. Okay, shut the fuck up. Izuku sprinted forward. He could feel the muscles in his calves begin to stretch, to not quite tear but coming oh so close, but he pushed forward. In his rage, he lost control of his plan, falling back onto his original training. He was fighting to kill. Again he shouted, genuine wrath flooding his body. Shut the fuck up. Shigaraki was fast, but the military had trained Izuku well. He was faster, stronger, better trained. He was the perfect soldier. He ducked the outstretched hand, the open palm scraping over his shoulder as he slid his own hand under the desiccated hand the villain wore on his face. Izuku squeezed, grabbing the villain by the face and dragging him forward and down, slamming him to the ground. He whipped around, slamming his fist where the villain's face had been, leaving a bloody crater from the impact. Shigaraki rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding certain death as a blood-coated hand passed his head. Shards of concrete cut into his skin as he dodged. You little bastard. He killed Namu. That thing was made to fight All Might. Izuku swore he could see red, and on instinct, he let himself rip into the villain's mind, yanking and pulling the pages, cracking the spine of the book. Tell me why you deserve to live, he howled, forcing himself to keep on the offensive, dodging the villain's open-handed strikes as he pushed forward. Dodge, palm strike, dodge, redirect a blow by grabbing the opponent's elbow, dodge, calf kick, dodge, all in the breath of a heartbeat. Tell me, he screamed as he grabbed the villain by the wrist, the bones collapsing in his hold as he yanked them towards him, the sickening crunch the first sign he had dislocated their shoulder. He kept pulling as he swung with his free hand, slamming his fist into the villain's jaw, feeling the bone crack and snap under his knuckles. He pulled at his mind harder, dragging information long forgotten to the front and center, searching for weakness and rot in the pages. A name, one that had been hidden away under mental blocks and glued together pages that shredded and crumbled under his force, and he shouted it into the world. Shimura Tenko, you killed your own family. He jumped back, the muscles in his calves finally tearing. His hand reached twitched towards his back for a blade he didn't carry. He pushed through it, the agony fueling him. The muscles were still attached to the bone, and he had to win this. Tell me why you deserve to live. He screamed, a wordless sound like before, but this one twisted, dark, murderous intent. Tell me why I shouldn't kill you right now. Shigaraki Tamura. Izuku whirled around, his eyes landing on the source of the thoughts. The remaining rational part of his brain reminded him that that one made portals, and he turned back, away from the mist-covered villain, and lunged forwards, letting himself slam into his opponent. He grappled with the villain, Shigaraki screeching as Izuku grabbed the dead hand from their face and began to crush it in his own. Father, Shigaraki struggled under the weight of the teenager, trying to free his hands where they were pinned under his own back. Give back, father. I'll kill you. I'll kill you, he snarled over and over as he thrashed, making the mistake of making eye contact with the hero in training. Dead and empty black eyes stared back with a burning heat. Nausea rose up in his stomach, and he turned his head to the side, spitting vomit across the pavement. His mind is spinning. He feels like he's falling apart from the inside out, and he just wants this to end. Memories flash before his eyes, out of order and disjointed, as if they're being pulled out of his mind. There's a pulling, a tearing feeling. This isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't right. Continuing to squeeze, Izuku felt the dead bones break and crunch, and he dropped the mutilated hand into the puddle of vomit, a sick sense of satisfaction flaring through him at the villain's anguish. He knows he shouldn't enjoy it, but he's reveling in the destruction. Father, Izuku felt the air shift behind him, and he leaped forward and off of Shigaraki, whipping around to see a portal snap shut where his neck had been. That was an attempt to kill, he thought, his mind racing, pushing itself on fumes. He's tired. He can't keep up this pace. He hasn't had to for too long. The adrenaline in his system is the only thing keeping him going. Where was his backup? Shouldn't the heroes be here by now? The signals were cut off so long ago. Such quick-wittedness, but as expected of a golden egg. This isn't from UA, Izuku snapped, his adrenaline beginning to wear thin, the haze of rage over his mind beginning to dull, an all-encompassing agony searing through his soul. But that won't stop me, he snarled, not seeing a point in restraining Shigaraki. The villain too injured to keep fighting, physically and mentally beaten down. Izuku raised his fists. The blood and brain matter streaked up his arms, only adding to his menace. He had never been trained on fighting a portal user, but he had to assume it was similar to fighting a speedster or jumper. He just had to get the villain to look him in the eyes, then hit them with the 3-hit kick when they're distracted. Go for the joints, the soft tissues, then the eyes. So caught up in his focus, he doesn't hear the doors slam open, doesn't see the light shining through. He doesn't hear the shots ring out, or the thankful cries of his classmates. It looks like I'll have to cut this short. The mist villain warped behind Izuku, carefully picking up his injured commander, using his mist to absorb and redirect the attacks from the incoming heroes. Shigaraki Tamura is in no shape to face All Might at this time. But this is not the last time you shall hear from the League of Villains. The mist villain opens a portal beneath his feet as Izuku scrambles to find their name in their mind. Kurogiri, he learns. And there's something else, something that is locked away, whispers in his mind the name Oboro. Whatever the true name of the man, he slowly sinks into the portal, his eyes locked on the teen who had caused such destruction. The portal is snapping closed, but Izuku can't see it. The only thing he sees is the price of his lies lying in the center of the room, blood mixing with water from the leaking fountain. Bloodied and broken. The Namu doesn't seem like so much of a monster now as Izuku steps forward, bending down and caressing its bloodied beak. He lied. He said it would all be okay. Said he was here to help. He lied. He doesn't hear the heroes come to save them, doesn't see how they sweep in. All he sees now was the victim of his lies. If you could have any quirk at all, what kind of quirk would you want? I want a quirk like All Might, so I could be strong and save people with a smile. A quirk like All Might, you say? Yes, he's the coolest hero ever, and I want to be a hero just like him one day. I'm sure you will be, Midoriya. It's going to be okay. You'll be an amazing hero. You're safe now. You'll do great things. It's all over. I'm here to help. Gasping for breath, Izuku jolted awake in a panic. He sat up, looking around the unfamiliar room. Where the hell was he? There was a steady beeping of a heart rate monitor, and the subtle sounds of various machines. Hospital room, and 4 needle connected to a saline drip in his arm. From the way his body felt, there was morphine in the secondary bag. Where was his uniform? What had happened? When had he gotten here? Last thing he remembered, he had lost control. He had lied to the Namu. And he had. He felt sick. He couldn't pull in a full breath. He couldn't. Izuku tangled his hands in his hair, drawing his knees up into his chest. He rocked back and forth, the reality of what he had done settling in. He had killed someone. He had ended a life. He pulled his hands from his hair, looking over his arms. Bandages, crisp and white, were wrapped from his wrist to the shoulder, compressing his healing muscles. His mind superimposed the image of his hands, streaked with blood and brain matter over his clean skin. He had ended a life. It had been a pained and twisted life, but still a life. What gave him that right? What gave him that power to take a life? His heart rate monitor stayed steady, only emphasizing the guilt and horror that washed over him. 64 beats per minute, no matter what he did, no matter what he saw, no matter what terrible things he took part in. 64 beats per minute. Z-Draft's fight, human spawnling. Izuku jerked in surprise before he lifted his head and turned around quickly, catching sight of a large figure huddled on the windowsill peering in. 2 triangle ears and a swishing tail against the backdrop of the windswept city. "See, cat, will you let me in? Little Izuku." The cat pawed at the window pane with one oversized paw, cocking his head to the side. "It is quite windy out here." Slowly, Izuku slung his legs over the side of the hospital bed, the bed shaking and rattling in its frame as he moved. The floor was freezing under his feet as he limped over to the window, noticing for the first time the bandages wrapped around his legs, from his ankle to the thigh. Pain spiked through his legs, his injured calves throbbing with every little movement. His hands were shaking slightly as he unlocked the window, the evening wind cutting through the thin hospital gown he wore. He poked his head out the window, trying to see how the cat had even climbed this high. There was no fire escape, no drainpipe. Really, there was no way to have gotten up here, especially with the sheer size of the beast. Izuku wasn't a wildlife expert, but one faded memory of a nature preserve made him think the cat was nearly the size of a lynx. So how on earth had it gotten up on the 4th floor of the hospital? Spazabo, little Izuku. Nah, no problem. He closed the window as soon as the cat leapt through and onto the floor. Izuku turned, watching the cat jump up onto his bed and seat himself upon his pillow. Even while seated, the massive cat took up nearly half of the bed on his own. But he curled his tail around his body tightly. Why are you here?" "To see you, of course," the cat responded, as if it was perfectly normal to show up in a hospital without ever being told where he was. "How did you find me?" This right here was the reason he had been so anxious around the cat in the first place. The subtle strangeness that followed them around like a cloud. "I heard about your encounter," the cat thought vaguely, giving no more information. He flicked his tail against the pillow a few times before flattening his ears back. "How are you feeling?" "Terrible." Izuku couldn't stop himself from shaking. His hands, his entire frame trembled when he thought about what he had done. His stutter came through in full force, his mind focusing on panicking, not language. I killed someone today and I. Did you enjoy it?" "No." Izuku nearly reeled back with the intensity in his words. "How could you even? And do you regret it?" The cat interrupted, watching Izuku intensely. "Yes, I feel awful about it." "Then you are no monster. It was a matter of survival." Izuku froze, catching a glimpse of people moving in the hall outside his hospital room door. "SHH." The cat perked his ears forward, turning his face towards the door and sniffing the air for any changes. Izuku's hands were still shaking as he stepped towards the door. He grabbed the IV pole and dragged it behind him as he tried to focus enough to listen in. His head felt clouded, and listening to anything other than the thumping of his headache was almost impossible. He closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against the wall. "I don't want to tell him, you tell him." "No fucking way." Naomasa's in a damn mood about this. 2 officers were walking through the hall, uniformed and halfway through their shifts, coming back from the precinct to the hospital. "Well, you've heard him talk about the kid. It's obvious he already knows him." "Oh, definitely." One of the officers nudged the other and lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Do you think he's his kid?" "He is holding on to the kid's stuff." "Yeah. Are you stupid?" "No." The first officer scoffed so loudly it nearly echoes down the hall. "They don't even look alike." "They kinda do," the second detective muttered. "Maybe. Secret kid. I hate you." The first officer pressed the button for the elevator at the end of the hall before sighing heavily. "Now, you get to tell him the captain thinks he's too close to this case." "Oh, come on, man." Izuku sighed in relief as the elevator dinged, and the doors opened, and the 2 officers left, leaving the hall empty once again. At least he knew where his things were. Detective Naomasa would keep everything safe until he could collect them, or just break into his apartment and take them back. He does know where he lives, but he was getting off track. He turned back to the room, leaning heavily against the wall. He couldn't stay here, with all these doctors with their questions and their scans and blood draws and tests. And more questions. "We've got to get out of here." The cat nodded, the best that a cat can nod, before standing, claws digging into the pillow before retracting. "Yes, it is likely they will return soon. With questions. Oh God, they probably have me on record." Izuku buried his face in his hands, trying to force himself to focus with no success. He shook his head, eyes closed tight as his heartbeat thudded steady and unchanging in his chest. "I'm gonna need to delete stuff off a computer. I don't know how to use a computer." "I do, little spawnling." You do?" Izuku asked hopefully, raising his head from his hands. He peeked over his fingertips, looking for where the cat had gone. The cat had somehow moved silently from the bed and was seated in the swivel stool where a doctor would typically sit. It was a ridiculous image. "Will you help me?" "For a price." Izuku eyed the cat warily. "And what's that?" "Nothing ever comes for free. Shelter. The human who lives in the same house as I is returning to his homeland." The Behemoth attempted to shrug, the movement lost under his fur, except for the fact that Izuku could see the bones move, and it was straight horrifying. You want to live with me? Izuku slowly processed what he had just heard, barely able to make sense of it. Did the dorms have room for a cat that was almost the size of a large child? Where would he sleep? The couch, on the floor, in his own bed. Izuku had never had a pet before, but he had the feeling this wasn't a pet situation. Want is a strong word. The cat swished his tail in a manner that even Izuku could tell was indignant. I simply need a place to live with a human with hands. And you have a home? Yes. And opposable thumbs. Yes. But he didn't have anything set up yet. Just a bunch of boxes stacked in a decent-sized room with an attached bathroom. I was supposed to move into the UA dorms today. Looks like he would have to push that back for a few days. He still needed to collect the rest of his things. And he had to pack up Eden. Make no mistake, human, the cat hissed between his fangs. I am no little kitty pet and will not be treated as such. Got it? I won't make that mistake. Definitely not a pet situation. And he still needed to get his bed and desk. And his coffee maker. Would he have space for a giant cat? And there was another thing. I know I asked this before, he said quietly, but what am I supposed to call you? The cat tilted his head to the side before purring. Call me Behemoth. Behemoth swished his tail. Now let us leave this place. All right. Need to find an actual computer. Something with security clearances. I think we need to find one in the doctor's office. God, he barely even knows how to type. He's so bad at it. Izuku was so tired. He wanted to scream with frustration. He had just woken up, and all he wanted to do was go back to his semi-normal life, not whatever this was. He ticked off the things he needed to do before he could leave. Then I need clothes and medications and to not be seen. Need to erase security footage, so we need to reach the security office. Izuku's hands shook, and he looked down, his gaze landing on the heart rate monitor clipped to his index finger. Right, he needed to remove this somehow without making it look like he was flatlining. At least his impossibly steady heartbeat made it impossible to tell he had woken up. Heart rate monitors pick up the electrical field, so maybe he could fake it with some sort of device, or just clip it to the clock. Maybe it could be hooked up to the computer in the room and fed a recording of his heart on loop. Suddenly, Izuku felt like an absolute idiot. He could just disable the alarm so it wouldn't go off if he removed the monitor. Spawnling, are you alright? I'm fine. I just need to find the alarm for the heart rate monitor, he replied, approaching the monitor itself and trying to focus on its inner working. Machines as complicated as this one were the bane of his existence. This is why he loved his coffee maker. It was simple. No computer chips or anything like this. Behemoth cocked his head to the side. The cat admittedly didn't have much experience with human heart monitors, but he had a feeling this was much more simple than Izuku was making it. Ignoring the human's struggles, Behemoth flicked his tail and jumped off the stool, walking over to where the clipboard with the physical copy of Izuku's file hung, clipped to the end of the hospital bed. With a smack of an oversized paw, the cat knocked the clipboard down to the floor, where he stared at it impassively. Humans and their writing. What a strange thing. The cat blinked slowly as he pawed through the report. He would scoff at the incorrect information if he could. These humans knew nothing of those like Izuku and himself. All these uninformed diagnoses, medications recommended for things that were not problems. With a few swipes of his massive claws, he shredded the papers, leaving no trace. Behemoth heard Izuku take in a quick breath followed by the sound of beeping from the heart rate monitor stopping, leaving the room in relative silence. Moments passed by, the ticking of the clock filling the space the alarm should have taken. Izuku froze in place, staring at the door, waiting for any sign of an incoming nurse or doctor. Nothing. Oh, good, Izuku said weakly, finally removing the monitor clamped on his fingertip. He reached for the tape and bandages securing the needle in his hand before he stopped, fingers grazing the cloth. He should leave it in. He was on a morphine and saline drip, which means that if he was feeling this level of pain now, then he didn't even want to think about how bad it would be without them. Izuku pulled his hand away, making up his mind. He would take it out later when he wasn't at the hospital. He grabbed the pole holding the saline and morphine, pulling it close so he could lean some of his weight on it. The metal bent slightly, creaking and protesting the rough treatment. He quickly pulled his hand away, not wanting to cause any more damage. Okay, so that was out. But how was he supposed to travel in the halls with this limp slowing him down? If he tried to walk the halls like this, he would have to erase so much more security footage, and massive chunks of time are much more suspicious than a few scrambled seconds here and there. Behemoth interrupted his thoughts, picking up on what he was muttering. You need wheels? Yes. Is it the phrase? What? Wheels? What could that oh? Izuku exclaimed, suddenly realizing what Behemoth meant. Wheels like a wheelchair. Well, this is a hospital. No better place than here to find one of those. Yes, wheels. Wheels. Behemoth nodded, the motion oddly wise-looking when coming from a cat. Where the hell am I going to find a wheelchair? Izuku wondered aloud. His time spent in hospitals had all been bad, to put it lightly. And yes, the hospital he had been in was a twisted nightmare of a madman, but the layout of most hospitals were similar to each other. Wheelchairs would be in the lobby. With all the people out in the open. Great. What is it, Izuku? Behemoth asked, breaking the mental quiet. Izuku slumped against the wall, smacking the back of his head into the solid surface. Wheelchairs are in the lobby. I'll be seen if I try and grab one. Behemoth huffed, shaking his head. Humans, so unimaginative. He stood, walking over to the door. He gestured to the door with an oversized paw. Do you mind? Izuku blanched, blinking slowly as he tried to put the dots together. Do I owe? He reached for the doorknob and gave it a twist, opening the door enough for the cat to exit. Yeah, sure. But what are you doing? Getting wheels. Behemoth slunk through the open door and out into the hall. Izuku slowly processed those words as the cat kicked the door closed behind him with a hind paw. What? The hospital halls are oddly quiet and calm for this late into the evening. As if the world doesn't dare add more tension into a day like this. Behemoth supposed that the world must have some sense of balance. A cycle of karma. Nothing that humans would ever understand. They have it all backwards, believing their world is the be-all and end-all. But it never stopped them from trying to understand. And it's still a halfway decent world, aside from all the humans in it. Behemoth tucked himself beside a tall canister, giving it a sniff as he sat. Garbage. The cat looked up to the call button and back to his own paws. He could reach it easily, what with his size. But the human spawnling was right to fear being seen on camera. And there would be fewer shadows the closer he got to the entrance of the hospital. And an elevator with a single orange cat as its occupant would surely be something of interest to the humans. Then again, most humans were not as physically aware of their surroundings as the spawnling, content to keep their heads down and eyes closed to reality, to not see the unusual or strange simply because it did not directly impact their own lives. Behemoth's tail twitched irritably, his ears flicking back as he waited for his opportunity to put his plan into action. He could use the new abilities forced upon him by humans in white coats so long ago, or he could wait and see. Patience was the greatest weapon in his arsenal. That and being able to make any human uncomfortable with a few slow blinks. Minutes ticked by, and the door he had come from opened and closed a few times, Izuku checking on his progress every so often. He might have to simply risk being seen by the humans and press the button himself when he caught a sound. The sound of footsteps and wheels further down the hall was a glimmer of hope for this mission. If the human entered the elevator, he could cling to their shadows and not be seen. To hide, without needing to tap into what humans called a quirk. Behemoth tightened his tail around himself and settled back into the slim shadow, waiting silently for his opportunity. He watched as the cart turned the corner and began to head towards him, a tall human with short hair and long horns pushing it. They passed by the door to Izuku's room and continued to the elevator, not noticing anything amiss. While they were pushing the call button, Behemoth snuck into the shadow of the cart, pressing himself against the side of it. The elevator closed behind the nurse and his unknown companion. Da-dun. The nurse hummed, swaying in place as he drummed his fingers on the handle of the cart. Sometimes I feel a little da-na-na. Behemoth flattened his ears back flat against his skull, barely keeping his claws sheathed. Ugh, why did so many humans insist on singing when they don't have the voice for it? It would be like him trying to mimic a bird call with nothing but a yowl and a hiss. It's just not feasible, or pleasant to hear. His tail lashed from side to side as the human continued to hum and sway, singing under his breath the entire while. Maybe he should have just used part of the ability the researchers forced upon him. Anything to not be locked in a metal box with a tone-deaf human who thinks modern music can be called music at all. As soon as the elevator came to a stop, the nurse pushed his cart out the door and stopped in front of a locked door labeled Emergency Room, Employees Only. Behemoth bolted out of the elevator, the doors closing slowly behind him and shutting with a solid thun-chuck. He looked over the room, taking in the disinterested receptionists and the few humans waiting around for their appointments, faces buried in their phones, blind to the world around them. How fortunate. Satisfied that he would not be seen, Behemoth all but pranced past the receptionist's desk, tail held high as he made his way to the line of wheelchairs. His human spawnling was very heavy. Would any of these flimsy contraptions of titanium and fabric be strong enough for him? He stared at the row of chairs, one of them cast off to the side, a slightly dusty sign tacked to the wall behind it. Altered density, it said, the writing lopsided and rushed. Probably written by an overworked intern or nurse's aide. Backstory aside, this was precisely what he was looking for. Perfect. Behemoth flicked his tail as he approached the chair, placing both his front paws on the metal frame of the chair, using his weight to push the chair forward and far enough away from the wall. One wheel skidded against the floor while the other moved freely. The cat exhaled, his whiskers spreading in irritation. He kept his paws on the back of the chair and shoved it again, the stiff wheel steadily loosening as he pushed the chair across the nearly empty lobby. He felt eyes upon him and turned his unblinking gaze towards its source. A small child was tugging on its disinterested parent's sleeve, pointing and babbling excitedly. Behemoth narrowed his eyes and hissed back at the child. tail puffing up defensively as he crossed the room as quickly as he could with the difficult-to-control weight he was pushing. This right here is why he wanted to live with a human. They have hands and opposable thumbs, and that upright height of theirs comes in quite handy. Hissing and spitting quietly, Behemoth shoved and pushed the wheelchair over to the elevator before standing up on his hind legs and pressing the call button with one oversized paw. A quiet ding rang out through the lobby, and the cat began to move the chair as soon as the door started to open. It was just pure luck that the elevator was empty this time around, the door slowly closing as Behemoth pressed the button for Izuku's hospital floor. There was a tap at the door, then a thud, then a loud hiss. Izuku whipped around, watching the door in the strange vision of a colossal cat repeatedly slamming a wheelchair into it on the other side. Okay, this wasn't even the most bizarre thing he had seen. When had this become his normal? He pulled the door open, grabbing the chair and dragging it inside, the cat following and kicking the door closed behind him with an oversized back foot. How did you get this? Izuku asked, barely restraining himself from hugging the cat with joy. I have my ways, Behemoth thought cryptically, not willing to admit what he had done to bring the chair up here. The number of walls ran into alone, and that trash can buy the elevator? It would never be the same. Izuku dropped the issue, adjusting his hospital robe and limping over to the cabinets over the sink. There was a stack of plastic bags, probably labeled patient personal belongings, or something similar to that, and he grabbed a few, opening one up. He grabbed supplies by the handful, bandages, gauze, a box of gloves, box of face masks, shoving them all into the bag he had prepared, extra hypodermic needles, rubber tubing, instant cold compresses, and such. He grabbed an additional hospital gown, balling it in his hand to use later. He didn't want to leave behind any fingerprints. Anything he might need went into the bag. The bag itself, he hung on the back of the chair. He still needed extra saline and morphine. That wasn't kept here or even on this floor. Looks like he would have to snag some from the supply room before he left. Reaching out, he pulled his IV to himself with his empty hand, wondering how he would bring it with him if he was making his getaway in a wheelchair. He stood there a moment, the gears of his brain turning and grinding out metaphorical sparks and smoke. Are you all right, little spawnling? Behemoth cocked his head to the side curiously, watching Izuku with concern. Rem, fine. Izuku jerked back to awareness and rapidly nodded, grabbing the IV pole with both hands. He whimpered slightly from the throbbing pain in his arms as he twisted the IV pole around the handles of the wheelchair, the metal quietly screaming as he forcibly attached the two. With a sigh of relief, he lowered himself into the wheelchair. Used to it, he said quietly through gritted teeth, grabbing the thin blanket off the bed and covering his legs. I've had worse. Settling into his chair, he unballed the gown in his hand, ripping the fabric into uneven squares. That is not a positive, human, isn't it? Izuku tucked the torn squares into the chest pocket of his gown, then grabbed onto the handrooms of his new chair and pushed forward before pulling back, getting a feel for the motion and force required. No, it is not. Why does everyone tell me that? Izuku grabbed one of the fabric squares and reached for the door handle, slowly pulling the door open. Detective Tsukanshi. All might. Eraserhead too. And now you. Well, maybe it is because it is the truth, Izuku. I know it's true. I know. Izuku sighed, carefully wheeling himself out the door and into the hall. It's hard to change my thinking. Eraserhead, oh shit. He yanked the handrooms back and halted his chair. His world seemed to tilt, the hallway stretching and twisting around him. What is it, little spawnling? Izuku could barely get the words out, panic and fear fighting themselves for control over his senses. Eraserhead, my teacher, he was there with the Namo. Is he okay? Can't you listen for him? Behemoth asked, tail swishing. Use the powers you didn't ask to receive. I can try, but... Izuku shook his head, his eyes closed as he tried to focus. I think the meds are messing with me. And the pain isn't exactly helping, he muttered. He sighed, the fuzz and mental fog cut though with a throb of his own heartbeat. Izuku opened his eyes, voice quavering slightly as he admitted, I'm not getting anything. I am sure he is alive, the cat thought comfortingly, placing one oversized paw on Izuku's knee. As soon as we find a computer, we can check on him. And number 13, another hero. Yes, Behemoth questioned, watching for his human's nod. He closed his eyes, tail tapping against the floor. Humans and their heroes. Would you like to visit them? Why, yeah. Izuku nodded, his hands shaking where he held the handrooms, the metal indenting slightly under his fingers. I won't be able to relax until I know they're okay. Behemoth snorted, the sound coming out more like a sneeze. Of course. Izuku adjusted his grip on the handrooms and pushed himself forward, the cat trotting beside him down the hall towards the elevator. The two stayed quiet, Izuku slowly swerving through the halls, keeping to the blind spots as much as possible. The morphine in his system had his headache dulled to a soft throb. But it did nothing to cut through the fear he was feeling. What if he got caught before he could reach the administration office? What if he couldn't erase all the footage of himself? What if he screwed something up? What if he got found? Spawnling, Who-MH. Izuku blinked himself back to awareness, staring at the interior of the elevator as the doors opened in front of him. So sorry, I spaced out. Yes, Behemoth nodded, hopping up onto Izuku's empty lap, his massive form a grounding force. I noticed. The cat settled himself down, curling his tail around his body. Izuku stayed silent, part of his brain panicking at the closeness of the cat he had once been so terrified. But it seemed to help keep him centered in reality, wheeling down halls, only stopping once every so often to squint at wall maps and direction markers. He muttered quietly under his breath, so this way, he mumbled, pushing himself forward a little faster now. ... In this way, his whispered, eyebrows furrowed in concentration. Slowly he rolled to a stop, a locked door blocking his path. The administration offices. Nobody inside. All 2 administrative staff gone home for the day. Locked with a keypad lock. Damn. Izuku leaned closer, squinting to see if he could read the actual numbers on the keys. No good. The numbers were worn and faded, the ink chipped with age. Behemoth leaned forward, ears flicked back in his own focus. He blinked with black eyes, inspecting the wear and staining on the keys. Ah, he thought, reaching out with an oversized paw, carefully pressing 4 digits. The door lock beeped, and the light above the keypad flickered. With his colorless vision, Izuku couldn't tell, but it blinked green. The lock clicked, and the door opening slightly. Whoa, Izuku marveled, looking down at the cat on his lap with awe. How did you do that? He asked quietly, reaching with a cloth in hand to pull the door open. Oil residue. Behemoth hissed, you humans are filthy. That's so cool. Izuku breathed, pushing his way into the room, the door closing behind him. 4 sets of desks with computers set upon them. The entire thing set up like an open-floor bullpen. On the back wall, there was a large imposing door with frosted glass windows. The main office. Izuku wheeled forward, caster wheels of his chair nearly catching on clusters of cables taped to the carpet. He reached for the door, cloth in hand as he pulled the handle. Unlocked. Almost too easy. He would be suspicious if he wasn't in so much pain right now. Inside of the office, it was almost ice cold, frost creeping over the corners of the walls and ceiling. There was a large desk taking up nearly half of the space, an impressive wooden monstrosity. Behind the massive desk and the computer atop it was no office chair, just a covered pit that looked to be filled with ice. Whoever's office this was, they probably needed the cold. An ice quirk of some sort. Izuku rolled his chair over the pit, the cover creaking slightly from his weight. He wheeled forward, searching over the layers of soldered metal on plastic. He had no idea what the components of a computer were, but this wasn't his area of expertise. Speaking of expertise, Behemoth leaned forward, catching sight of a yellow post-it note stuck to the upper corner of the monitor. Dr. Freeze, it said, with a little laughing face drawn underneath it. Behemoth rolled his eyes, placing his front paws on the table and climbing aboard, one oversized paw pressing the power button. The computer powered on, and the cat slowly tapped each key for the password, his massive paws working against him for once. Behind him, Izuku stared blankly ahead, unable to read the screen and the columns of information that flowed down it as the cat worked. Aizawa. Ah, here. You found him. Izuku leaned forward, flinching back as his muscles protested his movement. Yes, room 212. How is he? Once again, and certainly not the last time. Izuku cursed his eyes, wishing he could just read for himself. Stable, it appears he will make it. What about 13? Number 13, let me see. Behemoth scrolled down more through the reports of the ICU. Interesting, he thought, glancing over the report. Outside influence self-inflicted quirk injuries. How in Dreamland was that possible? They were injured by a warper, Izuku muttered, his fists clenched tight around the handrooms of his chair. His thoughts, memories about the USJ were still muddled in his head, hard to see through the morphine. But he remembered the name Oboro, behind the mist of Kirigiri. Behemoth yowled loudly in surprise. So used to projecting his thoughts, he had nearly forgotten of the human spawnling's ability to mind read, a rare gift that most people and even animals would fear. Swiftly he composed himself, his little heart racing in his chest. A warper, he asked, knowing intimately that a quirk like that comes around maybe once every 10 years. Perhaps they were. Like us, the two said and thought simultaneously, an air of fear descending over them. If the warper had been created by either Project Bloodlines or the Jumpstart Initiative, they would have heard about it. Hell, everyone would have heard about it. There would be a manufactured warper in every paramilitary group, in every cult and every rich man's personal army. They would be manufactured and built by the dozens and passed out like cheap toys in a child's birthday party gift bag. Behemoth scrolled through files, pausing when he heard Izuku continue. And that's not the only weird thing. The villains, they had a creature with them. Izuku shuddered, remembering the Namu, remembering what he had done to it, breaking a promise and a creature. Behemoth turned his head back, watching Izuku with interest. It was multiple people, multiple quirks in one body. Izuku focused his gaze on watching the cat type and work a computer better and faster than most humans could. Better than he could at least. Behemoth flicked his ears back, not liking that one bit. So it is not a long way to theorize that their warper's quirk was artificial as well. Izuku shook his head. The quirks weren't artificial, they were. Whatever people were used to make that thing. Those people had real quirks. He hadn't gotten much from the Namu. It had been too hard to see through the creature. He wouldn't call it a person anymore. The creature had quirks. Those quirks can't be faked. Manufactured, maybe, but not artificial. And what sort of quirks were they? The cat asked. One ear twitched forwards, the closest he could get to a raised eyebrow. His massive paws scrolled through more files and he devoured the data in his search. Shock absorption, accelerated healing, some kind of speed quirk. Izuku wrung his hands. I mean, we know quirks can be manufactured, so it's not impossible. He sighed, closing his eyes, still seeing clearly. I just don't like the idea that there's someone out here doing the same thing as the hospital or the institute. Behemoth sighed, a massive exhale of air. Artificial quirks aside, I found your heroes. Room 211. The cat closed out the file, starting a new search for his human spawnlings information, deleting every scrap he came across. Injury records, gone. Medication data, deleted. Recommended medications, no trace remaining. And so on and so such until the hospital records of Midoriya Izuku were wiped clean. The cat closed out all of the tabs and files, shutting down the computer and hopping off the table back onto Izuku's blanket-covered lap. He turned in a few circles, settling down and curling his tail around his body. Now, onto your heroes. Behemoth huffed, closing his eyes. Wake me when it is time to delete security footage. Izuku chuckled, wheeling back to the door, wiping it down for any fingerprints before leaving the office. The main weight of his miasma of worry had been lifted, knowing that both of his teachers were okay. He pushed his way out of the administration offices and back out into the hallway, stopping at signs and maps once again, looking for the ICU. Swerving down the hall, he stuck to the blind spots the best he could, finally coming to a stop outside the intensive care unit entrance. Izuku pushed through the double doors, checking room numbers as he rolled through the ward. 211 and 212 were right next to each other, appearing to actually a joint suite, the two injured heroes sharing a room. Izuku opened the door and wheeled in, coasting to a stop in the center of the room. Slowly, he lifted his gaze from the floor, turning to look at his homeroom teacher. The injuries were worse than he remembered from before, even with most of them already partially healed by the quirks of those who worked in the hospital. But the fractures and breaks can still be seen by the unhardened cartilage calluses covering them. The area the Namu had crushed was fixed with rods and pinned to the point where Aizawa's entire arm was wrapped in layers of plaster and metal. Even though the layers, Izuku could see the thick lines of stitches and surgical scarring. Izuku wheeled closer, his hands shaking. The linear and depressed fractures of his teacher's skull were more what worried him. Those fractures and the healing concussion would be at odds during healing. Even beneath the bandages, he saw the lines of stitches snaking back into his shaved hairline. Izuku closed his eyes, wishing he could just stop himself from looking at the injuries. But he couldn't, even though he knew that Aizawa would most likely be okay. He just couldn't get over the amount of damage done. And as for number 13, Izuku turned away before he could look at the mess of his teacher's ribs. Looking over at the incomprehensible form of his other teacher, he blinked twice, trying to confirm what he was seeing. Within the medical-grade protective suit on the bed, their face covered by the mask of the respirator, lay a mostly human-shaped space of nothingness, with somehow pieces stripped away. A void in the middle of nothing, an empty space in a larger empty space. Number 13's physiology could only be explained as some sort of quirk-related nonsense. And no matter how much Izuku stared, he couldn't see past the darkness. No bones, muscle, nothing. Just an empty void in the middle of the hospital bed, and sections of that void had been ripped away. Emptiness within emptiness. Far from satisfied with what he had learned, Izuku still had to leave. He closed his eyes, gripping the handrooms of his chair and pulling back, slowly backing away and out the door. The warm weight of the cat on his lap was the closest thing he had to comfort right now. Leaving his teacher's hospital room behind seemed like the hardest thing Izuku had to do. His teachers were getting the best care available, but he just felt like he wasn't doing enough. He felt like he should be out there, actively contributing. But there was no way that could happen. There was nothing he could do. With a sigh, Izuku pushed himself through the halls, heading to his next destination when he spotted a door behind the nurse's station at the end of the ward. A supply room, with what appeared to be bags of saline, at least from what he could tell from the other side of a very thick and sturdy wall. Oh, Izuku perked up slightly, his mood still low and dark, but a little less soul-crushing. He wheeled closer to the supply room, thinking about storage options. His bag was only half full by now. He had plenty of room for a few bags of each. I could really use some of that. Looking around quickly, Izuku wheeled forward, ducking behind the counter for the nurse's station and approaching the door, testing the lock. Unlocked. He pulled the door open, the door catching on his chair multiple times as he struggled with it for nearly a solid 30 seconds. The door finally opening as he wrenched it towards himself, the handle warping slightly under his grip. "Screw that door," he grumbled, said door swinging closed behind him. He paused for a moment, checking on the massive cat snoozing on his lap, still asleep even after all the jostling. He was almost jealous. To be able to sleep so easily was, ironically, a dream of his. Izuku patted the wall beside him, searching for the light switch and flicking it on, bathing the room in pale light. He pushed his way through the shelves with one hand on the handrails of his chair, reaching back with the other hand and grabbing his bag before stopping in front of the bags of saline. Saline can be stored for just under 200 days. So he grabbed 8 bags, stowing them with everything else. As long as he only had 8 injuries with 1 recovery day for each of them in the next year, this would work out fine. Izuku made some mental adjustments before grabbing another 10 bags. With his reckless streak and lousy luck, 18 injuries sounds much more realistic. With the saline safe in the bag, next up was morphine. Izuku wheeled around the room, looking through the racks of supplies for morphine. Albuterol, chloramphenicol, latanoprost, alkarin, where the hell was the morphine? Izuku glanced up slightly. "Oh," he said quietly, and Izuku rolled his eyes. He was glad he was the only one in here when he looked up and realized the morphine was slightly above his new line of sight. If he wasn't in this chair, he would have been looking right at it. Morphine could be stored for 90 days, so Izuku groaned, trying to force his addled brain to do math. 8, 18, more, less. He was just going to take 10 of them and be done with it. 10 injuries in the course of 3 months. That's at least 3 injuries per month, so that would knock out most of the saline too. Izuku hung the now full bag back on the handles of his wheelchair, slumping down when he was fully back in his seat. He just felt emotionally and mentally drained from this day. His legs are cold, he's tired, his entire body aches. He just wants out of here. Maneuvering his chair around the shelves, Izuku pushed his way to the door. Waiting and watching a few nurses pass in front of their door, their thoughts fuzzed over from his medicated haze. As soon as the hall was clear, Izuku pushed the door open and wheeled out into the hall. He had to find the security office and get out of here. Speaking of the security office, where the hell is the security office? Izuku looked around exhaustedly, eyebrows furrowed as he tried to search for it through the walls. Focusing his hardest, he forced his way through the medicated fog descending on his brain. Sifting through the buzzing of thousands of sleeping minds, he honed in a few people who scoffed whenever they passed one room. Overpaid idiot. Gets paid to creep on everyone all day. You kidding me? Wish I could sit around and stare at a bunch of computer screens. Looks like he had found what he was looking for. Security offices, 1 floor down and on the opposite side of the building. He kept his head down, passing a few other patients who didn't even glance his way, not looking up from their own paths. Honestly, he couldn't believe how easy all of this was. Supplies shouldn't be able to be stolen by a 14-year-old in a wheelchair without any kind of anything stopping him. Izuku sighed, adjusting his grip on the handrails of his chair before pushing off towards the elevator. He wished he had his sunglasses with him. But no, he had to have caring adults in his life who would hold onto his things for him. He rolled his eyes, leaning forward and pushing the call button for the elevator, pulling his hand back and accidentally setting it on the cat. Had he forgotten the cat was there? Maybe, but his fur was so soft and warm. It was sorta nice. Izuku frowned, absent-mindedly stroking Behemoth's fur with one hand, the cat's chest rumbling with sleepy purrs. The cat certainly wasn't a pet, but maybe more like a friend. A friend you can pet. That's not quite right, but he couldn't quite grasp the concept he was reaching for through the morphine haze. He was really enjoying this morphine. Izuku closed his eyes, a small smile on his face as he waited for the elevator, gently petting the cat sleeping on his lap. "What are you doing, human?" Izuku quickly yanked his hand away from the cat's side. "Oh, sorry." Behemoth lifted his head and turned his gaze upwards. "I did not say to stop." "Ah, really?" Izuku lowered his hand back down, carting his bandaged fingers through the cat's fur. The cat lowered his head back down, closing his eyes and resting. "But do not forget, I am not a little kitty pet." "Of course not." Izuku smiled softly, watching through the doors as the empty elevator began to descend to his floor from the one above. The elevator slowly braked to a stop, jerking back up and settling down again, the doors opening with a shuddering slide. Izuku took his hand off out of the cat's fur and wheeled in, thankful for the stroke of luck he was riding on, not running into anyone so far. He leaned forward, pressing the button for the floor below then to one to close the door. Even though he didn't see anyone else on the floor, he wasn't taking any chances. Izuku relaxed in his chair, his body catching up with his brain and realizing he was close to getting to leave this hospital and go home. Where was he going to go once he got out of here? That thought clung to his brain, a probing hand digging through his thoughts as the elevator came to a stop and he rolled out. He navigated the halls on instinct, his brain unconsciously filtering the thoughts of those around him and the walls and the pipes and wires within them to make his way to the security office. Where would he go? Home no longer existed for him. And All Might's tower couldn't fit a wheelchair into the ventilation system. And trying to get onto UA's campus this late would usually be relatively simple, but again with the wheelchair, it wouldn't be as easy as climbing a tree and making the jump across the street. Izuku sighed heavily, unintentionally stroking the cat in his lap a little harder. Behemoth opened a black eye, glaring up at the human he had attached himself to. Izuku pet him again, still a little too rough. When one more overly firm stroke rumpled his left ear, Behemoth extended the claws of his front left paw, lightly stabbing into the human's thigh. "Oh, be careful, human." Behemoth retracted his claws, slow enough to be nothing other than a threat, a reminder that he could easily do it again. "Sorry." Izuku pulled his hand away from the cat entirely, not trusting himself to be able to control his strength with his mind the way it was. "We're almost to the security office anyway." Behemoth made a sound Izuku would classify as a grunt, but that didn't entirely cover it. It was a rumbling sound, and the cat settled back down, keeping a watch on the halls as his human continued to wheel them through. The cat flattened his ears against his skull the closer they got to the security office, the ease of which they were making their way through the hospital nearly too unsettling. It was simply too easy. Why was there no struggle? No security guards waiting with taser in hand. No researchers in white coats with syringes filled with sedative, ready to take in their most valuable specimen. The two only crept closer to the edge of anxiety and panic once they reached the looming door of the security office. Izuku reached out a hand, testing the doorknob. Locked, but only with a keypad. No security badge scanner or biometrics. "Keep an eye out," Behemoth thought, rising up and standing on Izuku's lap. "That is the term?" "Yes." "Yes." Izuku turned his head, watching the halls with mounting worry. What if someone saw them? Would they call the orderlies, the police, the heroes? His breath began to come faster, panic and fear setting in as he clenched his fists around the handrooms of his chair, warping the metal in the shape of his fingers and palm. The keypad beeped under the oversized paw of the massive orange cat, clicking as it unlocked and bumping open the door as it did. The cat turned around on the human's lap, tilting his head to the side in curiosity. "Human," Behemoth chirred quietly before nipping at the bandage-wrapped arm of his human. The cat chirred again, the sound rolling smoothly off of his tongue. His human seemed caught in fear, gripped by terror and spiraling deeper and deeper into the endless fathoms of horror by the second. Behemoth watched the human spawnling for a moment, the way he still jerked his gaze from one end of the hall to the other, while his hands still clenched in a death grip on his chair. "Izuku." With an internalized and externalized sigh, Behemoth leaned his massive head down and smacked it into his human's chest, knocking him back in his seat from the sudden force. "Izuku." Uffed. Izuku snapped back to reality, the massive head of the giant cat hitting him dead in the center of the sternum once again. "Oh, you are awake." Behemoth settled back on Izuku's lap, tail swishing in self-satisfaction. "I was beginning to grow concerned." The cat huffed, blinking slowly in an attempt to act nonchalant. "The door is now unlocked." "Oh, thank you." Izuku felt his face heat up, not knowing how deathly the gray of his blood made his face look at that moment. He carefully extracted his fingers from the damaged metal of the handrooms, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "Sorry, I just..." Behemoth rolled his eyes, the movement impossible to see with the fact that he was a cat, and his eyes were completely black. "No apologies, just take me to the computer." Behemoth scoffed the best he could, flattening his ears against his skull. "He hates hospitals." "Me too," Izuku said quietly, not missing the way the fur raised on the cat's spine. He had surprised and frightened him, and that was like a scalpel to the chest no matter how used to it he was by now. Just another reminder that he wasn't normal. "I'll get the door." Izuku reached out and grabbed the handle, pulling the door open and pushing himself and the cat though quickly. "Sorry, again," he said as the door swung shut behind him. "What did I just tell you?" Behemoth hissed, extending his claws slightly, about apologizing. "Right." Izuku fought to keep himself from apologizing again, turning his attention back to the rest of the room. The bank of monitors, all playing something incomprehensible to his eyes. Black and white and gray seemed to shimmer and warp across the screens, the pixels making his head hurt. He looked away, taking in the rest of the room. A crowded desk covered in papers and pens, a single computer in the center. "I'll let you do your thing. Give me 15 minutes to get through the security system and scrub all of the footage from the memory." "Really? 15 minutes? Is that good? Bad?" "It is very good." Behemoth jumped off of Izuku's lap and onto the desk, rumpling a few of the papers under his paws. He didn't want to brag, but he was skilled at this sort of thing. After all, one doesn't have to escape from a laboratory facility after disabling, to say it nicely, all 18 staff members. One didn't escape from someplace like that without learning how to work a security system and learning to work it fast. And a hospital's security would be easy to break through compared to that of the Japanese military research laboratory. Behemoth sat back on his haunches, carefully typing away, having to slowly check his work as he went. He really needed a bigger keyboard for this sort of work. A growl rumbled in his chest as he bypassed security clearances, accessing the saved but not yet uploaded records. Too easy. Everything he was looking at. If he deleted it now, it would never be seen again. The cat blinked twice, taking a breath before beginning his deletion, looping existing footage to fill the blank spaces. Less than a quarter frame of static bookends the replaced footage. At 50 frames per second, it was short enough the human eye would never notice. 23 seconds to get through the hallway they had started on. 60 seconds of Behemoth pushing a wheelchair back through the hospital. 3 minutes spent trying to find the administration office. 4 spent getting to the ICU. Only a minute wheeling to the supply room. A minute and a half to find the room where they were in now. Only 11 minutes of footage in total, and the 2 would be ghosts. From here on out, they just have to avoid the cameras, and they would be golden. Behemoth huffed, trying to erase any trace of him muddling about in the files. The computer flicking to black for a moment before lighting back up. No trace of his edits to be seen. In a few hours, the footage would be uploaded to the cloud, and the altered video would be reality. He closed out of the system, shutting down the computer and taking his paws away from the keyboard. The cat yawned, stretching and arching his back, jumping back onto Izuku's lap. Finished, he thought with a proud purr rumbling in his chest. We should leave now. Izuku nodded, rubbing the cat behind the ears before moving his chair. The cat curled up on the human's lap, keeping an eye open as they rolled through the halls, sticking close to the walls and avoiding the camera lines. As the duo got closer to the exit, Izuku began to push the wheels faster and faster, relief flooding his system. This was almost over, he could just get out. Some little nagging bit of his brain knew it wasn't rational to flee like this, knew he'd have questions to answer later and details to remember, but he didn't care. The little voice reminded him that he was stealing the wheelchair as he crossed in front of the receptionist's desk. But he ignored that too. Wheeling away down the sidewalk and leaving the hospital behind them, Izuku asked quietly, just loud enough for the cat in his lap to pick up, "Where do we go now? The place I've called home for the last 3 years now stands empty." Behemoth would never admit it to anyone, but he would miss the human who had been his companion for longer than any other. "We could go there, yes. Of course, little Izuku." Behemoth purred slightly, the sound more like a rumble of thunder than a sound from any cat. "What else are comrades for?" It's been hours now since the League of Villains had put their plan into action and failed miserably, unable to even reach anything they had strived for in the attack. And even though it's been nearly 7 hours, Dr. Daruma Yujiko has finally finished with surgery. It's been a very long time since he's worked with such a bloody mess, and just as long since it's a mess he hasn't created. Stripping off the bloody gloves, he dropped them into the biohazard bin. He quickly washed and sanitized his hands before closing the door of the ramshackle operating room. He missed working in a real hospital. In a real hospital, he would have had surgical assistants at his side instead of having to pin over 16 fractures on his own. Procedure after procedure, from wiring the broken jaw to closed reduction of 3 dislocated joints, all done on his own. Shigaraki would be lucky to regain full motion in his left hand after the compression fractures of his wrist were done healing. And once he was out of his medicated coma, it would be a long road ahead for Sensei's protege. And speaking of fractures, it was time for some answers on what had caused such injuries. Over 16 separate fractures and 3 dislocated joints. Jaw, fractured and dislocated. Shoulder, dislocated. Wrist, severe compression fractures. Ribs, 6 fractured from impact. Sternum, fractured from a similar impact. False ribs completely separated from the spine. Severe soft tissue injuries. Ligaments and tendons torn to shreds. Muscles stripped from bone and pulled nearly to the point of no return. Really, it was only pure luck that Shigaraki didn't have a concussion on top of everything else. And those spinal injuries, 1 wrongly fractured vertebra, and Shigaraki would be spending the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Yes, his physical injuries would heal in time, but the doctor wasn't as certain about the possible mental injuries. Even before the sedatives and painkillers had been applied, as soon as the boy had awoken from his dead faint, gibbering madly, whispering about pages, eyes, rot, wrongness, and monster. It was worrying. Whatever had happened during the attack gone wrong had impacted Shigaraki in some profound way. His assailant had even gone so far as to destroy the hand of Shigaraki's father, severing a link in the chain of his mental and emotional tangle. Memories could be disturbed and blurred. All of the hard work that went into making him could be wasted. The doctor sighed heavily, seating himself at the bar and slumping on his stool. Behind the bar, the wispy mist of Kirigiri stood, cleaning a glass with a dishcloth. It would be the height of normality if he hadn't been cleaning the same glass since the surgery had begun. How is he? Stable for now. If everything goes well, we can awaken him from the induced coma in 2 weeks. And after that, it'll be a long road to recovery. Add in a few bite or claw marks, and he would describe it as a mauling. Something a wild animal would do. He was hesitant to admit it, but this was the truth. If this fight had gone on any longer, Shigaraki might have been killed. Oh my. This had all happened on his watch. Kurogiri knew that this was all his fault. He hadn't been fast enough to save Shigaraki Tamura from his attacker. What kind of hero could do something like this? Such a thorough beating. What hero could invoke such violence upon someone? He needed more information. Leaning forward across the bar, the doctor asked once again, not missing the way Kurogiri's mist flickered at the edges. The warper was on edge, his mist giving away his anxieties. His grip tightened on the glass he was cleaning before he swiftly set it down on the shelf behind him. His ordinarily strong voice shook slightly before he steeled his resolve. It wasn't a hero, he admitted, even though that fact pained him. This was a student. The doctor settled back into his seat, narrowing his eyes. Oh, what sort of student could do this? Perhaps they had a quirk that could prove useful to the cause. Kurogiri tried his best to recall the appearance of the child who had attacked and destroyed their plan before the heroes had even shown up. They were small, dressed in all green and gray. The warper wasn't sure if it was his own bias or not, but he could still remember the miasma of nausea that had seemed to radiate off of the child. What was their quirk? It must have been a fantastic quirk to take down Shigaraki so swiftly, especially if the one who wielded it was only a child. Some form of enhanced strength, or perhaps senses. Kurogiri suppressed a shudder, remembering the streaks of blood and clumps of brain matter on the child's hands. But there was something strange. The doctor felt an old feeling of dread creep up in his spine. Something strange. Nothing good ever followed those words. What do you mean, strange? Kurogiri couldn't have stopped the words even if he had wanted to. When he had seen that student attack Shigaraki, pinning his charge to the ground with ease, a genuine wave of fear had rolled over him. Death had been in that arena, and it was uncontrollable. He somehow knew about the Namu's weaknesses. He knew about the microchip. And he knew. Static hissed from the television. A raspy yet strong voice carried over the weak speakers. The same student took down the Namu and Tamura. It was obvious by the inflection that the owner of the voice had been listening in the entire time, choosing only now to make themselves known. How interesting. Sensei. If Kurogiri had been holding anything, he was confident he would have warped it to his last coordinates. He quickly composed himself, turning his yellow gaze to the television. Ah, yes, the same student. He described the student to his master, omitting the waves of fear the student had made him feel. He was pale with green hair and black eyes. What else did he know, Kurogiri? The sound of breathing intensified, the only indication of all for one's interest in the conversation. He called Shigaraki Tamura by another name, Kurogiri said, already knowing he would not need to elaborate. He had never known his charge by any other name, but he could tell through the sudden pickup in the breathing on the other end of the conversation that the name Shimura Tenko meant something to all for one. He knew things he shouldn't. He knew when attacks were coming. Kurogiri thought to himself, remembering the way the student had evaded his portals with such ease. And the way he fought. At first it was similar to All Might, then it suddenly changed. Mixed martial arts of some sort. Yujiko's feeling of dread strengthened, and the hairs on the back of his neck raised. Fear and delight. Did you say? Mixed martial arts. Could you tell what sort? He didn't want to put the pieces together, but there were still pieces to be had. Pieces that had slipped through his fingers years ago. Kurogiri shook his head. I wouldn't know. The speed of the attacks was extraordinary. Such speed and violence. He had almost been too late. I fear that, if I had not noticed in time, Shigaraki Tamura would have died at his hands. All for one was quiet for a moment before he asked, his voice not betraying his interest. Do you believe they would be a potential recruit? A flash of fear spiked through the warper with that thought. His fingers twitched nervously, and Kurogiri shook his head once again, trying to control his sudden terror. I'm not certain if even attempting to recruit them would be wise, sir. They used their ungloved hands to rip apart the Namu's brain. Oh, really? All for one's smile could be heard in his voice. Fascinating. Dr. Yujiko excused himself quickly and quietly, leaving Kurogiri and his master to speak before backing away and returning to the dark recesses of his laboratory. He passed by the unconscious Shigaraki, the quiet beeping of the monitors and machines fading as he approached a room he had kept locked and hidden away. The back room, his true laboratory. The dread creeping up in his spine was fully formed now, tangling and twining with elation. He maneuvered past growing half-formed Namu and vats of oozing replicated organs, behind massive cables and tubes that pumped the lifeblood of his work into his newest cause. Finally reaching his hidden lab, he slipped the key into the door, unlocking it with a clunk. The door screeched and screamed on its rusted hinges and warped door jamb as he entered. Lights blinked and flickered into life, half of the overhead lighting dead and leaving swathes of darkness. but the lights weren't necessary. Not when light would be found with such ease. Heavy orange filtered through the half-lit room from the sources along the walls, casting everything in an eerie glow. Surrounding 3 of the walls were lined glass tubes, large enough for any subject. Inside the glass was a thick and viscous nuclear orange fluid, air bubbles slowly rolling from the bottom of the glass to the top, creating a froth atop the liquid. Whole bodies, heavily scarred and marked, floated effortlessly in some of the tubes. A few with obvious wounds, unable to heal in death, showed evidence of the methods it had taken to bring them back to him. But most of them held only bits and pieces. A heart and lung here, a limb there. Incomplete mistakes that proved to be incompatible with his latest ventures. Artificial quirks refusing to join with artificial beings. Augmented quirks unable to meld with augmented bodies. What a waste of potential. But these were not Namu in these tubes. These were his life work. His perfect soldiers, struck down before they could be tested, never again to waken, no matter how much technology he shoved into them. So they all just floated there, suspended in their states as a testament to his previous failures. One tube, on the back wall and in the right corner, stood empty. Flowing orange fluid filled the chamber, but that which should have been within its chemical embrace was not there. The number etched into the glass reads Subject 15. And until now, he had believed the strike team when they had told him the subject had been destroyed. But no longer. Blackbriar had been wrong. Where did you go, Patient 15? Dr. Yujiko placed his hand upon the glass, the warmth from within the tube warming his palm. Where did you go? His greatest accomplishment was still out there in the world, waiting to be completed, waiting to be brought back home. You're fucking kidding me, right? The kid's a killer, we can't let him stay. He did what he had to. Had to. Why did he have to kill 7 people? Usually, Mirio liked sitting in on hero meetings, it made him feel responsible. But this, he didn't want to be here. All of this just felt wrong. It was barely a meeting at all, just a screaming match for a bunch of heroes and police officers, debating something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. Sir had asked for him to shadow All Might in all of his meetings, but Mirio wasn't sure if this is what Sir had wanted him to hear. Or maybe it had been. Sir didn't seem to like Midoriya. For some reason, that much was obvious. Are you an idiot? It was self-defense. Maybe the first 6, but that last one. The recovered footage from the USJ was still playing on the screen. Blood and viscera coating the pavilion where Izuku Midoriya was attempting to kill the leader of the villain invasion. All the heroes had seen fights before, and this was an attempted murder. There was nothing else to it. It wasn't the violence that was getting to everyone, or even the bloodshed. It was the look on Midoriya's face as he fought. Wrath, manic hatred, sadistic glee. A twisted snarl with dead eyes and a blood-soaked face. Mirio looked away, not wanting to believe what he saw. The boy that he called his friend, he couldn't do something like this, right? Midoriya couldn't write. But the evidence is still playing on the screen on loop. It's all there in front of him, and Mirio can't make himself look away. It's beyond horrific, the way Midoriya seemed to revel in injuring the leader of the invasion. And the heroes just won't stop playing it. One of the police detectives who were there, Mirio couldn't remember his name, only that he was wearing a trench coat and already knew All Might somehow, leaned over slightly and asked, "Are you all right?" Mirio nodded weakly, noticing only now how much his hands were shaking. I'm fine." The detective sighed, leaning back into his seat. He raised his voice, "Stop the tape. We've all seen enough." "I must agree with Detective Tsukachi on this," All Might agreed, just now noticing how this was affecting his protege. He can't believe he hadn't thought about that. After all, Mirio and Izuku were friends, spending quite a bit of time in training and school together. Nedzu pressed a button on the remote held in his paw, stopping the video with a blurred image of a blood-soaked Izuku lunging at the warp-quirked villain, the teen's flat black eyes the only thing in frame still perfectly clear. "How can you look at that?" Snipe gestured widely towards the image, "and tell me it was self-defense?" He didn't have anything against Midoriya before this, but now he wasn't afraid to admit that the world might be better off with someone that vicious having less training. Well, Cementos drummed his fingers against the tabletop, obviously trying to pull his thoughts into something coherent. He does live in the teacher's dorms, as of tomorrow, that is, so he was technically stopping a home invasion. Aye. What? Snipe all but shrieked, pulling off his hat and slapping it against the table. No. A loud cackle of laughter rang out over the table, Midnight repeatedly smacking the surface with a flat palm. "Oh my gods, that's a good one. Yeah, and you did try to shoot the same villain whose ass he kicked." President Mike shrugged, hating that this meeting even needed to be held. His opinion was that Midoriya was entirely in the right, but maybe he was biased. After all, his best friend was lying in the hospital because of those villains. Besides, 5 of the villains died from injuries sustained in the vortex. So those deaths were unintentional. As for the other 2, based on the footage, the first one was accidental. And as for the thing, President Mike shrugged again, trying and failing to cover up the shudder at the thought of the thing involved in the attack. Who here would have responded any differently to seeing someone in mortal peril? But, fine, whatever. Snipe threw his hands up in frustration, dropping back down into his seat and crossing his arms over his chest. Don't change the fact that 6 people died because of him. 7 if we count that thing the villains brought in. He made a mental note to keep a closer eye on Midoriya after all this. We could argue that these were extenuating circumstances, Nezu said quietly. I think the board could be convinced. But we must be a united front. The heroes continued their conversation, discussing the thing the villains had brought with them to the attack. Tuning them out, Mirio bit the inside of his cheek. Midoriya had killed 7 people. A little doubting voice in the back of his head tried to keep dismissing the facts, but he had to face reality. Midoriya had killed 7 people. Midoriya, who trains with him twice a week and makes jokes about anything and everything with a completely straight face. Midoriya, who says when wrestling, no forbidden moves, except the forbidden move, as if he's in some sort of dramatic fight for honor and glory. Midoriya, who he's come to think of as family. Midoriya, who he sometimes thinks would have been a better successor than himself. Midoriya, who killed 7 people. It's hard to reconcile the two. He doesn't like that they're the same person. Usually, he likes hero meetings. They make him feel responsible. But right now, he would rather be anywhere else. An empty and dark house has never seemed so inviting. Izuku wheeled his chair up to the stairs, wondering for a moment how he was supposed to get up them. On shaky legs, he stood, grabbing the railing with one hand, and the chair with the other, dragging it roughly behind himself as he pulled himself up the stairs. Be careful, Spawnling, Behemoth thought, jumping up onto the wall beside Izuku, tail twitching, and smacking Izuku in the side of the head a few times. Do not injure yourself further. I'm trying, Izuku said through gritted teeth. I'm just tired. You will sleep tonight? Yes. Yeah. Izuku stopped at the top of the stairs, wiping the sweat on his brow away with the back of a bandaged hand. Ironically, sleep is something I dream of. You can joke, you are fine. Behemoth leapt off the wall, landing at Izuku's feet. Even when seated, the top of his head reached past Izuku's knees. Is the door unlocked, or is there a spare key? Behemoth huffed, his whiskers flattening against his face. He didn't enjoy doing this, but he knew the house was locked, and there was no key. Look away from me, little Izuku. Okay. Izuku looked up and away without question, not bothering to close his eyes. There was a sudden stench burning ozone and a gust of wind that wrapped around his ankles and up his shins. Instinctively, he looked down, only to see nothing around him. The cat was gone. Behemoth. Izuku looked around, spinning in a circle as he did. Behemoth, where did you go? A thump from inside the house caught his attention, with another thud coming from the door. With a creak, the door slowly swung inward, a massive paw pulling it back into the darkness. How did? Do not concern yourself with details. Was that your quirk? Izuku was too tired to get excited, but that was amazing. How did you get in there? Was it teleporting? Shadow travel? What do you mean, little Spawnling? I was always in there. Behemoth cocked his head to the side, heading into the dark and cold house. I'm too tired for this. Izuku trudged into the house, the door closing behind him. The only thing he knew right now was that he needed to sleep. But the cat certainly had not always been in there. He straightened the wheelchair back out, sitting into it heavily. The human returned to his homeland in such a hurry. He left many things behind, Behemoth thought, leading Izuku through the house. As they passed through the kitchen, still stocked with dry goods and a few appliances, Izuku paused, looking at one of the drawers. There's a secret compartment in this guy's kitchen drawer, Izuku said, wheeling closer and taking a better look. He pulled open the drawer, removing it entirely and flipping it over. There was a small latch on the bottom, and he undid it, a small ring with 2 layers foreign letters, and a third in the center with odd symbols, most likely that language's numbers, engraved on its surface. Is this a spy ring? He should be terrified. But the man who used to live here had lived in this neighborhood long before Izuku and Inko had moved in. He wasn't with any of the usual shadow agencies. Whoever he was a legitimate spy, it seemed. Oh my god, was this guy in? Izuku racked his brain, thinking about the man's accent. Something Slavic, and his thoughts hadn't been in Japanese. There was only one counterintelligence agency that he could remember from that general region. The KGB. The KGB has not existed for over 300 years. Izuku set the drawer aside, the ring secure in his hands. He turned the top third of the ring, his eyes widening at the motion. This was just like those old movies. The KGB not existing for 300 years is the perfect cover for the KGB, Izuku said excitedly, holding onto the ring as if it was some holy relic. Behemoth just blinked twice before turning and trotting back out of the kitchen. He had better things to do, such as a nap on the chair in the living room. The bedroom is down the hall to the left. There should be some clothes left in the closet, he thought, almost aggressively. Right, Izuku said, still focused on the ring. It was simple, unlike any sort of spy gear he had seen while in the project. Almost every Japanese agency preferred high-tech, intricate designs. A decoder ring was just a classic piece of spy hardware. After all, any aficionado of conspiracy or the lone gunman knows that spies are still active worldwide. Izuku put the ring on his thumb, the only finger large enough to wear it, before returning the drawer to its place. He was keeping the ring, a piece of spy memorabilia he could brag about to himself. He gripped the handrails of his chair, giving the kitchen one more once-over. There was a coffee maker on the countertop, a third full bag of coffee grounds rolled shut next to it. A bright light in this dark day he had been shoved into. Wheeling out of the room, he kept looking around, keeping an eye out for any more secret compartments. He headed down the hall, seeing only one door to the left. That one must be the bedroom. But before he could turn in, a muddled thought caught his attention, piercing through the morphine haze. Left. Hospital. Foolish. How? C. And no guards. RLE. Idiots. If he gets caught, I'll be in. Don't think about that. The thoughts faded in and out, but Izuku had no doubt who they belonged to. His lip curled up into a sneer before he forced his mind off of the self-centered worry that was whispering in his mind. Of course, she was concerned about herself and not her son. Izuku finished his trek to the bedroom, stopping in the doorway and taking in what he saw. It was very plain, just a single bed, a writing desk with a few cables on the surface in one corner of the room, and a closet with a few sets of clothes hanging within it. There was a shirt on the floor, a clothes hanger still half inside it, and an overturned chair by the desk. The man who lived here had left in a hurry. Crossing the threshold, Izuku stopped the wheelchair beside the bed, standing up with a hiss of pain. Carefully, he climbed onto the bed after giving it a cursory sniff. It didn't smell like death, so it would do. Lifting the covers, he made sure to keep his hand with the IV over the covers. As exhaustion takes over his senses, he can only think of how nice it will be to see everyone he cares about tomorrow. The darkness around him let him slowly shut his eyes, and with a smile on his lips, Izuku fell into a dreamless sleep. In an ancient and scratched-up chair in the living room sat a massive orange cat, eyes trained on the apartment complex across the street. No eyes were upon him, so now was his chance. Closing his eyes, he vanished in a gust of wind and the stench of burning ozone. The Behemoth had errands to run before his human spawnling would be able to leave safely. It's been one of the most stressful days of Detective Tsukachi's life by the time he gets back to his office. Being told he might have to be pulled off the USJ break-in just because he already knew Midori. It's enough to make him wish he had never quit smoking. There's a duffel bag full of a certain student's possessions beside his desk. He can't believe Izuku ran away from the hospital, but at the same time, he should have expected it. Damn it, caffeine boy, he said quietly. Where did you go off to? Naomasa sighs heavily, sitting down at his desk, only to freeze when he realizes his computer is on. What the hell, he thinks aloud, knowing he had turned off the monitor before the meeting. He leaned forward. There was an open Word document with something typed in it. Izuku is safe. You will see him tomorrow. Toshinori can't sleep. His apartment in his agency seems too quiet, too still. He can't stop listening for sounds from the vents. When he came home, he unlocked the windows, hoping the invitation would be enough to make Izuku materialize, climbing up the drain pipes just as he always does. A rustling sound in his study gives him hope, but the smell of burning ozone immediately casts fear and doubt into his heart. Rolling out of his bed, he stumbles down the hall, flicking on the light to his study. On his desk is a single paper, a messy scrawl written across it. Your boy is safe. You will see him tomorrow. Toshinori didn't know who had written this, how they had found him, or how they had gotten in. He just hoped it was the truth. Izuku woke up quickly to the first rays of sun on his face, snapping to full alertness in seconds. All his memories of the night before flooded his mind. Flashes of violence and gore. Blood on his hands and a grin on his face. Sadistic glee. Fulfilling the purpose he was made for. Running at his eternally dry eyes, he sighed, thinking it might be for the best that he had fled the hospital. Waking up again in a place like that after he had taken a life, he wasn't certain how he would have reacted. Probably like he had the first time. And like at the school, all panic and destruction. He didn't sleep much, but it's better than the past few days. He follows the line of IV to the bag, now nearly empty, the morphine and saline running down to the dregs. That would have to be changed before he did anything else today. With a yawn, he moved to sit up, but the massive warm weight on his torso stopped him. Well, it was more a weight on his entire body with the size of the beast, but it was mostly on his torso. Izuku looked down, raising his eyebrows. He wouldn't say it was cute, for fear of being clawed, but the cat was snoozing quietly, warm and soft in the morning light, purring in his light sleep. Behemoth's mind was a slowly moving river, inhuman thoughts bubbling up on the current every so often. His paws twitched, nerves firing and muscles thrumming as he chased something in his dream. Reaching up with the hand that didn't have a needle in it, he scratched behind one of the cat's massive ears. MRPH, still partially in sleep's embrace, Behemoth butted his head up against the boy's hand, awakening slowly and blinking in disbelief. Oh, little human. Sorry. Izuku moved to pull his hand back, stopping when the cat bumped his head back up against his palm. I did not say to stop. Izuku huffed out a weak laugh, going back to scratching and rubbing the cat's ears. You know, I didn't get to thank you last night. Unnecessary. I know, but still. He shrugged the best he could while lying flat on his back. I don't know how I would have gotten out of the hospital without your help. He snorted, amending his previous statement. I mean, I know that I would be able to get out, but security footage and all that. It would have been nearly impossible for him to have made his escape without the cat's assistance, unless he had just dropped down from the window and hoped for the best. And speaking of the window, how did you manage to get up to the window, anyway? Is that truly important? Izuku frowned slightly before closing his eyes. I guess not, I'm just curious. Behemoth narrowed his eyes, idly wondering if he was supposed to take offense to that or not. After all, curiosity did kill the cat. But perhaps the boy was just curious, no joke intended. Is it part of your quirk? Izuku wondered aloud, unaware that over a minute had passed already, the morphine that had been steadily dripping into his system clouding his mind, warping his place in time. Or just a cat thing? The cat exhaled with a huff, his whiskers drooping minutely. It would be so easy to evade these sorts of questions, but it would be easier to tell the child what he was capable of. As much as secrets are meant to be kept, sometimes one must share a secret. He purred, a rumble deep in his chest, attempting to comfort himself before he froze, the closest thing to what humans called embarrassment flooding his feline brain. He was no longer a kitten, self-soothing was unnecessary. Behemoth, Izuku prompted, tapping at the side of the cat's face gently. He wrinkled his nose at the funny feeling of the cat's whiskers tickling his fingers through the thick bandages wrapped around them. You okay? I am fine, little Izuku. His tail swished, thumping against Izuku's leg. I should tell you the truth of my ability. It is simply most convenient if you are aware. Okay. Izuku thinks that he understands. After all, he told Aizawa-sensei the truth simply because it was easier than dodging questions for the next 3 years. The cat sighed, closing his eyes. My abilities used to be a single one, but it was fractured in the laboratory. Jumpstart, Izuku asked, his voice quiet. So if Netsu was Subject Alpha and Behemoth was Zeta, then they were the two success stories of Jumpstart. The only surviving subjects. Yes, the mutagenic properties split my ability into 3 pieces. The easiest to observe is what you humans call telepathy. Izuku frowned, thinking about how the cat could speak in others' minds, but not read them, nearly opposite of his own. Isn't that more? One-way intuitive cognitive telepathy. The cat huffed, the closest to a laugh he was able to make. I see you have done your research. His thoughts sounded almost amused, his black eyes closing halfway. Izuku would have rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, but his hand was busy scratching behind the cat's ears. I couldn't find a proper definition for mine. It's sort of a combination of retro and intuitive cognition. So one-way retro-intuitive cognitive telepathy, I guess. After all, it wasn't just reading thoughts, but also memories and ideas. That is a mouthful. But yes, you are correct about mine. What are the other 2? One is similar to your own, an unsettling aura, caused not by radiation, but by some sort of natural vibrational frequency. And the other, the cat extended his claws slightly, the tips pricking into Izuku's skin before he retracted them. I call it blink, but the laboratory technicians called it Schrödinger, a form of teleportation or phasing when unobserved. An aspect of this ability is always knowing when I am being watched. Izuku blinked, barely containing a snicker. That is deeply comedic, you know. I am aware of the comedy in the name. The cat stood, stepping off of the boy and jumping off the edge of the bed. Prepare yourself for school. Behemoth flicked his tail towards the end of the bed before leaving the bedroom, seating himself in the hall and beginning to groom himself. Izuku sat up, stretching his sleep-stiff muscles. He scratched his cheek, freezing when he felt warm metal on his face. He looked down, excitement flaring through him when he saw the ring on his thumb was still there. It had stayed on during his sleep, rotating a few letters from the movement. He turned the top layer, raised letters rubbing against his fingertips, rubbing at his dry eyes. Izuku looked at the newest addition to the room. There's a bag on the end of his borrowed bed, and a quick rummage through it showed it was full of his things. A spare uniform, shoes, eye drops, his medications. There's bite marks and cat fur all over everything. Even the lint roller's sticky sheets are coated in hair. Abstractly he knows the fur is orange in color, but he doesn't quite remember orange, blue like the sky, and red like apples or tomatoes, green like grass or the treetops, and gray like nearly half of the city, but orange escapes his memory. Yellow, he remembered only in flashes. The only shades he could recall were the yellow of a legal pad, and the bright burning of the sun. And red, he remembered the color quite well. It had been everywhere, after all. Anything affiliated with heroes had the color splashed across it. Izuku shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He doesn't like to think of how long it will take before he forgets certain shades and colors. Once his brain began to replace color with different shades of gray, he had begun to panic, wondering if it would spread to his memory. It hadn't, but his memory had never been perfect in the first place. With a quiet internal sigh, Izuku began to get himself ready, unsure of what the day would hold for him. His chair slowly rolling to a halt, Izuku glared over the crowd surrounding the front gates of UA. He didn't know what he had expected, but this was getting old, because really, again, he glanced at the cat that had stuck by his side the entire way here. Did you know about this? He asked, already knowing the answer would be no. Behemoth just blinked balefully at him, not even responding, only smacking his tail against the back of Izuku's hand. Thankfully it was the one that didn't have the IV in it. Right, whatever, Izuku said, moving to adjust his sunglasses before remembering he wasn't wearing them. Just a bandage around his head and over his eyes to prevent eye contact. What the hell am I supposed to do here? He muttered, knowing there was no way in hell that he could sneak past the way he had gotten used to doing. And he couldn't jump over them. And there were too many trucks with tall broadcasting equipment parked around the edge of the crowd to make the jump safely anyway. Drumming his fingers against the armrests of the chair, Izuku raised his eyebrows, a lopsided grin on his face as an idea came to him. The trucks were the key. All that delicate equipment in such an easily movable package. Even with his injuries, lifting a half-ton would be beyond easy. Hell, he could do it with one hand if he was at his peak. He wheeled over to the closest van, pushing himself out of his chair and pressing his flat palms on its side and rocking it slightly. Taking a step back, Izuku pieced together a quick plan, grabbing onto his chair and dragging it behind him. He shuffled towards the front of the van and placed his bandaged hands onto the bumper, bracing himself before shoving it back with full force. The van slammed backwards, ramming into the van behind it, the alarms of both vehicles blaring from the sudden jolt. Izuku dropped back into his chair, quickly wheeling around the crowd as they shifted to face the line of vans, the two alarms shrieking loud enough to set off another van's alarm. He pushed himself faster, Behemoth bounding alongside him, the two passing through the gates and onto the campus. Izuku took his hands away from the handrums, letting his built-up momentum carry him forward. He looked back when he heard hysterical laughter, grinning crookedly when he saw Present Mike holding onto the wall for support as he pointed and laughed at the media crews scrambling around their beeping and honking vans. Amazing. Yamato wiped at his eyes, snorting as he tried and failed to swallow down his laughter. He waved one hand in the direction of the distraction. I didn't see anything. Yeah. Izuku nodded, the pressure in his chest shifting slightly when he saw in memories and surface thoughts how Present Mike had supported what he had done at the USJ. He didn't know how he felt about that. Good. Validated. Concerned for the hero's sanity. Izuku looked deeper into the hero's thoughts, the morphine haze making it almost a struggle, but it was worth it to learn what he did. And what the hell, Cementos, stopping a home invasion? If Present Mike was crazy, Cementos was completely insane. But knowing he has people on his side, it feels good. He would have to get them both something in thanks. Get out of here, Midoriya, the hero finally said. Go get to class. I'll see you in English. Why yeah, right. Izuku snapped out of his daze, pushed the wheels of his chair, heading to the ramp beside the stairs to the main entrance. When he reached the door, he paused, looking down to the cat at his side. Ready? He asked, one hand on the door. Nearly, Behemoth thought before leaping up into Izuku's lap and folding his paws underneath himself. Now I am ready, little Izuku. Izuku pushed the door open, wheeling inside and heading towards his class. The few people in the halls moved as soon as they saw him, the bandages and wheelchair attention grabbing. He made people uncomfortable in a different way than he usually did. But that discomfort was offset almost immediately once people saw the cat settled in his lap. Their thoughts turned from nervousness and concern to fawning adoration and a Toscan. He ignored the muddled wave of minds and turned down the hall only to stop and stare blankly ahead. Shit, he grumbled. This was one of the worst obstacles he could come across while in a wheelchair. Stairs. How could he forget the stairs? He only went down them every day. He could drag himself out of the chair and struggle down the stairs with all the dignity and grace of a deer being launched from a cannon. Or, Izuku glanced back behind him before wheeling forward and jerking the wheel back quickly, popping the front casters up and off the ground. Or he could make a horrible mistake and start his day off right. Do not. The cat hissed as soon as the chair rose, the cat's chest rumbling with irritation. Behemoth flexed his paws, his claws digging into Izuku's skin. Do, Izuku countered, moving to let himself careen wildly down the stairs. You will fall and injure yourself, the cat warned. I can control a wheelchair better than you think, Izuku informed the cat. This isn't my first rodeo. Izuku remembered the early days in the program. The other kids and himself wheeling about and racing each other. He never got into the same level of demolition derby action as the older kids, but he knew how to handle himself when it came down to it. With a grin, Izuku pushed himself forward, the casters coming off the floor as he jerked the chair back in a wheelie, gritting his teeth with each jolt and jerk as he cathetted down the stairs. Behemoth yowled and hissed, digging his claws into Izuku's legs, ears flattened back against his skull. Chirt Vosmi, Yob T Voyumat. Izuku laughed as he hurtled down the stairs with no control, feeling as if he was in command of himself for the first time since the events leading up to the USJ. He snorted and ran a bandaged hand through his hair as he rolled down the hall towards the classroom. The chair carried on by its gained momentum. I don't know what you just said, but watch your language. You cannot watch language. Hey, that's my line. Izuku shrugged, grinning down at the cat. And come on, start the day with a mistake, right? You are a menace. Ehi. Behemoth continued to grumble in his head and hiss out loud until Izuku rolled to a stop outside of his classroom door. Are you going to open it? Maybe. Izuku rubbed at his eyes through the bandage before he turned his hidden gaze down to the cat on his lap. Is it too late to stow away on a fishing boat and move to Australia? Oil rigs always needed able bodies. Yes, damn, Izuku sighed, looking through the closed door. Everyone was inside, and his friends, the people he cared about, were thinking about him. He knew how they would react as soon as he opened the door. He hated attention and noise, but he still reached out with bandaged fingers and slid the door open slowly. Even before he entered the room, a loud shout rang out over the escalating chaos. Holy shit, he's alive. Shinsu, watch your language. How did you not die? Hey freak, how did you do it? Everyone calm down. Izuku wheeled carefully to his desk, not missing the way those who had been close enough to see him fight from the entrance. Those who hadn't been teleported away moved out of his way quicker than the others. The boy with the tail, the one with the strange bone structure in his arms, a few others. Their thoughts were apprehensive, but not judgmental. The way one fears but doesn't condemn a beast that lashes out at an enemy to protect itself. Midoriya. Ada waved from Izuku's desk, pulling out his chair and moving it against the wall. He rambled on as Izuku rolled towards him, not even noticing that Shinsu, Uraraka, and Tsuyu were all talking over him. Should you really be back in class so soon with such serious injuries? Izuku opened his mouth to answer, only to be overpowered by the rest of them. You fainted and we thought, why did you fight that guy? Ada froze, turning his head so quickly Midoriya was surprised he didn't snap his neck. He did what? Midoriya fought that guy with all the hands. What? A loud burst of crackles and pops rattled the window in its frame. What the hell did you do, freak? Izuku shrunk down in his wheelchair, looking down at Behemoth for help. The cat only purred, climbing off of his lap and onto the desk. You are on your own now, human spawnling. Don't leave me, Izuku whispered almost desperately. Behemoth ignored him, hopping from desk to desk, tail swishing dramatically. Is that a cat? Why do you have a cat? He's my. Izuku panicked, searching for an answer. Bro. Ther. That was the wrong answer. The classroom all but exploded in sound, questions bouncing off the walls and shaking the windows. How can you have a cat for a brother? This doesn't make sense. He's an only child. Here kitty, kitty kitty. Did this cat just tell me to go to hell? I've never been more confused than I am now. The phrase having kittens isn't supposed to be literal. This class is loud as hell. The thought came from somewhere outside the classroom. The door opening with a sharp snap, the sound almost unable to be heard over the questions. Whoever was about to enter froze, staring down as the massive cat passed them by. What the shit was that? Was that a fucking cat? Whose cat was that? Behemoth retreated from the noise and human smells, curling up as the door closed and blinking out of existence. Settle down, kids, and get yourself seated. Snipe strode across the front of the classroom, spurs jingling with each step. The hero continued to talk, but his thoughts ran perpendicular to his spoken words. I'm gonna be taking over your homeroom until Eraserhead is out of the hospital. Before you ask, he should be out and back teaching in a couple of days. As he talked, his eyes roamed the classroom, the man gazing at his target with an intensity he didn't know could actually be detected. There's that little murderer, he thought, eyes narrowing behind the mask. His trigger finger twitched. Don't matter if he's just a kid, he's still a killer. He paused, looking over the kid again. A kid in a wheelchair. Anon in 4. Shit, should he even be out of the hospital? Damn, and I said he should be in prison. Still think he should be. Gonna have to keep an eye on him. Now I know you kids are gonna be excited about this, the hero said, somehow missing the dawning apprehension on everyone's faces. But we've got the sports festival in less than 2 weeks. Hagakure laughed loudly, the sound nearly hysteric as she broke the silence. Oh, I almost forgot this was a school. She continued to cackle madly, gripping at her hair as she slowly calmed down. I was starting to think this place was trying to kill us. Last man standing becomes a hero. Or something. Izuku just had to shake his head at the invisible girl's thoughts. Her leaps and conclusion hopping was certainly entertaining. They would have to have a real talk outside of class sometimes. Maybe she also read Conspiracy. And if she doesn't, she really should. He'll leave her a copy on her windowsill at 3. She'll love it. Uraraka threw her hands up in the air, the normally cheerful personality overwhelmed with frustration. The sports festival. Why, haven't we been through enough? Hagakure twisted around in her seat, still cackling with laughter as she yelled, what is the limit? Snipe shifted awkwardly, not having expected this sort of reaction. Well, Izuku spoke quietly, not even realizing he had cut off Snipe's explanation. It's a show of strength, letting the enemy know that they weren't successful, and let the public think they can't be, threatened. That wasn't the word he wanted, but the morphine had his head more clouded than he had thought. Okay, good point, Shinsu shrugged, the look on his face conflicted. He didn't like that Izuku made sense, that it was a good point. His friend had been injured making that point. Hagakura stayed turned backward and sat up on her knees, and she crossed her arms over her chest. But everyone else could only tell because of her uniform shifting. Just because it's a good point doesn't mean I have to like it, she grumbled, glaring so intensely Izuku thought he could feel it. Uraraka nodded emphatically. Yeah, what she said. Shinsu dragged a hand through his gravity-defying hair. Don't know why they need a show of strength, unless it's for the public. After all, for people claiming to want to kill All Might, the villains didn't even get close to him. Tsuyu narrowed her eyes. I wonder why. Shinsu and Tsuyu both just turned and stared at Izuku. Izuku slumped in his wheelchair, ignoring his friend's judgmental and worried stares. What? It's simple tactics, he said with a shrug, words pouring out without him able to stop them. Sever the head of the snake and all that. Divide and conquer, etc. You make sense and I don't like that. Hitoshi ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head and not even trying to hide his crooked grin. Just go to sleep or something. I'm sure Snipe won't mind. Way ahead of you, Izuku mumbled, leaning forward on his desk and folding his arms for a makeshift pillow. He lowered his head, closing his eyes and slipping into the warm embrace of sleep for the second time in 12 hours. G-Night, love you. His consciousness faded and the world drifted out of sync. Thoughts melted away to mere hissing whispers and only the barest outlines of reality remained. A froggish croak echoed through the haze. Did Midoriya just say he loved us? He sure did, Shinsu snorted, his chest lightening and his face burning. Wow, Tsuyu looked away from the now snoring Midoriya. That's nice. You can't seriously be considering letting him sleep through all his classes. SHH, let him sleep. He said he loves us. But what about? SHHH. Yeah, love's more important than grades. SHHH. There's a creeping tingle of fear crawling across Nezu's skin. His whiskers are flattened against his snout and his paws tremble. With a tentative sniff, he picks up a scent he hasn't smelled in a long time. Something he hasn't had to be afraid of. Cat. He stands, and as he passes around his desk, there's a gust of wind and the stench of burning ozone. He whips back around, black eyes wide as he takes in the massive beast grooming itself in his chair. It's huge, easily the size of an American bobcat or Eurasian lynx, but its shape is all wrong. And the color, a flat, almost artificial orange. No highlights, lowlights, or second tones. An oversized paw tugs on a drawer, pulling it open. Nezu could only stare as the creature leaned down and pulled out 2 badges in its teeth. A visitor pass and an elevator key. Nezu doesn't blink, backing away slowly. His instincts screamed at him to run, to find the closest small tunnel and scurry away. Climb into a vent and hide until the threat was gone. Danger, 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 run, run, run. The monster stood, front paws planted firmly on the desktop. One paw knocked aside the stack of folders filled with student files waiting to be read. Nezu hopped back, his fur on his spine and puffing up in an attempt to make himself look bigger. The beast huffed, watching him unblinkingly. A cat this large shouldn't exist, shouldn't have been able to get on campus without an alarm going off, shouldn't be here. Stop panicking, foolish rodent. Nezu froze, a fresh wave of instinctual terror rolling over him. He was hallucinating, he had to be. After all, this was a scene pulled directly from his worst nightmares. Nightmares and bad dreams that only got worse once his intelligence was let him put words to concepts. Primal fear repeating. This just wasn't possible, it couldn't be. MRPH, the cat grumbled, shaking its massive head. Emryo, how did you get in? The front gate. The cat's tail swished slowly from side to side, and Nezu stared, his heart hammering against his ribs, waiting for the pounce. It never came. Quit your cowering, it does not suit you. The cat took a slight step forward onto the desk, its ears flicking back and flattening against its skull when Nezu flinched. Have some dignity, rodent. The beast swishes its tail back and forth, the flat orange a warning of danger, of a death filled with violence and pain. I will return. The cat leaped over the desk out of Nezu's sight, and there was a gust of wind and the stench of ozone. He scrambled around the desk, fear still thrumming in his veins even though the beast was gone. After all, it had said it would return. Return for what, exactly? Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.